Hello there, people, and welcome to another episode of Flight Chat, the listener feedback show for the Flightcast. My name is Ray. Thank you so much for joining me. Lots to get into because there was no episode last weekend with respect to the holiday. Father's Day was last weekend, so took that weekend off. So got some emails to catch up on from last week and some more new ones from this week. There is a decent amount to cover. We are, 20 days away? 20 days away from the release of Superman, so quite a bit of conversation surrounding that and many other things, watch updates, etc. You know what you sent in, so let's, without further ado, dive headfirst into the feedback session. And we begin with this week's gaggle of emails from Mr. John R. He starts off with his first email that he sent last week, titled A Pick, an Apology, and Super Sentai. All right, let's see. First, he says, I didn't realize I sent 7 emails last week. While I'm sure you're not mad about it, I'll try to limit my emails to 3, unless there's breaking news, then 4, but that's it. I want to be considerate of your time. Well, we'll start that next week, John, because I think combining last week and this week, you definitely sent more than 3 or 4. But either way, it's all good. He's got 3 quick questions before he gets into his scenario of the week. Again, he sent this last week. We're starting our catch-up. He says, considering how much of a sports fan you are, were you ever on any sports teams in school? I was on some youth basketball teams in elementary school, briefly tried soccer, he says. I joined a wrestling team in middle school for 2 weeks, but it was tough. I had phys ed and after-school wrestling. It was difficult since I was out of shape, so I joined the high school wrestling team in my junior year when I was no longer in phys ed. All right. I was a part of the team for 75% of the season, but the commutes to different schools, meets on the weekend, the beatdowns I took were not while I liked some people and lost 20 pounds. It took a huge toll on me physically and mentally, and this was the time I didn't have medication for my neurodivergency, so I would complain a lot, he says, to the point where people found me annoying and I did embarrassing things. Well, to answer your question, John, I played football. I played football junior and senior year of high school, and I'll be honest, I initially did it, like, my motivation for it was very, like, kind of self-centered and superficial because I wanted a varsity jacket. Like everybody had, like not everybody, but a lot of people in my grade, my class rather, had varsity jackets and they looked cool. They looked awesome. Well, you need a letter in order to do that, right? And I liked football. It wasn't that I wasn't a fan of football, but that was primarily my motivation for doing it initially. But I remember when I got into it, it then turned into a point of personal pride because I wasn't very athletic at all. And truthfully, there were people like I remember what it was like after 2 years of doing it junior and senior year. I asked one of my buddies or one of my teammates, I said, how long did you think I was going to make it? And he said, I thought you were going to quit after the first day of pads because it's physical, right? I mean, practices are physical. And fortunately, I never like severely injured myself at all. I wasn't a good player. I mean, I was a third string wide receiver in a wing T offense, but I mean, it was still fun, and there was a level of respect that I do feel I gained from a lot of the guys on that team because I did stick it out, and I wasn't just there, to take up a warm body. I was actually somebody that was, got into the spirit of it and, gave what I could. It wasn't a lot, wasn't a ton. I barely saw the field, unless we were up by a ton of points or down by a ton of points. And we weren't very good junior year, but we were a lot better senior year when we switched out our coaches and got a whole new coaching staff and won the city championship, won our division, got to the playoffs for the first time in school history, won a playoff game. Like it was pretty fun. It was a hell of a lot of fun, truthfully, now that I think back on it, to be honest with you. And it was a lot of work. It was a hell of a lot of work. I'm probably in somewhat better shape now as far as musculature and like working out and whatnot than I was back then, but we're talking over 20 years, man. This is 2001 was my senior year. Graduated. I'm class of '01. But yeah, I wasn't somebody that complained. I really didn't complain at all, to be honest with you, because I just looked at it as this was something that I accepted the challenge. And fortunately, I did have people in my corner, people that helped me out, people that respected, what me getting into the challenge. I probably did earn the respect of a lot of guys that didn't necessarily think one way or the other about me at that time. And, certainly the respect of coaches who, like I could have quit, I could have done, packed it in, did whatever, but no, it is a point of personal pride. And some of those, like our head coach, he still sends me happy birthday cards every year, even though he's moved on and whatnot. I had a great amount of respect for him and in his retirement and whatnot, and respect for him, when he coached us. Seriously, so it was an awesome experience, to be honest with you, and I don't regret it whatsoever that I did it for those first 2 years, or for those last 2 years rather, junior and senior year. I still have, obviously, the varsity jacket. I don't wear it, obviously, not at this age, but it's still in my personal effects. I'll always treasure it, always cherish it, because it actually did become an accomplishment more than just having a cool ass jacket to wear. It was something that I could say I did that. I absolutely did that. I absolutely stuck it out, and I absolutely was part of that team. So yeah, that's I guess I think that answers the question fully. I did. I played football in high school. So on to John's second question for his first email. He asks if DCEU Peacemaker has cameos of DCEU actors before entering the DCU door. Do you think that would make most Snyder cultists happy knowing that the universe still exists, or just some? I don't think anything would make Snyder cultists happy whatsoever, not even what they want. And I've said this for the last couple of years, right? When they were part of Release the Snyder Cut, that movement with the rest of us rational fans, like they still had conditions and they were still being particular and they were still being miserable. And even after Zack Snyder's Justice League was released, that wasn't enough for them. And I warned people of that. I said, this cult is not going to get their satisfaction whatsoever from anything that is achieved, rationally and logically, logistically, because their brand is misery. Their goal is misery. So there's absolutely nothing whatsoever short of them being miserable that will gain them any satisfaction, that will make any of them happy. That's why they're cultists. Cultists are nothing if not always miserable. And they always need something to complain about. They always need something to be angry about, whether that's with first world problems like, movies, TV, and other sort of media, or whether it's real world problems, like what's going on in the world now. The cultists that we see in the world today, in the country that we live in today, John, same thing. They're never happy unless they're miserable about something, unless they have something to bitch about, unless they have something to complain about. So absolutely not. There isn't a single DCEU cameo whatsoever in Peacemaker that would make them even remotely happy. They are forever doomed to be miserable until they finally break the fever of the cult that they're in. And if they don't, then they'll die miserable and pathetic. Seriously. That's the bottom line of it, to be honest with you. All right, John's third question for his first email. Did you hear about the WB Discovery split? I wonder what this means. I did hear about it, John, and I would have talked about it on the main show if not for, we had there was the James Gunn article the interview that I wanted to go over this past week, and then the week before that was the Squadcast Media announcement. So I haven't gotten a chance to really dive into that news, but here, I'll bring it up here now. This is a Hollywood Reporter piece that came out. This was well over a week ago, almost 2 weeks ago. Warner Brothers Discovery to split into two streaming studios global networks. They made it official, plans to separate the company in a tax-free transaction into two publicly traded companies, enabling each to maximize its potential, they said. The streaming and studios company will consist of Warner Brothers Television, Warner Brothers Motion Picture Group, DC Studios, HBO, and HBO Max, as well as their legendary film and television libraries. The second business, Global Networks, will include such entertainment, sports, and news television brands around the world as CNN, TNT, Sports in the US, and Discovery, free-to-air channels across Europe, and digital products such as the profitable Discovery Plus streaming service and Bleacher Report. David Zaslav will serve as president and CEO of Streaming and Studios. Gunnar Wiedenfels, CFO of Warner Brothers Discovery, will serve as president and CEO of Global Networks. Both will continue in their present roles at Warner Brothers Discovery until the separation. The split is expected to be completed by mid-2026, subject to closing and other conditions, including final approval by the Warner Brothers Discovery Board, receipt of tax opinions, and/or private letter ruling from the Internal Revenue Service with respect to the tax-free nature of the transaction for U.S. federal income tax purposes and market conditions. This is from the Warner Brothers Discovery press release about it. It also says the cultural significance of this great company and the impactful stories it has brought to life for more than a century have touched countless people all over the world. It's a treasured legacy will proudly continue in this next chapter of our celebrated history. That's from Zaslav himself. He also added, by operating as two distinct and optimized companies in the future, we are empowering these iconic brands with a sharper focus and strategic flexibility they need to compete most effectively in today's evolving media landscape. And then Wiedenfeld said it would invigorate each company by enabling them to leverage their strengths and specific financial profiles that would also allow each company to pursue important investment opportunities and drive shareholder value. At Global Networks, He says they'll focus on further identifying innovative ways to work with distribution partners to create value for both linear and streaming viewers globally while maximizing our network assets and driving free cash flow. Apparently, top executives are discussing the planned separation, or they did during a Monday morning conference with Wall Street analysts. They said 3 years ago the very foundation of how, when, and where audiences engage with content was undergoing fundamental change. As both organizations contemplated their futures, one truth became clear. To successfully adapt, transform, and lead in the entertainment industry of tomorrow, we needed to come together to draw on each other's strengths. And while the work since that merger has been challenging at times, ultimately we succeeded in strengthening each element of our business. That's questionable. But he says, by bringing together the Discovery and Turner networks, this is Zaslav again, we've created a leader in live and unscripted television with a truly global footprint operating at industry-leading margins. We've transformed our direct-to-consumer offering as HBO Max, oh, yes, HBO Max again, is now one of the world's few global and meaningfully profitable streaming services, and by fusing creative brilliance with operational excellence, we've made strong progress in returning our film and television studios to industry leadership, yada, yada, yada. At any rate, so what does this mean? Well, ultimately, it means that CNN, TNT, and Discovery, and all the sports stuff is separated from HBO and Warner Brothers and DC Studios. That's truthfully what it means, right? So it's almost like there's a separation of the studio projects and the live television projects, if you will, right? Because they were all together and they're all still together at this point. So like TNT and TBS and whatever else is on cable television is still merged together, and now they're just separating the two into basically a like a scripted programming, or not a scripted programming, but like a movies and television, right? Movies and TV is separate, and movies, TV, and streaming is separated from live television and sports. That's essentially what it is, and that also would include news products, right? Because CNN is included in that as well. So it's essentially, the way I look at it, John, it looks to me like it's the same as Fox's separation. You know how when Disney bought them, there was the consideration, or the stipulation rather, that they couldn't bring over Fox News. They had to sell off the 22 regional sports networks that they own, which is how they got in the hands of Sinclair Broadcast Group, through Bally's, and now Diamond Sports Group, which is now FanDuel in that regard, right? So it's really just separating the two. And what it means is, I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot for our purposes. Truthfully, I mean, maybe deals are still going to happen as far as, well, okay, when a DCU movie comes out, there's still going to be a deal made to put it on TNT and to put it on, TBS or wherever else, like that type of deal. But I don't think for content purposes it means a whole lot for us. One could argue that it does make Warner Brothers easier to sell down the road, right? Because they don't have to worry about DOJ approval, as horrible as the DOJ is now, but they don't have to worry about DOJ approval for stuff like, well, what about CNN and TNT? The stuff that Disney had to worry about when they bought Fox doesn't have to be worried about now by anybody else in the future who would want to buy Warner Brothers. So, that would be something to behold with respect to that business-wise, at least the way that I see it, right? Because it's either Warner Brothers or it's global networks. Global networks can be sold off separately, one would think, from the streaming and studios company, if you will. So that's, I think, primarily what the difference is that we might see, with respect to our considerations. So that's as much as I have to say with respect to that, I think. But yeah, I did hear about it, just hadn't got a chance to bring it up on the main show. Thank you for bringing it up here. Okay, so the scenario that he brought up today, what is it? The Super Sentai. He said, so while I did say I wouldn't do a scenario on a what if an unadapted Sentai series team can be used, I can still do a what if for Power Rangers, technically. This team you see down here, he sent a picture, as well as all adapted from a Sentai series, except the 5 core members of Gosai Sentai Dai Ranger suits were not used, other than the White Ranger, Kiba Ranger. So this basically is a what if scenario with respect to the Power Rangers. And this, which one is this? Okay, so this is just looking at the picture, because I see the White Ranger, I see the Blue Ranger, red, yellow, green. Okay, I don't know what grouping this is. Well, I do know the picture that he has below. I do know that grouping. That's when Tommy was the White Ranger, and the Jason wasn't the Red Ranger. He was gone by that point. But Billy was still there, right? Kimberly was still the Pink Ranger. So I know that group. So I think he's talking about that grouping. The what if scenario is, he says, I don't know if you remember the episode where Zed creates the evil Dark Rangers. Oh, that's what it was. Okay, that's what the first picture of it. where there were 5 new classmates and they were like the edgier versions of the core 5. Those costumes were horrible. So yeah, I'm going back to a what if episode again, but it could lead to future events. Okay, I mean the costumes were definitely they were slimmer. I don't know if they were horrible. I mean the helmets were different, but either way, okay, this is from the Zedit, so this is before Zeo. Okay, Zeo was the last Power Rangers series that I actually watched. That was when it was airing. But he says instead of creating the dirt cheap cosplay version of Dark Rangers, Zed sends Squat and Babu to Eltar Zordon's home planet and tells them that there are 5 ancient Ranger morphers and then take them. And just like Tommy, the 5 Bizarro teens are captured and become the Dark Rangers with the Die Ranger outfits. Oh, and either Squat or Babu discover a 6th morpher and they take it themselves. The multi-part episode is also where Tommy loses his Green Ranger powers for good, or does he says. And the original 5 fight the evil 5. Tommy morphs one more time after fighting Goldar in the field, and the 6 Power Rangers defeat the 5 Dark Rangers. Squat or Babu drop the 6th morpher, and Tommy retrieves it and gives it to Alpha, but for some reason, the White Ranger morpher is locked from the morphing grid and can't be used, and for several episodes, Tommy is absent like he was in the show until Alpha figures out how to unlock the morpher. Zed seemingly destroys the other 5 Die Ranger morphers. In the Die Ranger Sentai, they use a different object to morph just like all the other Sentai teams, but for the sake of Power Rangers and for the White Ranger to morph like the other members, this makes the most sense to just use the morphers, aka Dino Bucklers, and it also explains how the hell Alpha and Zordon were able to make a friggin' new Power Ranger from scratch like they did in the series. The only drawback to this scenario is they would have to rely on using more American footage than Japanese footage, but man, it still would have been cool. They mostly focused on relying on American footage for the team in later episodes, so they really missed a big opportunity to have a cool fight and pay tribute to the Super Sentai teams they've been using. He also says he was able to purchase a rare White Ranger Kid figure at a toy convention he went to last weekend. He says he might have overspent, was able to knock $1 off, so it was $89. That's a lot. I used Google Lens, he says, to see how much they go for most of the time. It was $100 on other sites he saw, but he did find one that listed it for $35, but the shipping cost was like $30, so maybe he overspent a little. I wonder if that ever happened to you, overspending an item that is, yeah, that's definitely happened. Not for like action figures, but certainly for out of print steelbooks and other Blu-rays, yes, that has definitely happened with respect to overspending. So that's John's what if scenario with respect to the Power Rangers. For those of you that remember all of that, because I don't remember the episode he's talking about. Like, I remember the Ranger groupings, but dude, we're talking 30 years, like 20, 30 years in the past for me. So yeah, I don't quite have that recollection with respect to that, but those of you that are diehard fans, hopefully that what if scenario is something that you can definitely, rattle your brain around. So we'll see about that. But thank you for that. So that's John's first email from last week. Here is the second one. A little bit longer. It says, a response to what constitutes trolling and gatekeeping in my book. Part 1, he says, this is in response from last week, a couple of weeks ago, as to how you separate trolls and gatekeepers from the more rational detractors like Zaki and Black Girl Nerds. Yeah, this was a conversation he and I had on Threads because he had sent me, he talked to me, he was like, be wary of Black Girl Nerds because she's been anti-Snyder in the past. Yes, that's true, and so have Zaki Hassan, but I do put them in a different category than the trolls, to be honest with you, and I explained that why in the last Flight Chat episode. John says, my thing is, I do know Zaki. I've seen him around, and I think there's some political discourse I've agreed with him on. I think for me, there's a few ways someone gets blocked or muted. A, they aren't reoccurringly negative to DC media. I have friends who have told they don't like Snyder's vision for these characters, but we have been able to agree to disagree. My friend who's a Snyder cultist Marvel fanboy, he knows I'm excited for Superman, and we can agree to disagree. B, they can't be tribalist. He says, I blocked someone on Facebook for randomly saying Marvel greater than DC in a post that had nothing to do with DC other than the author is rooting for DC's success in other posts. And C, they can't be bitchy that Man of Steel made me quit watching DC movies or Batman v Superman made me quit watching DC movies. I think I would agree with that largely with respect to all three of those conditions. Yeah, don't be like consistently negative. Don't be tribalist for the sake of tribalism, and yeah, don't bitch about, oh, this ruined my childhood, or I can't watch DC movies anymore because of this one movie. Yeah, that's whiny bullshit. Yes, I agree with just about all those conditions. He says, I had to stop watching people who I used to like. And he brings up Lindsay Ellis as an example. He says, I've dogged on her several times before on this show, but I used to be a fan of her work before she displayed her anti-Snyder cultism. I enjoyed her being Nostalgia Critic's counterpart, the Nostalgia Chick, but when she named Man of Steel arbitrarily the worst film of 2013 and made snide comments towards Snyder on Twitter, including the hating his mom comment, I stopped supporting her. Yes, she's the one that posted on Twitter infamously that she had it on good authority that Zack Snyder hates his mother. Yeah, she's not a good human for that whatsoever. He says, but I still watched her ex-boyfriend slash close friend Todd in the shadows because he's not nearly as negative towards the Snyderverse as she is. Although I did kind of find it annoying when he plugged her material at the end of his most recent videos. I have no plans to read her book. Of course, Nostalgia Critic has been nasty to the Snyderverse, but ever since he saw Zack Snyder's Justice League, he's been nicer about Zack. The minute someone online gets nasty, that's when I block or mute. You know, and not Lindsay Ellis in particular, but some others like Priscilla Page and a few other people that have gotten bigger in like those blogospheres, if you will. They've started to show up in some of the boutique Blu-rays that I've bought because like some of the stuff from like Vinegar Syndrome and Umbrella Entertainment that I've bought, there'll be like essays written, like for Tank Girl or for Super Mario Brothers or other cult classic films, and the essays will be written by those people. And it's one of those cases where I've just got to be like, okay, you know what? These people have gotten bigger and have made a living doing what they're doing, and have notoriety is there. It's the same with like Sean O'Connell at Cinema Blend, right? Like just they're not all, I don't agree with them 100%, and but I have to grin and bear when they have written a piece for something else that I like or something else that I am involved in. It's like, okay, they're real assholes when it comes to Zack Snyder, but I put that there and I don't follow them. I don't pay attention to their work. And if one of their essays happens to pop up in something else that I've bought that has nothing to do with them directly, then I'll just have to grin and bear it in that regard. But yeah, I hear you. Largely don't pay attention to any of them at all. YouTubers. Let's see. He's got a couple here. V Infuso. I have no idea who that is. I don't care how much you like Batman v Superman. That movie was a betrayal, he says. Later made a video essay to why it was such a betrayal, which I didn't watch. Okay. Sounds like a miserable piece of shit. Phantom Strider. He says BVS is the third worst film of 2016. All I can say is I'm done with DC. Good, Phantom. Keep your ass out of the fan base. I don't want to see you come crawling back to kiss James Gunn's ass. If the DCU takes off the way that it is. You said you're done with DC. Stay the hell away. As far as I'm concerned, you don't deserve fandom in that regard. Erod the Blockbuster Buster. I've never heard of any of these silly people. But that person apparently said, the DCEU is on my blacklist along with the Human Centipede movies and Bane Ninja Turtles shortlist, lol. Unless they reboot, I have no plans to watch the DCEU again unless something unprecedented happens, even though he's admitted to watching Justice League and the Suicide Squad after announcing he quit the DCEU after Studio Squad. So he's a hypocrite. Well, they're all hypocrites, and they're all pretty pathetic in the first place. Ian from the Completely Unnecessary podcast. You couldn't pay me to watch Batman v Superman. I hated Man of Steel. Sounds like he's a completely unnecessary person, as far as I'm concerned. Ian, the completely unnecessary human. All right, Movie Bob. Oh, I've heard of Movie Bob. He said Man of Steel is a bad movie and an attempt at an apology for Superman Returns. The DCEU makes terrible, terrible movies. Yeah, Movie Bob, I'm pretty sure, was spoofed. Wasn't he the one that was spoofed in Harley Quinn, the Harley Quinn animated series? That might have been him, or maybe it was somebody else. I don't know. But yeah, Movie Bob, no one to pay attention to. Oh, and this individual you're about to name here, Jeremy Griggs from Geeks and Gamers. Okay, I'm going to read this because there's something I read earlier that's very intriguing about him. He apparently said the Snyder films are terrible movies. 2017 Justice League was tolerable at best, but Batman v Superman is absolutely better than The Last Jedi. He's one of the leaders of the fandom menace, John says, and is mega. So I've tried avoiding him like the plague along with the Quartering, Nerdrotic, and few others, because I initially thought they were just giving valid criticisms to Captain Marvel, but they just seem to marginalize a lot of leading ladies in movies and shows, and when I later found out they were all MAGA, I quit watching them. I remember some of Jeremy's subscribers defending She-Hulk towards them. I thought that was interesting. So Jeremy Griggs is a name that I've heard in passing, John, but I recently read somewhere that apparently there's an extended clip from Superman coming out in a couple of weeks. There's an extended clip of that sequence in the first minute of the big trailer, the 3-minute long trailer, where Lois is interviewing Superman, and apparently there's more to that interview. Like there's more of her grilling him and more of his defensive behavior, if you will. I heard that plus apparently, in the last, one of the most recent TV spots where, the strength TV spot, the one that I posted, I reposted on Threads a couple of days ago, and it released, I think, on Friday. There's a scene where you clearly see kryptonite being used against him, and they're apparently among geeks and gamers and amongst MAGA and nerd MAGA, because they're one and the same, let's be honest, amongst those pathetic, little dick assholes, right? They are really like all in their feelings and upset because this is the weakest Superman we've ever seen, because they've seen him get, bruised, broken, bleeding, getting tossed around, getting thrown into the ground, getting pushed aside, arrested, and all that shit. And so to them, the alpha males, right? Because anybody who calls themselves an alpha male is not actually an alpha. They're probably the biggest beta cucks on this earth. And that would absolutely apply to these people, these excuses for individuals. And you mentioned Nerd Roddick. Oh, I know he's a piece of shit. Absolute misogynistic, low life. Just so many adjectives that I am going to censor myself from saying. But yeah, they're complaining already about this Superman, saying he's too weak and he's too underpowered, and this isn't the strong, manly, masculine American Superman that we were raised on, right? So those people, I mean, beyond toxic, they're a danger to society. They are. They are a danger to the groupthink. Their groupthink and all their toxicity and all their toxic masculinity, absolutely a danger to society, in more ways than one. So yeah, absolutely push them aside. And so John also has some other examples of people who once in a while said they don't like the Snyder films, but he can still watch them, like Dan Morell, who didn't like Man of Steel, BVS, and Justice League, but thought Zack Snyder's Justice League was pretty good. Yeah, definitely a contingent of those people who didn't necessarily care for the theatrically released Snyder Cut films, but did enjoy Zack Snyder's Justice League. And that is the one sad part about, or one of the sad parts about how the DCEU went down, is those are the people that would have like jumped back aboard ship, like had Justice League been, completed theatrically the way that it was originally intended, then they would have seen a lot of that stuff and be like, okay, I get where he was coming from. I may not like what Man of Steel and BVS did, but at least he's, correcting and getting back to, the standard hope and optimism that they, grew up on with Zack Snyder's Justice League, because it would have been it would have been Justice League theatrically released, and that was the case. And of course, he mentions Doug Walker. He also mentions somebody called Clownfish TV that has similar talking points to Phantom Menace, but they're not MAGA. Are you sure? Because if it looks like a duck, talks like a duck, but either way. He says one's male and one's female. They're more critical of both political parties and identify as independent like me, and said they are moderately liberal, seem to be more critical of modern Hollywood as a whole, which I do as well. Well, I'm not going to get into a political discussion here, John, but I don't have much positive to say about independence at this point in time either, at least as far as the whole both sides are bad argument. I'm beyond done with the both sides are bad argument, and anybody that at this point is equating, well, there's no difference between the two political parties, that is a very destructive and delusional individual as far as I'm concerned. And I hope that is not you, John. I hope that now, especially 5 or 6 months into this particular 2025, that you understand that there is a clear, marked difference between the political parties at this point. If not, then we're just going to have to leave it as is, man. And I would just say be very careful what you say going forward with respect to that, politically speaking. So I'll just leave that there. Part 2 of his email. He says, how does tribalism affect my relationship with friends and family? Marvel and DC. The aftermath of BVS reception had made me go into tangents with friends and family into how much I disagreed with critics. One friend even allowed me to do a video project with him about how BS Rotten Tomatoes is and that critics had a bias. Eventually, I had to avoid talking to them about it because I had become too obsessed over it, he says. My family weren't into superheroes all that much. They're pretty general audience. But it was a point of contention with one friend. Back when the campaign for the Snyder Cut came out, he said it would never be made. He thought BVS was garbage anyway and didn't think that Zack Snyder's Justice League would be any better, and I thought that was harsh and there were good things. And I guess because I had regularly talked to him about BVS, he decided to troll me about how The Room was better. Every Marvel film ever made was better. We also had disagreements with real life problems, and I figured it was better to have two separate Facebook accounts, one where we can be friends and one where we're not, so he doesn't get annoyed at my posts, even though I said he can unfollow me, not unfriend me. I wouldn't have made two separate accounts. Screw him. Seriously. I don't have much of a quarter for people like that. And look, handle your friendship and all that is whatever way you will in real life, John, but anybody that has an issue with any of my posts elsewhere, like, they can either unfollow me, or if they feel the need to consistently troll me, they will be blocked, and I will do it unapologetically. And if they come at me in real life like, how dare you block me on Facebook, I will tell them, get the hell out of my face. If you want to be a rational individual again, and if you actually want to be part of my social circle again, then, you can apologize and stop being a dick about it. Because as far as I'm concerned, you expressing a positive opinion about things is better than him expressing and trolling you with a negative opinion. And he needs to earn your respect and trust, not the other way around. So the idea of making another Facebook account just so that he wouldn't be bothered by your posts, that's his problem, not yours. You didn't need to do that. And I would caution you going forward, don't bend yourself over backwards for other people just to accommodate their negative asses. If you're more positive than they are, stay that way and let them be who they're going to be in that regard, to be honest with you. So that's all I would say about that. Now, here's where it's going to get a little tricky here, John, because you talk about political tribalism. And you say, when it comes to politics, I know I'm in the minority. Yes, you are. You said everyone in my family is vote blue no matter who, except me and my dad. My dad's always been more of a swing voter. My mom kind of was too, but everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. Last Airbender joke, but with MAGA. My dad's voted Democrat third party and maybe at one point skipped voting at all different times. I don't know if he ever voted Republican, maybe Reagan, he doesn't remember. I had leaned Democrat until 2020. I now identify as NPP or independent. When it comes to my friends, I have a few that are VBNW, at least one couple who are red voters, and Tammy is apolitical, and I have a few friends that are either apolitical or NPP. Tammy's family leans red, even though she does not. I try not to bring up politics anymore with either my friends or family or her family as well. I also want to thank you and others for not blocking me on social media. I know my being critical to both sides has been a little off-putting from time to time, but I understand where all of you are coming from, and in some ways, maybe some of you get where I'm coming from as well. I will tell you, John, again, like I was saying earlier, it's a lot more difficult to deal with that right now. It really is, because to me, it's not even subjective in terms of the difference between the political parties. So I would caution you a great deal, John, with respect to parroting any type of, apolitical nonsense. And I do consider being apolitical to be nonsensical at this point. I do. I most certainly consider that. There was a time where I might have understood it, but, and that's not to say that the Democratic Party is perfect, but just look at what's going on, man. Like, seriously, the evidence out there front and center. It's unavoidable, especially if you're on social media. There's no room for being apolitical. Being apolitical is largely a big part of how this situation became the way that it is at this point in time, because people decided it would be better to be apolitical on November 5th, not go to the polls, because they weren't excited by either candidate. They couldn't see the writing on the wall, where one was clearly preaching hatred, one was clearly preaching bigotry, one was clearly preaching racism, and vote the other way. Seriously. But no, they decided to issue vote and swing vote, like you said your dad did, and they allowed those issues to persuade them into a neutral category, and now that's largely where we're at. And you know what? If you're part of the burn it all down like group, well, you're going to get your wish. You're going to get your wish, because everything is, breaking down around us. And I refuse to be fatalistic, and I refuse to believe that it's the end of the world, because it isn't. But I do believe there's going to be a lot of casualties. I do believe that there's going to be a lot of, collateral damage, if you will. And all I can tell people is survive, so that you don't become part of that collateral damage as best as you possibly can, and that you're ready to pick up the pieces when all of this comes crashing down, as it really is in front of us in real time. And when the dust settles, it's going to take some time and going to take a lot of people to rebuild that. But that's what we're witnessing. We're witnessing the deconstruction of the republic, if you will, and that's as much politics as I'll really get into in this episode, only because you brought it up, John. But yeah, I would really caution you with the apolitical and independent stuff right now, because we don't want to hear it. And when I say we don't want to hear it, it's not because we're saying, oh, you need to change your opinion. It's because we're seeing evidence that proves that being apolitical is deadly and is dangerous and causes problems in that regard, right? And it's just an inability to see the gray area. It's an inability to understand that it's all about nuances, and that it's all about, like, judging the situation for different aspects, instead of just being so single-minded on this aspect or so single-minded on that aspect. I don't like extremes whatsoever, but I know evil when I see it, and I know racists when I see them, and I know bigots when I see them, and I know very destructive people and Christofascists when I see them, right? And they're who in charge now, and that's unfortunate, very much so, and that's Anybody listening to this right now, this shouldn't surprise you because this is where I land. This is any time that our worlds intersect with politics. Which it does happen, right? I posted a clip earlier today from Star Trek: Strange New Worlds. It really does speak to a lot of what we're going on here. But yeah, man, I'd be real careful with the independent stuff because while I do believe that there are those disillusioned, I know there are those within the Democratic Party that are disillusioned. It's not that they haven't jumped ship yet, and they might. But the reality of the situation is that that alternative was still miles better than what we have right now. And if that was something you couldn't understand on November 5th, I really hope you understand it now because it's inarguable. It really is. The way that things are right now, the way that things are shaping up, it is an inarguable position as far as I'm concerned. And again, that's as far as I'm willing to go with it with respect to political discussion. I feel like nobody else is going to bring that up on this feedback session, so we'll talk about it here, John, in your part of the in your part of the feedback session here. He had a couple of extra trivial things. He says, what's funny? Every relationship I've been in, they've all had different political ideologies. First former girlfriend was 2010, but later on discovered she was MAGA. I can't believe she was my first. It happens. Second former girlfriend. I don't know what VBNMW means, man. I don't know what that means. 2010 or 2012 to 2015. She was very liberal and inspired me to have a better context with feminism. Okay. Third former girlfriend, fiance, 2019 to 2024, independent, but had shifted toward leaning blue near the end of our relationship last year because the Trump Musk stuff kept getting worse. Yeah. And now look where it's at. Fourth current girlfriend, Tammy, who I already mentioned, is apolitical. The one thing I will say about being apolitical is people are apolitical until it affects them, and then they can get very political, and that's why being apolitical really isn't the way to go, to be honest with you, because you may not want anything to do with politics, but politics has everything to do with you, and being knowledgeable about that, and Tammy can do whatever she wants, but I would just say keep your eyes open with respect to that, and stay informed, because otherwise it will bite you in the ass when you don't realize it. And that's what a lot of people on either side of the aisle are finding out right now and are going to find out pretty soon, sadly. And then B, he said, my brother announced to me and the family that he is engaged and will be getting married for a second time. He was only married for 6 months last time. But I like Cassidy. I never really got to know my ex-sister-in-law, but my future sister-in-law is cool. For some reason, I wanted to respond in a way that Obi-Wan would respond. All right. Congrats to your brother. Congrats to their situation. Best of luck to them. Hopefully this marriage lasts for him, and that you hope for happiness in that regard. But either way, so that's John's second email, and we're over a half hour in. Let's see. He had some updates with respect to his third email that he posted on June 10th. He said, well, apparently Fandango site crashed after the Amazon Advanced screening tickets went on sale, so I guess I won't be seeing trolls or bots about that after all. Or maybe I will. Trolls and bots like to spin narratives. It said, this is for Superman, by the way, which I checked just yesterday, and all the theaters, the 7 theaters that are showing the Amazon Advanced early screenings, I would say that they are anywhere between 80 to 95% sold. My theater, the one that we're going to see it in, is probably between 90 to 95% sold at this point. In fact, all the seats that are left truly are in the front row, like the very front row, the people that would literally have to crane their necks and look up at the screen in order to see it. So who knows if those will get sold at all. We'll see. But yeah, there's definitely been, a lot of attention for this. I believe more tickets have sold for that advanced showing for Superman than for Fantastic Four's early showings on Thursday the 24th and Friday the 25th of July in that regard, I believe, but I'd have to double check that. But either way, yeah, Fandango definitely had some traffic to deal with initially for those tickets. John also says Entertainment Weekly broke the news that a new Wonder Woman film is in development at DC Studios. I wonder what they're going to call it. Wonder Woman Amazon Princess, maybe? This is what I wanted to get into with that James Gunn Entertainment Weekly interview. I did not get a chance to record it for Patreon. Hopefully I will here in the next couple of days or so, because there were some other tidbits that he wanted to go into. Maybe I'll do it tomorrow. Maybe I'll try and do it on Monday with respect to that, because yeah, there was some stuff in there that I did want to talk about, and that was one of those things as well that that he revealed as far as the future of DC Studios and such. Let's see. He says, so we know it's fairly common in this space for many of us to deal with Marvel DC toxic tribalism, but I gotta know, With you being a big fan of Trek and Wars, have you ever personally experienced that level of toxic fan discourse between the two? Star Wars actually makes money. Star Trek is just a niche show for nerds. Star Trek is actual science fiction. Lucas just wanted to remake Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers for the 70s. Like, remember the film Fanboys, where Seth Rogen plays a Han-obsessed fan and brawls with Trekkies? I personally haven't seen Star Wars Star Trek tribalism get to that level of toxicity, but I'm just casually into both, so I haven't really seen anything. No, quite honestly, I haven't seen that. More often than not, it's just playfully done. Like, there's times where there may be some, playful ribbing about it. Maybe some people are serious. Like, for example, I remember the Big Bang Theory ninth season, the episode where The Force Awakens was releasing and the guys were going out to see it. Sheldon had decided to stay home to celebrate Amy's birthday, and so Howard, Leonard, and Rajan went to see it, but they gave Sheldon's ticket to Will Wheaton. And Will Wheaton, of course, was a semi-regular, and of course that's Wesley Crusher from Star Trek: The Next Generation. He shows up, and the theater, like they know that he's arrived because you start hearing all this booing in the theater, and you turn around, and he walks in wearing a blue original series tunic and Mr. Spock ears, and he's got "Live Long and Prosper," like the sign in one hand, and he's like egging him on with the other hand, and he sits down and he's like, "Hey, I was on Star Trek. I got to root for the home team." And somebody goes, "Star Trek sucks." He's like, "Hey, live long and suck it." That's just a funny joke. That's just funny, and the reason it's funny is because I don't think there's ever been a point like they're very different, right? There's enough difference, despite Penny and all of her silly comments about how there is absolutely no difference. That's the one thing that Penny said on the show that still to this day pisses me off. And I know that, Kaylee Cuoco's not actually like that, so it's not like I harbor this anger, but it's just something they made her character say. It's just like, oh, you really know how to push nerd buttons with this show. This is why a lot of nerds actually don't like that show for a number of reasons. I love the show, but at any rate, there is enough difference between Star Trek and Star Wars fundamentally for the fan bases to be in different places, especially since Star Trek is primarily a TV franchise. Yes, there are 13 movies, but the vast majority of Star Trek content is television, right? How many series are we talking about? Original series, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise. And that's just in the old era. Then you get into the Paramount Plus era with Discovery and Picard and Lower Decks in animated sense. Strange New Worlds going on right now, right? That's 4 different shows at that point, right? So we're talking, I'm counting so far on one hand, 9 different Star Trek series at this point in time that we can point to, right? And they're all varieties of lengths, right? 3 seasons for the original series. Oh, and I forgot about the animated series. There were 2 seasons of the animated series as well in the early 70s, Filmation animation, right? So you got that. You got 7 seasons of TNG, 7 seasons of Deep Space Nine, 7 seasons of Voyager, 4 seasons of Enterprise. You got 5 seasons of Star Trek Discovery, 3 seasons of Picard. So far, it's 2 seasons and counting for Stranger Worlds. We know that's going to be 5 seasons. They're going to end it at season 5, but season 3 isn't even releasing for another month, right? Little under a month before season 3 goes and where it's released to us. And then they're in the middle of, filming season 4 right now. And then they've got 5 or 6 episodes rather to end the 5th and final season of that show in like the next couple of years, right? Like there's so much more. 5 seasons of Lower Decks, and they could have gone on further with that show as well. They've got the new Starfleet Academy show, right? Like there's a whole lot there for television content, and so I feel like it's deep. It's different enough as far as it being a cult franchise, because Star Trek is very much a cult franchise. It is, most certainly it is, and it really didn't become more mainstream until the Kelvin Timeline movies, in my opinion, right? Like there's always been an audience for it for nearly 60 years, but it had a largely cult beginning, if you will, and is considered a cult classic in many ways. So I think that it's different enough from Star Wars, which has been largely steeped in movies, and only in the last 6 years have they branched into television, right? With The Mandalorian, with Andor, with Ahsoka, and Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Book of Boba Fett, and The Acolyte, and all that, right? Like Star Wars is still relatively new to television. Star Trek has been doing television from the beginning in that regard. So I think that there's enough difference that the fan bases really are not adversarial like that, because they're very different in terms of where they stand and how they orchestrate things. So no, that's why I didn't really care for Fanboys as a movie, because it was perpetuating a rivalry that, one, I didn't believe in, and two, I don't think the majority of the fan bases believe in. I don't see Star Trek and Star Wars fans duking it out the way that I've seen Marvel and DC fans duke it out on social media, right? I've seen that happen. We have receipts for that, because one is they're always being pitted against each other in fan circles because it's superheroes. But Star Trek and Star Wars are different enough that whenever they go at it against each other, it's usually meant for hilarity's sake. It's usually for a joke in that regard, and nobody really takes that rivalry seriously, nor should they, because it's really not a rivalry at all. They're different enough that you can absolutely enjoy both. And while there are similarities, one is more science fiction, the other is really science fiction fantasy, to be honest with you. There's a lot more mystical stuff in Star Wars than there is in Star Trek. So, yeah, you can enjoy both for different reasons, and I always have from the beginning. So, yeah, longer answer to that question. But here, this third one here in this updates email, he says, since you work from 4 a.m. to noon, do you have a set time for lunch breaks, breakfast breaks? And if so, what do you usually have? Do you eat PB&J sandwiches for breakfast? That's what I do sometimes. And I'm guessing you get a 30-minute food break plus two 15-minute breaks. And how often do you use DoorDash or Uber Eats? I used to have a terrible habit of ordering food for delivery often, but lately I've been getting better at it since especially I work as a job coach in retail stores. I can use my SNAP EBT cards to buy foods at the store. Also, some fast food places take food stamps, apparently. My job does not work that way with respect to break structure because remember, I don't work retail. I don't work, food service or anything like that. I work in very much I work in a job that doesn't deal with the general public, so it doesn't require a break structure like that. Working in television, like it's not like my breaks, my lunches are part of my 8 hours and are paid for. That's as much as I will say with respect to that. So I can take them whenever I have an opportunity, and generally speaking, for me, it's really the vending machine because we have like real food items in our vending machines, and so sometimes that can get a little pricey. Or I've got to bring my own lunch. No, I don't do PB&J. I can't tell you the last time I've eaten a PB&J sandwich. I have nothing against it, just not something that I've eaten like in my formative or my adult years, I should say. To be honest with you, I used to eat it all the time going to school and whatnot. That was the lunch that my mom would pack for me, and it was delicious. And I'm sure it would still be delicious today. I've just never done that, or haven't done that recently, I would say, with respect to my lunches. So yeah, not a typical break structure. The break structure you're talking about, yes, I've worked jobs that have done that, but I haven't worked a job like that in I don't know how long, to be honest with you. So there was another email that John sent on the 10th, June 10th. So we're still like almost 2 weeks ago. He asked me if I had seen this, and this was a meme that was using Jesse Eisenberg's Lex talking to Henry Cavill's Superman, but they had superimposed an image of him smiling over the actual image because this is the rooftop conversation where he tells him that he has Martha hostage and wants him to kill Batman as a result of it. And it says how critics want Superman to be, and Lex is saying, I'm going to burn your mother alive, and Superman's supposed to be saying, oh, Lex, you little rascal. Basically implying that critics want Superman to still be happy-go-lucky and smiling, even though Lex is dark and absolutely, threatening in that regard. And, I think, yes, because they ignore that this isn't even how Superman the movie went in 1978, right? Here's a line. How about this? Is that how a warped brain like yours gets its kicks? By planning the death of innocent people? No, by causing the death of innocent people, right? And, Christopher Reeve's Superman wasn't smiling when he said that to Lex, when he was having that discussion. He didn't smile at any point in that scene at Lex Luthor whatsoever. And it's a dark scene because, first, like Luthor has, lured him there under the guise of a poison gas pellet that he's going to release into the air of Metropolis and killing half of its population. And it was a lie. It was a ruse to get him to walk into his kryptonite trap, right? And that's where that explanation comes from. So it's like critics that ignore that, it's like that wasn't even the case. This idea that Superman is always smiling and is always happy-go-lucky, that's not even the case in Superman the movie. Christopher Reeve, like his Superman doesn't smile and has stern reactions to villainy on a regular basis throughout all four of his films. They conveniently ignore that and dismiss it because they grew up with it and they're apologetic about it. And you know what? Nostalgia is great for people that want to enjoy it, but when you weaponize it against other interpretations of the character that you didn't grow up with, that's where it becomes a problem. I've never seen that meme, but it doesn't surprise me. I don't think all critics feel that way, John, but I do think a number of them do in that regard. So, Yeah, that's an intriguing one. Here's a heavier email from John. I think we're about halfway through his emails through the last 2 weeks. This one is in memoriam to Brian Wilson, which John has indicated before he's a huge Beach Boys fan, so this is an important one for him. He said, like I said, if there was breaking news, I'd share, and you all know my newfound love for the Beach Boys by now. He sent this on Wednesday, June 11th, by the way, so this was right after we found out that Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys had passed. He said he made a screenshot from his memoriam post on Facebook, like Brian's lyrics in one of his songs, Sometimes I Feel Very Sad. Well, right now, I'm feeling very sad, he says. But in a lot of ways, I'm glad he nearly made it to 83. Similarly to how many thought about Dave Crosby that they both wouldn't make it to 50 based on their lifestyle, they both made it over 80. I feel bad for his girls, Cammie and Wendy of Wilson Phillips, he says. I'm grateful they got a lot more time with their dad these last few decades. They were deprived of it in the 80s during his conservatorship. Plus, he has 5 adopted kids with Melinda. They're a lot younger than the two ladies, so it must be hard for them to lose their parents in their 20s and 30s, a year and a fourth apart. You don't have to read the whole memoriam, but if you want to give your thoughts on it, I had thought about him meeting him recently too. This really sucks. But he's with Melinda now and his brothers Dennis and Carl, cousin, former NBA star Stan Love, and many other friends and family. The memoriam, tell you what, we'll go ahead just for for memoriam purposes here. He says this one's hard, like really effing hard to process. During the pandemic, I began a journey that led me to a new obsession, the Beach Boys. Growing up, my family and I were casual listeners of theirs. The surf music plus good vibrations, Wouldn't It Be Nice, God Only Knows, and a few others. Pet Sounds had usually been in the top 3 unofficial lists of best rock albums of all time with Beatle records. In a lot of ways, it bridges the gap between Rubber Soul and Sgt. Pepper. It was a YouTuber, Elliot Roberts, that convinced me to listen to Pet Sounds, and it is one of the greatest albums ever produced. He considered it the best. It was his review of the film Love and Mercy that made me fascinated with Brian. I had come to the conclusion that his life paralleled Van Gogh's, an artist who channeled his pain but with music instead of a paintbrush. He was just a little over a week from turning 83, which is Tammy's birthday. I had begun fearing this day for some time now when his second wife passed last year and his diagnosis of dementia. But while this one hurts, I have to realize there were people who thought he, just like they thought of David Crosby, would not live past 50, but they both passed 80 despite their lifestyle choices. Brian outlived both of his bandmates' younger brothers Melinda, his second wife 4 years, his junior, his cousin's former NBA star Stan Love. He had overcome so much adversaries. His mental health, his abuse from people from the likes of his father Murray and Dr. Landy. He got 30 years with Melinda. He got to finish Smile. Everyone has always rooted for him to be the best. I still have his music and the band's music to listen to. Music that's helped me process the loss of people. Mike, Bruce, and their lineup are still on tour, although I don't know if they will now given the news. No doubt if they still do the Napa show in August, from now till that show, they will for sure pay tribute to Brian. My thoughts and prayers go out to his daughter Cammie and Wendy, granddaughter Lola, cousin and bandmate Mike Love, whose brother died a couple months ago, and his children with Melinda. Thank you, Brian. You once wrote a song called I Just Wasn't Made for These Times. Well, all I can say is for these last few years, I'm glad you were a part of these times. Whether it was for people to catch a wave, be a cork on the ocean, eat vegetables, it was all wonderful. Love and mercy to you, Brian. Brian Douglas Wilson, June 20th, 1942, June 11th, 2025. So that is John's tribute, his memoriam from Facebook to Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys. May he indeed rest in peace. All right, so I think that's it for John's first round of emails that were supposed to be read last week. Now let's get into the emails he sent for this week. Now this one he sent on Tuesday, this past Tuesday, that's the 17th, and asked, would this cause backlash? And he screenshot another Facebook post. All right, here we go. So he says, if DC Studios announced Miles Teller would be playing Batman, would that cause backlash like it did for Keaton, Affleck, and Pattinson, or do you think almost everyone would agree that it's a great choice? I think he should do it. He should have redemption. Fan Forstick wasn't his fault, and he was good in Top Gun Maverick. I support it, he says. Honestly, even if there was backlash, it wouldn't be nearly as bad. Keaton initially got backlash because he was known to be a character actor. He played comedic roles. Affleck didn't exactly get love for Daredevil and played a lot of silly roles, and his public persona was laughed at. Pattinson got made fun of for Twilight. In my opinion, they all did a good job playing the character. Honestly, I think they even did better than Bale. I preferred his Bruce. I definitely don't think it would cause an angry mob like the other three, nor should it. There will always be, John, there will always be backlash to any DC casting, especially for a character like Batman, right? There's always going to be backlash. And the Keaton backlash where they got 50,000 letters of protest and a couple of death threats because they didn't want Mr. Mom to play Batman. That's real. That's documented. Go look it up. There was initial backlash to Bale, but it wasn't a ton, right? It was just people saying, I can't see Patrick Bateman from American Psycho wearing the cape and cowl, okay? And then, yeah, there was Affleck backlash. And now, it's funny. I feel like a lot of people don't come at Ben Affleck whatsoever, not nearly as much as they might have initially, because one, the role was very different, and there were a lot of stereotypical stuff in Ben Affleck's prior roles that didn't show up when he played Batman. He played it very differently, and whether you can, it really comes down to whether people like those films or not, whether or not they decide to judge his Batman. And generally speaking, if they like those movies and they enjoy his Batman, if they don't like those movies, they are more akin to blame Zack Snyder than they are Ben Affleck in that regard. So and Pattinson, that was temporary backlash, because of the whole Edward Cullen thing, but I feel like that's long over. I feel, especially now that you got people that are upset that the Batman Part 2 is likely delayed because, the DCU and DC Studios is top priority, like, that being top priority for DC Studios, Superman, this being the summer of Superman in that regard. But as far as Teller, my thoughts on him being cast, I mean, yes, I do think there would be backlash, people that don't like Miles Teller, that don't think he would do well in the cape and cowl. Of course, they're going to feel that way. But here's my question: how old is Miles Teller? He's 38. Okay, so I think what it comes down to for me, John, is if the plan is still Brave and the Bold, which means that it's still Damian Wayne that's Robin. The idea is, will Miles Teller be able to play a believable Bruce Wayne that has a child that can be a Damian Wayne, right? Miles Teller is 38. He just turned 38 this past February, right? So he's 38 years old. Now, how old is David Corenswet, right? Because this is also part of it as well, is how do the actors match up as far as the Justice League. David Corenswet is 31. Okay, so Teller is definitely older than him. If Miles Teller can pull off being an older Bruce that's been at the Batman game for a while and believably has a son that could be Damian, that would be Robin with him. Okay, I'm not against it. I really am not. And Miles Teller, for me, the pinnacle of Miles Teller acting that I can cite, that I personally seen is Whiplash. That's a phenomenal film, and he and J.K. Simmons do a fantastic job in that movie. And I agree with you. He was good in Top Gun Maverick. I'm not against it. I'm not against it. You know how I feel about fan casting and whatnot, but I am not against the idea of Teller being Batman. I think it would be intriguing. Because I am open to any of these actors, right? Did I necessarily think that, was I thinking Robert Pattinson initially for Batman? No, certainly I was not. But I wasn't thinking Ben Affleck. I wasn't thinking Christian Bale. And I like all of them, right? So I am not against the idea of Miles Teller having his redemption, if you will. Same as, we've talked about, Chris Evans having his redemption from Human Torch to Captain America, Steve Rogers, right? And, Brandon Routh having his redemption, in the Arrowverse. Affleck, of course, having his redemption from Daredevil, even though he was not the reason that Daredevil wasn't all that great of a film, and I still think the director's cut is better in that regard. But yeah, if Teller wants to do a redemption in DC and it ends up being Batman, I'm not against it. I'm not against it. I'm one of those, I'm in the wait and see category. If they were to cast him, I would wait and see, before passing any type of judgment on it, to be honest with you. So that's my thoughts on it. And then I did want to include this other email because when I talked about the James Gunn interview that he did with Rolling Stones, James Gunn had made mention of one of the top 5 actors in his Superman film that constantly pays attention and doom scrolls all the people that have negative things to say and naysay and all the trolls and whatnot. And I said very loudly on Flightcast, don't do that. Seriously, why would you torture yourself like that? That's horrible. These people are just trying to get a rise out of you and they want attention, et cetera, right? And I don't know who it is, and he didn't say who it was. He didn't identify who that actor was. John has a theory. He believes that the Superman actor that doom scrolls like that is actually Nathan Fillion. And I think there's a possibility of that based on interviews, other cameos that he's done. I'm thinking, the cameo that he did in Big Bang Theory comes to mind. I could see Nathan Fillion potentially being that individual because he's one of those goes with humor, to have a thick skin and stuff like that. And he's a good actor, right? Honestly, I still think his best work, in my opinion, is as Malcolm Reynolds in, Firefly and Serenity. He's fantastic. However I feel about Joss Whedon, today, Firefly and Serenity are still fantastic work, right? And I think Nathan Fillion was outstanding in that show and in that movie along with the rest of his cast, right? So to me, like, I think he's a good actor. I do. And I think he plays certain characters well. I'm looking forward to seeing how he plays Guy Gardner because I don't think he's going to play it the same as he's played like any of the other characters, like the character he played in Guardians Volume 3, or like how he was in Slither, or any of his prior works with James Gunn. I think he's going to put something different. I know we're expecting the comedic spin because of the Guy Gardner bowl haircut and all that stuff, right? But I am curious about it. It wouldn't surprise me if he's the one that doom scrolls. It would not surprise me one bit, and I would still say, for even somebody as successful as him to have, all the success that he has had. I mean, several TV shows, Two Guys in a Pizza Place, The Rookie, Castle, right? Like he's successful. Nathan Fillion is successful. There's no way that you could say he's not successful, right? On television and on the big screen. And right here he is now part of an opening part of the DCU. We know he's going to be in Superman. We know he's going to be in Peacemaker, and we know he's going to be in Lanterns, right? We know he's going to do a guest spot in that show. He's going to talk to Hal and John Stewart, right? So like he's cool. He really does not need to doom scroll. None of them should. No actor should doom scroll all of the bullshit that any critics or anybody talks about them. They should leave it alone. They should ignore it. None of that. Focus on the positivity. Go to the conventions, go to Comic-Con and different conventions, and that's where you'll meet the fans that love you and appreciate your work and give you all the positive stuff, and tells you good job for what you're doing if you're doing a damn good job, which I feel like he is. So it wouldn't surprise me if it's him. But yeah, I can't think of who else it might be if it is him, or if it isn't him, rather, I should say. But that's a solid guess, John, that it's Nathan Fillion. He doesn't need to do it. He should stop doing it. Nathan Fillion, if you can hear this, you're not listening to this show at all. But in the event that this somehow in the universe makes it to you, stop doom scrolling if you're the one that doom scrolls. Either way. But there we have it. I think we've gotten through all of John's emails. That was 2 weeks worth of emails. I feel like there was a lot more that he had said last week than there was this week, and it's probably because he was waiting for last week's stuff to get responded to. So, all right, we got through all of it. It was certainly Dorsey-sized in that regard. Anthony hasn't sent an email in this week, so maybe we can still keep the episode under 3 hours. I don't know. Fingers crossed. But either way, thank you as always for the feedback, John. Greatly appreciated. Looking forward to more as we get closer and closer to the launch of the official launch, if you will, cinematically, of the DCU and Superman. All right, next up, Amari Daniels sent an email last week called "The Entire World Became a Squadcast Media." So this is probably definitely in response to my Flightcast episode about the decommissioning of the Squadcast Media website that will be happening in the not-too-distant future. Amari says, "Hey Ray, first off, apologies in advance for the lengthy email. No apologies necessary. This is hardly lengthy compared to many other emails, Amari. You're all good sir." He says, "I had another question primed about the theatrical experience, but this recent news is more pressing. Wow. It really feels like the end of an era," he says. "It was either Suicide Squad 2016 or Justice League where I eventually found Suicide Squad cast hosted by a very professional guy named Tim and some other guy named Scott. Joking aside, going from that show to discovering the other shows has been a journey. When it came to that era of DC entertainment, I was always curious to hear what the Squadcast folk thought first, including DC TV Squadcast and Fans Without Borders. And there were so many hills and valleys of news, whether it was the Snyder Cut announcement, the cancellation of Daredevil on Netflix, Ruby Rose suddenly leaving Batwoman, the No Way Home review, and the eventual end of the Arrowverse. The list goes on. Plus, hearing you all come together for the DC TV crossovers felt like the Justice League itself assembling. And I agree. While I love Crisis on Infinite Earths, I think I give a slight edge to Crisis on Earth X because of the character interactions. Even when you all didn't agree on things," he says, like with the Joker review, or the multiple conversations on whether Ben Affleck was staying on as Batman, or when you address serious topics like Melissa Benoist coming forward to reveal that she's a survivor of domestic abuse. For the longest time, you all have been my go-to source for this sort of news, and I'll cherish those episodes. Would it be nice to get the band back together? Absolutely. But of course, real-life priorities come first. It's been a great ride, and I look forward to any and all future crossovers. Best, Omari. P.S. Regarding my last email on Superman, he says, "I hope that didn't come off as me implying you yourself are leaving Tyler Hoechlin out of the conversation. Certainly not. more just the conversation around Superman in general, but I will agree that yes, the metrics are different when it comes to comparing time as the character on television versus time on film. Amari, no, I wasn't taking it personally in that regard whatsoever. I was just highlighting where the conversation was going with respect to, when we rank the Superman, when we talk about the Superman. But thank you for all of the kind words. Amari, for people that don't know, he absolutely has been a longtime listener of myself and the others over at Squadcast Media. He definitely crossed over to Flightcast when I started doing the solo show myself from my exploits on Squadcast Media. He would not be a part of this audience now for the Flightcast if it hadn't begun with Squadcast Media. Like I said, I owe my show. I owe the existence of my show to my brothers over there, my podcast brothers, way back when we started doing that 9 years ago. And Amari has certainly been one of our more regular fans and has definitely been a long-time listener, has sent in plenty of feedback to our shows, talk to myself, talk to Brent, talk to Tim, Scott, probably also talk to Jordan and Chris as well. So thank you very much for the kind words and for all the thoughts. And thank you for some of the memories. I forgot I did talk about the Melissa Benoist situation because that was something that came up with respect to her time as Supergirl in the Arrowverse, and she was phenomenal. And she still, I would say, is the model right now for Supergirl. So kind of in the same vein with the Tyler Hoechlin conversation, Amari, I would say that with respect to Millie Alcock's performance that we're about to see next year, right, in the Supergirl film for the DCU, I think Melissa Benoist is the mark. I really do. And there have been other actresses that have played Supergirl. Of course, Helen Slater, we talked about that at length as well in the Arrowverse conversation at DC TV Squadcast. But I think what Melissa Benoist has done, and granted, she's same thing with Tyler Hoechlin. She's had way more time on the clock to be able to develop a performance. She's had 6 full seasons. I mean, full seasons of a DC series. And not only that, she came from a situation where her show premiered initially the first season on another network, got canceled, and was resurrected on the CW and became an integral part of the Arrowverse where really she belonged in the first place. That show should have always been a CW show, especially the way that it evolved and the way that the DC CW evolved on, through the Arrowverse and whatnot. So yeah, that thank you for bringing that up. Thank you for reminding me of that because it reminds me of how much I enjoyed her portrayal and how much I did enjoy that show for any and all of the criticisms that we had. And none of the DC CW shows, none of the Arrowverse shows were perfect, but there was definitely a lot to like about all of them. And I enjoyed talking about it on a weekly basis with Brent for a number of years. That gave us a lot of joy. That gave us a lot of fun. And it was something that we certainly enjoyed following and enjoyed doing. And we're very happy that you enjoyed following us on all of that. No doubt about it. So thank you for that. And thank you for also becoming a part of this audience here over at the Flightcast. You are always welcome here, good sir. All right, next up is a perfect segue to another longtime listener that also used to listen to my exploits over at Squadcast Media, and that is Mr. Sam Otten. He has sent in an email titled The Starting Gun. And he did send this last week as well, so this is a carryover as well from the stuff that was supposed to be from last weekend. But his email, he says, Ray, I want to share my thoughts on Superman 1 month out from the premiere, which it was at the time he wrote this email. I agree with you on most things. 1, I hope the film is a success because I want to see a growing number of DC fans and I want the executives to feel confident in the DCU so that they let future filmmakers have creative freedom. Agreed. Number 2, I'm worried the Snyder Cult will use the release of the film to complete their journey toward the dark side, becoming exactly like the Richard Donner, Christopher Reeve purists who relentlessly attacked Man of Steel in BVS. As a Snyder fan, it will be painful to see the Snyder cultist behavior, but like you, I'm hoping Superman is popular enough that it just busts through both cults. I think it has very much the potential to do so, and I think the worst case scenario with respect to that, Sam, is here. I tell you what, the absolute worst case scenario is if Superman does not do well and if the DCU does not get off to a great start, those cultists are going to start crying foul and they're going to proclaim victory. All 8 of them are going to try and proclaim victory, and they're going to say, well, now it's obvious they have to go back to the Snyderverse. And we know they're not going to do that, Sam. We know that logistically speaking, that's not going to happen. So those cultists are never going to be happy because they're not going to get what they want, whether Superman succeeds or fails, whether the DCU succeeds or fails. Now, I do think Superman is not going to bomb. Based on these pre-ticket sales, to be honest with you, I do think it's going to have some modicum of success. How much success it has, I don't know. But I think the next level up from that worst case scenario is a scenario in which the film is reviewed positively by critics, and the anti-Snyders, who that's a cult that we don't appreciate whatsoever, but they also glom onto the film, and the popularity of the film rises, and it'll be unfortunate because we're going to see those anti-Snyders take aim at the Snyder stuff and say, well, this is what he should have done, this is what would have made it successful in the first place, right? So that's not the best case scenario, but it is a scenario that would see the success of Superman and the success of DCU and the expansion of DC fans, as you're saying. The best case scenario for us, Sam, is that Superman succeeds, and not only does it piss off the Snyder cult, but it also pisses off the anti-Snyder cult because it succeeds in a way that the Superman that we see in that film that James Gunn presents to us is very different than Christopher Reeve, very different than Superman the movie, right? And if that's the case, then it will burst the bubble of the anti-Snyder cult, and basically we will have a third interpretation that the general audience will glom onto, that younger audiences will glom onto, and adapt as their Superman going forward, apart from either Christopher Reeve or Henry Cavill. And I think that's the best case scenario. That's what we're hoping for, is that it succeeds in a way that it blazes a new trail for the character, gives the general audience a connectivity and a relatability to the character that they feel that they've never had before. And that, I think, will bust both cults, because it'll succeed, which means the Snyder cults are miserable, and it will succeed in a way that didn't completely just become a redux of Superman the movie, and that will bust the anti-Snyders, because it's not just another version of what Christopher Reeve did. It's not the same thing. There's going to be things in that movie that, and we've already seen it, things in that movie that, look more like Man of Steel, look more like BVS in terms of Superman's vulnerability, and the fact that he still has not smiled all that much in any of these trailers and clips, to be honest with you. A relatability that humanity and that the general audience can certainly connect with, hopefully, right? That it'll be different enough so that he's not the happy-go-lucky saving cats out of trees figure quite as much as the anti-Snyders want him to be, and he's not also quite what the Snyder cult wants him to be in terms of the Cavill interpretation in that regard. So that's our best case scenario, Sam. I think that scenario would bust both cults, and here's hoping, knock on wood, here's hoping that's exactly what happens. Sam's third point, number 3, he says, I think I will probably like the film, but I don't think I will love it or be able to analyze it philosophically to the same depths that we did for Man of Steel and BVS. But like you, I always try to give new creative teams the chance to tell their story and share their vision, and I try to always like movies rather than nitpick them, because entertainment is supposed to be for entertainment, not for attacks and strife. With regard to my hype level, he says it's been a bit up and down. I thought the teaser trailer was okay, but my kids thought it was a bit silly looking. Then the official trailer raised my excitement quite a bit. I liked the serious conversation and the Man of Steel and BVS vibes. The kids also started to get pumped from that trailer, but also just from TV spots, posters, Dairy Queen tie-ins, and general conversation in the online space like the Fortnite Superman skins. But now this last tickets on sale trailer has decreased my excitement a bit. In my opinion, the Lex voiceover is kind of stereotypical, he says. The action seems exciting but also kind of unrealistic, and I don't like sight gags in the middle of intense action. Some of the shots of Superman seem kind of awkward rather than epic, and I really don't like when they break the basic rules of physics. Superpowers are fine, but I don't like Superman holding up the building. I know Superman has the strength to hold that much weight, but the side of the building itself does not have the structural integrity to support the rest of the building. Zack Snyder's team was always very careful to avoid silly physical moments like this, but of course Justice League put it in during the final Russia sequence. Not my style. So my hype is down just a little bit, he says, but I still think I will like it. It just probably won't be my favorite type of superhero film, which I can live with if it brings in a bunch of new fans. I am looking forward to seeing if the Clark-Lois relationship is handled well, and I want to see Mr. Terrific, Hawkgirl, and Metamorpho, and although I'm not a fan of the Guardians of the Galaxy, I must say that James Gunn pleasantly surprised me with the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker, so maybe he'll win me over again on this one. We'll find out in a month, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts and the thoughts of the FlightCast listeners too. Sam Otten. Sam, as always, thank you very much for your feedback. It is indeed greatly appreciated whenever you do get a chance to send emails in, good sir. Here's what I would say with respect to hype level, because you're not the only person I know that has had some waning hype levels with respect to the last couple of trailers. And here's what I would say about that. For me, the thing that I paid most attention to with all these trailers and TV spots is tone. Tonally speaking, because, I hear these rumblings about how this was going to have like the standard James Gunn tone, with the goofiness and the needle drops and all that, the jokes and the one-liners, and that there allegedly was this massive bout of reshoots that led to, and I saw this on Reddit, I saw this in a couple different places, right? And they've heavily retooled the film, and now it's taken on a different tone because test screenings went so poorly, right? Alleged test screenings. And to me, I'm not seeing evidence of that in these trailers. I think that tonally speaking, and I've said this from the beginning, that I believe that James Gunn understands that Superman is a different character and that this is the start of the DCU, start of a whole new franchise. He has to take a different tack with this character. He can't be exactly the same as he was with Guardians or with the Suicide Squad. He has to approach the mythos and the character of Superman very differently and in a much more stoic fashion, if you will, and stoic in terms of stoicism, right? Like in terms of, not in terms of like unemotional, because clearly this Superman is very emotional, which again I think speaks to the relatability and the idea of him being raised as a human even though he is not actually human. I think that's for relatability purposes of, to the general audience, because that's what we've heard for years, Sam, from the general audience is Superman is unrelatable, he's overpowered, he's too perfect, there's nothing that we can really relate to him on. And I feel like James Gunn is going to attack that head on. At least that's the sense that I'm getting, the vibe that I'm getting. With respect to what we've seen in these last couple of trailers and TV spots, I'm always leery of trailer audio because, if you're a sound editor, if you know any kind of sound editing, if you can pick apart where, okay, that word was taken from a different scene, this line was taken from a different scene, and it was cobbled together for this type of stuff. So I need to see everything in context, and that's what the problem with trailers is. It's all out of context. We're not necessarily seeing everything together. Even the scene with Lois interrogating him, essentially, with Lois questioning him, with tough questions, as part of the interview, even that is not shown in full context, right? Like there's a lot that we need to see around it, in order to be fully informed on what that scene is going to be and what it's going to feel like in that regard. And so that's why I am leery about nitpicking trailers too much. The building thing and the physics thing, that's just part of suspension of disbelief. And look, quite honestly, when I read what you were saying with respect to the building and the physics, it sounded like you were channeling Tim, because I know that's exactly how Tim over at Squadcast Media feels. He's talked about that before. We've had those discussions. I've done way too many movie reviews with Tim to not know that that's exactly what he's thinking with respect to this. He agrees with you as far as holding up the building, as far as some other physics, the suspension of disbelief that is necessary. But I will tell you that the general audience could not care less, because the general audience, and you know this, Sam, you know that with respect to the general audience, they're watching, these superpowered individuals that don't exist, these fictional characters wearing capes and dressing in ridiculous costumes, otherwise, save the day from monsters and goblins and all that type of stuff, right? So to me, the whole building thing, the general audience is going to look at that and go, wow, that is really awesome. And even Superman fans that don't care so much about physics are going to say the same thing. I feel like anybody that is looking for that gritty, grounded realism that Zack Snyder did incorporate into his films, no, you're going to be disappointed by this. That's not what this is. But I think that's been made abundantly clear in that regard, right? And, Justice League, I mean, there were so many other stupidly toxic things centered around Justice League. It's not a fair comparison. I know you're not doing a one-to-one comparison. I know you're not doing that. I understand that. However, I know that there are people out there that do consider James Gunn's style of filmmaking closer to that of Justice League than to that of Zack Snyder's Justice League. And I still believe that it's a mix. I believe it's 50-50. Yeah, you're going to get some stuff like the building physics and whatnot, but I do think you're also going to get some heartfelt character moments, which were devoid of in Justice League. Justice League was devoid of any of that. It was a very paint by numbers, sterilized, boring piece of garbage, to be honest with you, as far as that is concerned. So I do not believe that is what we were going to get with Superman, because we didn't get it with the Guardians films. We certainly did not get it with the Suicide Squad or Peacemaker. I think that those character moments and that heart is going to be present there. I think that part you will enjoy. But yeah, I do think obviously, the visual effects and the representation of the character on screen, no, it's not going to be. And it's weird. I've used the phrase gritty realism to describe Zack Snyder's trilogy before, and it's one of those cases where, seriously, how can you use that phrase to describe a world with Superman and Aquaman and the Flash and whatnot? Well, it's gritty realism in a world where those characters exist. where the physics are the way that they are, where they try to approximate some form of this world is as close to the real world as we possibly can get while still suspending the disbelief of these characters actually existing, right? So it's not just Batman. It's not what Nolan did in his trilogy, the Dark Knight trilogy. It's a world that involves Superman, a world that involves Wonder Woman and otherworldly characters. How close to realism can we get with that? And that's what Snyder did. And listen, I'm one of those that absolutely appreciated that. But you know me, I have the wider strike zone. I can enjoy all of that. So, the building thing doesn't bug me. Some of the other stuff, like I know there's another scene, in a progressive commercial talking about more tie-ins and whatnot, where the big fire-breathing kaiju that he fights, at one point he's going to smash him over the head with a water tower. And I'm sure there's going to be something of those physics that's not going to look right to you or to Tim or to others that are really looking for something more closer to actual physics with respect to that. But again, that's part of the suspension of disbelief that we know the general audience largely is going to pass over. Like they whether they like the film or not, it's not going to hinge on anything like that. But for those of us that are looking for those aspects and gravitate towards the more realistic stuff with respect to approximation of powers and abilities, yeah, it isn't something that you're necessarily going to care for, and that's perfectly okay. It's all subjective, right? But I at least appreciate and people for anybody that hasn't heard any of Sam's emails or hasn't heard any of his feedback beforehand. Sam is very open minded. Sam is very balanced in that regard. If there are things in this movie that he does not care for, he will not allow that to ruin the movie for him, and he certainly will not harsh anyone's comb as a result of it. He may disagree with what he sees in certain things in the movie, but he will leave it at that. He is not someone to go tell people, "Oh, this is terrible. I can't believe they've desecrated Superman." Da da da. No, he understands that there are different versions, and that this is just going to be another version, and it's not going to be 100%. Like, there's going to be callbacks and homages to Christopher Reeve. There's going to be callbacks and homages to Henry Cavill. There are. That's going to happen. We're already seeing some stuff in there with respect to that, but it's not going to be one-to-one. And there's going to be some stuff that you like, some stuff that you don't like. There's going to be stuff in there that I like and stuff that I don't like, probably, more than likely. But, it's just a question of how much we forgive that and how much it contributes to our enjoyment of it. So that's all that is. And, we're now less than a month away. We're 3 weeks away, a little under 3 weeks away from the release. And, as we get closer, we'll all definitely share our thoughts once it comes out and once I review it. And we'll all have, I'm sure, a very fascinating discussion with respect to our thoughts on the film and how we do, rank it against the rest of the Superman mythos, because I'm sure we'll have that conversation. We'll talk about it. And I'm sure for many, Man of Steel will still be their favorite. I'm sure for many others, Superman the movie will probably still be their favorite. But I will be very curious to see how many people consider this Superman movie to be their favorite out the gate, to be honest with you. I'm very curious to see that. And I hope there are many that do, because then that will definitely mean that the DCU gets off to a great start and that Superman gets off to a great start. So fingers crossed with respect to that. Looking forward to the discussion. Thank you as always for the feedback, Sam. You are always welcome here on the FLITEcast. All right, time for some watch updates. Let's check in with Amr Osama. He's got an email titled, "It's been a long, long time." And he sent this 4 days ago, so this is a recent one. Quite lengthy, but we know what he's going to be talking about. So let's dive into it. He says, "Hey, Ray, hope you're doing well and in good health and spirits. Same goes for anyone else tuning in. I'm doing as best as I can, Amr. I hope you're doing all right as well, especially where you're at over there." He says, "As the title says, it's been a while since my last email. I've missed the last 2 weeks due to circumstances beyond my control. For real this time. No procrastination involved whatsoever. All right, maybe just a little. Before I jump in," he says, "I want to give a slightly late Happy Father's Day shout out to you, Ray." I'm not a father, but thank you. "To the audience, and to especially Alex, who is a father." Yes. He says, "I didn't get a chance to congratulate him on the new addition to his family last time, so here it is. Congratulations on becoming a father, Alex. What an incredible milestone, and with Father's Day just behind us, the timing couldn't be more perfect. It's your very first one, and the first of many to come, filled with love, learning, and unforgettable memories. Wishing you all the joy, strength, and laughter that fatherhood brings." Ah, that's awesome. Yes, indeed. We do salute Alex and his salute to fatherhood. He's got a couple of emails coming up here later on in the show. Amr says, "Now, since it's been a couple of weeks or more since my last update, I've had time to catch up on quite a few shows. I officially finished Star Wars Rebels, and I'm currently halfway through Season 6 of Star Trek The Next Generation." Oh boy, here we go. I also want to take a moment to offer my condolences, he says, to Squadcast Media. This is in response to your Ode to Squadcast Media episode of the FLIGHTcast. It's sad to see Squadcast Media go. Your story about how you found them really resonated with me. It's incredibly similar to how I found you, and through you, them. I felt the same way you did back in 2016, he says. Just being online felt exhausting. Everywhere I turned, there was constant discourse and negativity surrounding DC ever since Batman v Superman came out. It's tough watching people bash something you love so deeply. I don't feel the same way now as I did then, he says. I've grown, moved on, and learned to engage with fandom in a healthier way. But I'll never forget how I felt back then. I was 13 years old when Batman v Superman hit theaters, and I was blown away. It was everything a DC-loving kid could dream of. Batman and Superman together, in live action, squaring off, and then ultimately uniting with freaking Wonder Woman alongside them to battle a common enemy, Doomsday. That movie was and still is awesome to me. So you can imagine how refreshing it was when during all that negativity I scrolled through Twitter and saw a positive tweet about the DCEU, and it was from you. I clicked your profile, read more of your tweets, and I liked what I saw. I followed you. At some point you retweeted something from DC Squadcast. I think it was a new episode drop, so I decided to check it out. And what I found was amazing. Fans who felt the same way I did. Real fans. Passionate, thoughtful, and supportive. That was you. That was the Squadcast crew. I think that was back in 2020, during the height of the Snyder Cut movement, and ever since then, I've been a follower. And the rest, as they say, is history. I think most people would agree that comic book movie discourse hasn't been the same since 2016. It's only gotten more toxic over time, especially for DC fans like myself, he says. Back then, it was infuriating to watch. WB's handling of the DC property was frustrating beyond words, and nothing stung more than how they completely fumbled Justice League. The movie was something I had been beyond excited for. I mean, it was the GD Justice League on the big screen, the original superhero team-up in comic history, before the Avengers in terms of comics, heroes I grew up with. Then the movie came out, and I sat there thinking, that's it? It felt off, hollow, and worst of all, forgettable. After that, the negativity around DC only intensified, and so did the online toxicity. But over time, I learned to tune out the noise. I stopped engaging with the drama and started focusing on the things I did enjoy, he says. And that worked. Aquaman came out a year later. I liked it. Then Shazam hit theaters, and for the first time in a while, I was excited again. But then something changed. Rumors started swirling about a fabled version of Justice League, the Snyder Cut. At first, it sounded like wishful thinking. I couldn't help falling deeper into that rabbit hole. I kept asking myself, was the reason I felt so disappointed by Justice League because it wasn't the version I was meant to see? Was there really a version that Zack Snyder had made, one that honored the vision the fans were promised? Is this BVS Ultimate Edition all over again? Back and forth the debate went. It's not real. It is real. Even if it is, you'll never see it. And if we were somehow going to see it, well, that'd be the day the Earth stood still. Funny how that turned out. And then there was Zack himself, he says, teasing us, sharing breadcrumbs, glimpses, proof. The myth became real. And in 2020, when the world literally stood still because of the pandemic, something extraordinary happened. During a Man of Steel director's commentary watch party, it was officially confirmed by Zack and Superman himself, Henry Cavill. The Snyder Cut was coming. March 18th, 2021, HBO Max. I was a very, very happy DC fan that day, he says. And when the movie finally came out, I got closure. The story that had been broken was finally told the way it was meant to be. And for me, all was well. After the Snyder Cut, I found myself at peace with whatever DC planned to release next. Maybe I was starting to grow out of superhero stuff, or maybe my taste had just evolved with age. Either way, I was chill, he says. Content. No high expectations, no emotional investment. And then the Batman came out. Holy shit. That movie blew me away. I was 2016 me again, wide-eyed, hyped through the roof, fully dialed back in. After that came the final remnants of the DCEU. Black Adam, The Flash, Aquaman 2, Blue Beetle, which I think kind of counts as James Gunn's DCU. Some hits, some misses, but I wasn't angry about any of it. The DCEU had run its course. But now, I'm officially back, he says, because James Gunn's Superman is less than a month away and I cannot wait. How about that recent Get Tickets Now trailer, huh? Now that's what I'm talking about. It hit all the right notes. Tone, hope, energy. It's everything I wanted in a Superman movie in 2025. That's not meant to be a diss towards Man of Steel. That movie to me as a 10-year-old is what Superman the movie was for others in that time. I'm excited in a way I haven't felt in years. The DCEU will always hold a special place in my heart. It meant a lot to me growing up, but it's time to move on and embrace the new DCU, he says. It's been a long journey, one filled with ups, downs, and everything in between, but I'm thankful for all of it, because along the way I found voices like yours, Ray, and the Squadcast crew, people who helped keep the positivity alive, who made being a DC fan feel good again. That thank you for the very, very kind words, for the very, very strong story there, Amr. Those are the types of stories that really does, make stuff like this worthwhile, right? You don't know how many people you're reaching out to. You don't know how many people's lives you're changing, or if you're even changing anybody's lives as a fan or whatnot. You just try to be yourself and be positive and make whatever you're doing a positive haven for those who, share the same positivity towards what you enjoy. And I'm glad that we were able to be that for you. I really am. And we did our best that we could over at Squadcast Media, and I feel like we did an awesome job, truthfully, to not to toot our own horn a whole lot, but, we did remain as positive as we could, even the stuff that we didn't necessarily agree with. And, the whole Snyder Cut thing, I mean, the guys will tell you that was even a situation where out the gate, I was experiencing what I like to call cognitive delusion, and I was pushing aside a lot of the stuff that I was seeing in that Justice League cut, and the more and more evidence just kept piling up, and it was the same questions that I was asking that you were asking, Amr, that I was starting to ask myself. And then, about 6 months later, I just came to the realization of what was actually happening, what was going on. I didn't want to deny it any further. And yeah, it turned the tide for me as a fan with respect to what I was looking for that as well. And when that movie finally released on HBO Max in March of 2021, it was such a bittersweet time for me because it was around the time I got laid off. It was the exact time that I got laid off from my old job. And like, I was there, I'm freshly like unemployed as a result of, some budgetary stuff going on at my old job. But that movie is out, right? So I at least had something to look forward to, something to be excited about, something to watch. And I did. I marathoned it. I started Man of Steel at the right time. I watched BVS at midnight. And then when Zack Snyder's Justice League was officially available at 3 a.m. Eastern Time on HBO Max, I got that second win, powered through all 4 hours and 2 minutes of that incredible epic. I've seen it multiple times. It is by far my favorite DCEU film, and certainly my favorite of Zack Snyder's trilogy. It is a phenomenally impeccable film. Arguably, in my opinion, the best so far in the shared cinematic universe era, but of comic book movies in general. I would put that film ahead of all the Avengers. I would. Most certainly I would. And I don't say that for tribalistic purposes because I own all of them. I own all the Avengers films. I own Zack Snyder's Justice League. I own the entirety of the DCEU and the entirety of the MCU. So, I am not a tribalistic individual with respect to that. But yeah, it was awesome to, find like-minded fans that appreciated the journey along with me, and I'm glad that we were able to be the same beacon for fans like you. And I thank you very much for the kind words with respect to what I do and with respect to what we did at Squadcast Media. I really do appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you very much for all of that. Really do appreciate it. So continuing on, Amr says, speaking of Superman, I saw a recent TV spot and Lex has this line, he's not a man, he's an it, with a cocky grin and a stupid outfit. Lex is legitimately a hater like he's always been, but I point out this line because it's genuinely something a Snyder cultist would say, and thinking that keeps making me laugh, he says. And I do wonder, thank you for bringing that up, Amr, because I do wonder how much of the pop culture references, how much of the fan stuff is going to be in this movie, because James Gunn having a social media presence, James Gunn seeing what fans say online, he's got a window into this that maybe a lot of other creatives who aren't on social media as actively as he is, they don't have. If he puts anything topical in that film for fans, we're going to know what it is. And if that's precisely what that is, like if that's taken from what a Snyder cultist has said, right, and it with a cocky grin and a stupid outfit, right, like those are things that, can help add to, I'd say, the modern day realism of the dialogue, because it's stuff that people are actually saying, right? With respect to the discourse and whatnot. And also it's going to give us a glimpse, to those of us, it's going to be a bit meta, right? Like the strength spot that recently came out, there's a line in that spot, on that TV spot, where Superman says, they've always been wrong about me. I get scared, but that is being human, and that's my greatest strength. And to me, when I heard that line, I posted this on Threads, when I heard that line in the most recent spot, to me, that felt really meta because it felt like that was Superman talking to all of the fans that for years have argued about what he is and what he isn't. And, whatever version of Superman you grew up with, like that's your primer for what Superman is supposed to be and whether or not a director or a creative understands Superman, because your basis for whether or not they understand Superman is whether or not they did exactly what your version of Superman, your preferred version, did or not in that regard. And I still see people to this day argue that Zack Snyder never understood Superman, and the only reason for it is because he adapted and understood the Superman that they didn't like, right? Whether it was Injustice Superman or any other interpretation. But the thing is, you can't say that he didn't understand Superman. All you can say that is he understood the version that you didn't care for. So I wonder if that line, in a meta sense, is Superman saying, those of you that continue to have these arguments about what I am and whether or not I'm human, whether this is this, that is that, you've always been wrong about me in that regard. And that, to me, as a fan, I like that. And I'm sure there are plenty of fans that don't like that. I'm sure there are a number of fans that heard that line. Jared Cardos, who we've got his emails coming up later in the show, he even said on Threads that he thought it was a bit aggrandizing, self-aggrandizing for Superman to say that. And to me, I feel like that reaction is precisely the point. There's going to be some fans that don't like what he says because if they really look in the mirror, he might be talking to them. I think there is a capacity for that to possibly be the case in this film. And certainly, like you say, if that is a line that comes from Snyder calls this, maybe that's going to be something that's going to, anger them as well because, maybe they got to look in the mirror and maybe they refuse to look in that mirror. And maybe that's the movie's way, James Gunn's way of saying, hey, pump the brakes because your interpretation of the character is not the end all be all, right? Focus on certain things and not others in that regard. So, yeah, I'm with you on that. That's a good observation, Amr. Be very interested in that myself. He says also, wanted to ask you, Ray, what's your relationship with horror movies? Are they your thing? Do they actually scare you or are you not really into them? I ask because I've recently started watching the Conjuring films. So far, I've seen the first one and its sequel, and I'll be watching the third one soon. I don't think I've ever actually been scared by a horror movie, and I don't say that to make myself sound tough or fearless. I just genuinely haven't had that reaction. I'd always heard that the Conjuring movies were some of the best and scariest in the genre, he says, which is what prompted me to check them out. Also, the first two were directed by James Wan, and I really enjoyed his work on Aquaman, both 1 and 2, and Malignant, especially Malignant. Now, can horror films get creepy, he says? Absolutely. I can definitely feel unsettled. Can they be suspenseful and filled with tension? Yes, I pick up on that too. But to actually be startled or scared by them, especially by jump scares, that's never really happened for me. I think my brain just mentally prepares itself ahead of time. Since I know I'm watching a horror movie, I'm already expecting creepy visuals, suspenseful buildup, and the occasional jump scare, so none of it really catches me off guard. Funny enough, he says, the only times I've actually been affected by a jump scare have been in movies that aren't classified as horror. Like, you're watching a sci-fi or action-adventure film and suddenly there's one scene that unexpectedly leans into horror territory. That's when it can actually get me. Probably because I'm not mentally bracing for it the way I would be with straight-up horror film. Or maybe I just haven't been watching the right horror stuff. That's always a possibility, he says. Or who knows, maybe it's a religious thing. I'm Muslim, so maybe that influences how I perceive certain themes or how deeply they affect me. Honestly, I'm not really sure. But if you do know any genuinely good or scary horror movies, I'd love to hear about them. My mom actually loves horror films, so I could throw on your suggestions and watch them with her. Maybe that'll finally be the experience that really gets to me. So first of all, Amr, let me answer your question with respect to my relationship to horror movies, and then I want to tell you why I think you are perfectly fine with respect to where you're at with horror movies and how you process them. My relationship with horror movies was almost non-existent for a long time until about 6 years ago. Here's what it was. I would always look at the trailers and I would always look at the TV spots and stuff, and I go, yeah, that's not for me. I'm not about stuff that scares and is creepy and is disgusting and all that. Like that just was not my cup of tea whatsoever, right? They always seemed very superficial and one note to me. Anytime one would come on like local TV, like heavily edited or whatnot, it just always seemed like silly, cheesy blood and gory humor. It's like, okay, I don't need that. That's not something that I'm into, to be honest with you. And then I remember the movie Event Horizon release way back in 1998, 98, 97, 98, somewhere around there, right? And when it released in theaters, I didn't go see it, but I remember the night that it was premiering on HBO, because HBO did this thing, and maybe they still do it, where like as soon as they get a movie that was previously in theaters and released on VHS or home media, rather, like it would be the big Saturday night premiere, like Saturday night HBO, the HBO premiere of this movie, right? And so they had one for Event Horizon, and I sat at home and I taped it. Like I recorded it on VHS and I watched it, right? And the reason that I was into it is because Lawrence Fishburne was the lead. Not only that, Lawrence Fishburne was the lead and Sam Neill was like co-starring in it. And of course I knew Sam Neill from Jurassic Park. That's Dr. Alan Grant. But I also knew Lawrence Fishburne from a number of other things at that point as well, right? So I was a fan of both actors, and it was space stuff. It was spaceships. That was the biggest reason, because at that point I was like, what, 7 or 8 years rather, into my Star Wars and Star Trek fandom, right? And so like anything with spaceships piqued my interest in that regard. And so that was why I wanted to watch it. And I will tell you, Amr, that I could watch Event Horizon 24/7, 365. I could watch it any time of day or night, and it will never terrify me. And what's funny about that is I've had nightmares about the Aliens movies. I don't know if I've mentioned this in the show before, but I'll definitely talk about it here to answer your question. I love the Aliens movies. I enjoy the Aliens movies for a lot of the space science reason stuff as well, but like the science fiction stuff rather. But I've had nightmares about them because boy, is that incredibly creepy. Like concept, like not just the xenomorphs themselves, but also like the face huggers. I've had nightmares before about being trapped in a building full of face huggers and having to run through with my hand over my mouth so that I didn't get impregnated. Right? Like I've had those nightmares before, and I've my friends have laughed at me about having nightmares about that type of sequence, about those movies, right? Because they can watch those movies without being scared at all. And then I'll ask those same friends if they watch Event Horizon, and they'll go, "F that movie! I'm never watching that movie ever again. That movie scarred me for life." Because Event Horizon is absolutely darker and creepier. And yeah, part of it is a religious thing, because obviously the concept of Event Horizon is the idea that this spaceship has accidentally found a way to hell without dying, which is what intrigued me about the concept in the first place. And so I glommed onto that movie, and it's my favorite horror movie of all time. But it was few and far between, because I'm like, well, they just don't make a lot of horror movies like that. Because to me, horror is not all jump scares and being instantly terrified or shock value, right? It's not about shock value. And there are a lot of horror movies that just pride themselves exclusively on shock value, and they have shit for plot. They have nothing for character development, right? And that's not the type of horror movie that I am into. I need something with story. I need something with character development. I need something with a plot that I can sink my teeth into. I feel Event Horizon has that. Do I think it's a little short? Yes. Hour and 38 minutes is a little short for a movie like that. They could have made it 2 hours, and I would have been perfectly fine with that. However, I still think it's quite good for what it does in that time frame. And so I went through life just accepting, well, most horror movies are not going to be like that, so it is what it is. And then back in 2019, the year before the pandemic, there was a show that Scott and I did over at Squadcast Media. We did it specifically for the Patreon, the Squadcast Media Patreon, because we had Fans Without Borders, and there were times where Brent and I would do movie reviews on stuff that wasn't comic book movies. I don't remember all of them, but we would talk about, other movies, and we would talk about them on Patreon or on the main show or whatever. But there was a list of movies in 2019 that Scott and I wanted to watch that Brent had no interest in watching. So we started a show on Patreon called Fans Without Borders Plus, Stuff That Brent Won't Watch. And we would review movies that came out that year that he had no interest in seeing. We saw Detective Pikachu, we saw Men in Black International, we saw Godzilla King of the Monsters, whole host of movies. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. There was a ton of movies that we reviewed for that Patreon show that year. One of those movies, actually two of those movies that we reviewed, rather, were Stephen King adaptations. We saw It Chapter 2, and we saw Doctor Sleep. Now, in my case, I was interested in it, but wasn't 100% certain about it, and I had to watch the first one, part one, the Andy Muschietti versions. Had to watch part one first. I did, and then later that night went to the theater and watched part two, and I really enjoyed it, really liked it. We had a really good review of it. And then the next month, I went and saw Doctor Sleep, which is Mike Flanagan, and I really liked that movie. And that was when I had a revelation about me and horror movies, Amr. And that revelation is horror that has plot and character development right up my alley. I'm not a jump scares person. I'm not a shock value person. I need depth. I need story. I need something there. I need meat on its bones. I need to be some type of quote unquote real movie and not just something that is trying to scare me every 10 minutes for an hour and a half or whatnot, right? And that's why I say, Amr, you're perfectly fine with respect to how you are digesting horror movies. There isn't a list that I can give you to be like, well, here's the ones that you can really sink your teeth into. You said you find them creepy and unsettling at times. There's nothing wrong with that because that's still horror, right? Horror isn't confined to just jump scares. It's not confined to just shock value. It can be that. There are certain movies that certainly do that, right? But the unsettling and the creepy nature, that's also a part of it. That's also a part of the genre, right? And there are movies like that that serve that purpose very well. The original film, Doctor Sleep is a sequel to The Shining. I have not read the book, but I've seen the original film, The Shining, with Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall, and that movie is extremely creepy. And it doesn't really have much in the way of jump scares and shock value. I mean, there's a couple of shocking scenes in it, but it's really meant to be creepy and unsettling throughout. Especially, when you find out what he's been typing on that novel the entire time, right? Just as an aside. But yeah, you're fine, man. I think the way that you're like absorbing horror movies, like that's part of the genre. And I don't think there's this magic elixir or magic list of films where it's like, well, here are the ones that you really sink your teeth into. No, the way that you're absorbing them now, perfectly okay, because that's part of the genre as well. That's how the genre is constructed. That's how the genre is received. And I'm with you. I've had way more jump scares in movies that weren't meant to be horror movies. The one that really stands out to me, the one that I will never forget as a kid, was Jurassic Park. The first Jurassic Park film. We went to go see that. Me and my dad, my sister Rachel, we went to go see that. And it's the jump scare that you talk to anybody, I guarantee you talk to most people that saw this movie when it first came out, and they'll tell you the exact same thing. It's the point where Ellie has turned on all the power again, and she's all excited. Tim just got jolted, and he fell off the fence because he didn't climb off the fence in time before it got reignited. But it's this more uplifting music from John Williams, and Ellie is standing there, and the camera zooms in on her, and she's got a smile on her face, and she's like, "Mr. Hammond, I think we're back in business." And then out of nowhere, Raptor jumps out from behind the wires and lunges at her, and that got me so badly. That jump scare scared the dog shit out of me as a kid. I was just like, oh my god, like just I don't think I made a noise, but I definitely recoiled. That got me really badly when that raptor jumped out from behind that panel, and that's still to me one of the most memorable jump scares I've ever had. And even though Jurassic Park is a monster movie, it's not a horror movie. Like, it's got aspects that are creepy and horror like, but it's a monster movie. Monster movies are classified, I feel, a little bit differently than straight up horror movies in that regard. But yeah, there are other movies. There's one. I watched a TikTok video a week or so ago. This guy was showing his girlfriend The Dark Knight for the first time. And there's that scene in The Dark Knight where the mayor is talking to Harvey Dent, and he walks up to the window, and then out of nowhere, the body of that Batman impersonator hits the window, and it's punctuated by this musical cue from Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard. There's just like, da-da, right? And it freaked her out. And that's definitely a jump scare. And I remember people being startled in the theater when the first night that we saw that, right? That's not a horror movie either. That's a thriller movie, right? So it's not all about jump scares. And a lot of those types of jump scares, they are more effective in movies where you're not prepared for scary shit, where you're not prepared for a jump scare to occur. I feel they can be far more effective in other types of films outside of the horror genre. But the horror genre is not exclusive to jump scares. It's not exclusively jump scares and shock value. In fact, I think the best horror films are the ones steeped in plot, steeped in character development, the ones that actually have a story to tell that is creepy, that is like otherworldly, that is unsettling in that regard. I think you've hit the nail on the head of what the horror genre actually is. So I think you're fine. You don't need to be caught off guard with respect to it. I think you're absolutely okay. Do these movies, do these experiences speak out to you in a different way that is creepy and unsettling? That's really the question to ask yourself. And if the answer is yes, then you are immersing yourself in the horror genre, and it's perfectly fine. I mean, I could give you a list, but I'm not necessarily a horror expert. There's a lot of movies that I would like to see. The Conjuring actually is a series that I would like to watch. I'd like to watch those films. I think, aren't the Annabelle films part of that as well? I forget how that continuity all works. I was briefly researching it when the doll vanished a couple of months ago, and people were freaking out about it on TikTok and social media. But yeah, there's some more of those that I would like to watch that definitely are on my radar to watch. right? Now that I know the type of horror movie that I actually enjoy and want to see more of, I want to watch those. And I just did that actually. The Patreon episode, I did a review of the Hellraiser Quartet of Torment because a coworker of mine told me or seconded what I had heard, which people were telling me that Event Horizon was basically Hellraiser in space. And I'm like, oh, well, then that means I might like Hellraiser. And as it turns out, I do like Hellraiser. If you want to hear my full thoughts on her, it's available at patreon.com/theflightcast. That did a full flight review of all 4 of those Hellraiser films, the theatrically released Hellraiser films. And at some point, I do want to continue on to the ones that weren't theatrically released, just as a measure. But yeah, that was the story, and that was the character development. That was the other things inherent that I'm looking for in a horror movie that I don't always get in horror films, right? So that type of stuff, yes, absolutely, I gravitate toward. And if that's what, enriches your experience, then you're perfectly fine, man. There's no issues with respect to how you're absorbing horror movies. You're not missing out on anything just because you're not getting jump scares. And I don't know if that's what you were saying. It sounded like that's what you might have been implying, but no, you're good, man. You're all set with respect to that. So it was a bit of a longer answer, but that was a good question. I like talking about that. So moving on. Now on to the stuff I've watched, he says. I'll start with Star Wars Rebels. I thought Star Wars Rebels was fun and a great watch from beginning to end. It was a fantastic addition to the ever-growing library of Star Wars media. What started out as a simple Disney XD show about a ragtag crew fighting the Empire slowly evolved into one of the most emotionally rich and lore-expanding stories in a galaxy far, far away. Oh, Anthony Dorsey his heart is warmed by what you've just said. So is mine, because Rebels is fantastic. Now that I have finally watched it, I need to rewatch it at some point. I don't know when I'm going to find time for that. But Amr says, in retrospect, having watched the Ahsoka TV series before Rebels, it now feels like Ahsoka was essentially Rebels Season 5 with a heavier focus on Ahsoka herself. Ding, ding, ding. You are absolutely correct on that one, Amr. Yes. So much of the emotional weight, he says, in Ahsoka now hits harder because of the foundation Rebels laid, particularly in terms of character relationships, the lingering impact of Ezra's sacrifice, and the looming threat of Thrawn. Absolutely. Speaking of which, he says, the Ghost Crew has now become some of my favorite Star Wars characters of all time. Each of them, Hera, Kanan, Ezra, Sabine, Zeb, and even Chopper, that asshole, brought something unique to the table, and their dynamic as a found family was the beating heart of the series. I thought the series finale was fantastic, emotional, satisfying, and filled with hope. Yeah, no, the last shot of the finale of Rebels was definitely emotional for me. Like I did get teary-eyed with the way, especially with the musical cue and just that last shot. That artwork was just, oh, it was gorgeous. It was really, really well done. Amr says it's easy to forget, given how deep and heavy it gets, that the show technically has a TV Y7 rating and originally aired on Disney XD. That's wild. Rebels handles loss, trauma, sacrifice, war, and legacy better than some live-action entries in the franchise. Kanan's arc in particular, especially post-blindness, is a stand-up portrayal of what it means to be a Jedi and to truly trust in the Force. His ultimate sacrifice was deeply emotional, and it hit hard because of how well the show built his character up over time. Ezra also really grew on me throughout the series. When I started, I didn't have much connection to him, especially since my first introduction was through Ahsoka, where he was more of an idea than a presence. But by the end of Rebels, I genuinely cared about him. Watching him go from a brash, impulsive kid into a brave, selfless leader was one of the best parts of the journey, he says. The show also adds a lot of cool lore to the Star Wars universe, at least for me. Concepts like the world between worlds, the Loth Wolves, and the Bendu introduce new layers of mysticism and Force philosophy that make the galaxy feel deeper and stranger in the best way possible. It challenged the idea that Jedi and Sith are the only ways to understand the Force and added a more spiritual, almost mythic dimension to the universe. And then there's the Maul and Vader stuff, he says, which was amazing. Seeing Maul return and manipulate Ezra while haunted by his past was tragic and gripping. His final showdown with Obi-Wan was a brief but beautiful, perfect conclusion to a rivalry that spanned decades. And Darth Vader? Every time he appeared, it felt awesome to see, he says. His duel with Ahsoka is one of the most powerful and emotional moments in all of Star Wars. Haunting, beautifully animated, and steeped in unresolved history. And then there's Thrawn, he says. I had heard a lot of praise for Thrawn as a villain even before I watched Rebels. When I first saw him in Ahsoka, I thought he was just okay, cold and clever, but not particularly compelling. But after Rebels, now I get the praise. Thrawn in Rebels is one of the most chilling and intelligent villains in all of Star Wars. He's not driven by rage or ego. He's calm, calculating, and utterly precise. The way he studies a culture's art to understand his enemies is such a unique and terrifying concept. His strategies feel real, his presence is commanding, and his restraint makes him all the more dangerous. He's not here to monologue or posture, he's here to win. And he nearly does. It was also a really cool surprise to find out that Lars Mikkelsen voiced Thrawn in Rebels and ended up playing him in live action in Ahsoka. That kind of continuity is rare, and it made his transition to live action feel completely natural. His voice was already perfect, but now with his physical performance added in, he truly embodies the character. Yeah, that was one of the things, Amr, that quite honestly we were lobbying for. We wanted Lars Mikkelsen to reprise him in live action, and truthfully, if you go to before the time when Rebels was like announced, before Rebels was released, or before Ahsoka was released, rather, and you look at all the different fan renderings of Lars Mikkelsen as Thrawn, they essentially just did that, right? It just absolutely did that in live action, and it was perfect because, again, the voice and the mannerisms, the attitude, it's all there. It's one of the best examples of, keeping the continuity from animation to live action that we've ever seen. Seriously, for him to continue to play Thrawn in live action, I can't wait to see him going forward in the next season. It's phenomenal. It's really, really well done. He says, all in all, Star Wars Rebels genuinely impressed me. It deepened the lore, brought new favorite characters into my life, and emotionally paid off in ways I didn't expect from something labeled a kid show. It's a story about hope, family, and sacrifice, the core of what makes Star Wars great, and it made me appreciate the franchise in a whole new light. And now, going into my Ahsoka rewatch, everything is going to feel just so much more meaningful. I now have a real connection to these characters, not just Ahsoka, but Ezra, Sabine, Hera, and Thrawn. Knowing their journeys, their scars, and their bonds makes the stakes feel more real. I am very glad, and I know many of us are very glad that you enjoyed your time with Rebels, Amr. That's fantastic. It's outstanding. Welcome to the club. And now you can appreciate, like you said, Ahsoka even better as a series. And the lore of Star Wars has deepened that much more for you, good sir. So, fantastic. All right. Now, in true non-rivalrous form, we will go right into the other Star franchise, the one that, of course, is nearest and dearest to my heart, Star Trek. He says, now on to the final frontier. As of writing this, I watched 14 episodes of Season 6. He's halfway. He's halfway through Season 6 already. Yes. As always, I'll go through them one by one. All right. Here we go. Here, I got to take a break. Hang on, I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. Had to get a drink of water. Had to prepare myself. All right, here we go. He started with Episode 1 of Season 6, Time's Arrow, Part 2. He says, right from the start, the mystery deepens and the tension ramps up. The crew now has boots on the ground in 19th century San Francisco, yes, and it's a joy to watch how each of them adapts to the time period, especially Picard, who's trying to keep the timeline intact while unraveling the aliens' plot. We also get the continuation of Data's arc, seeing how he functions in the past, tries to stay inconspicuous, forges connections, and carries out his mission. This was a decent season opener, continuing the story from Part 1 with a solid pace and engaging moments. However, it didn't quite carry the grandeur one might expect, he says. Time's Arrow Part 2 feels more like a traditional TNG episode with thoughtful sci-fi themes, character interplay, and a mystery that ties up neatly. It preserves the show's commitment to introspective storytelling even if it doesn't push character arcs dramatically forward. Nothing like Seasons 3 and 4's finale two-parters. That's true. I will agree with that. Redemption and The Best of Both Worlds certainly were stronger in that regard. I still like Time's Arrow, but yeah, I'm with him on that one. The inclusion of Mark Twain as a supporting character, he says, was interesting, if at first a bit grating. His exaggerated skepticism and loud personality initially come off as disruptive, but once he boards the Enterprise, the script smartly turns his skepticism into awe and reflection. His conversation with Deanna Troi is a standout moment. It captures a classic time travel question. What happens when someone from a primitive century is confronted with the ideals, technology, and evolution of humanity's future? The scene becomes a genuine moment of humility and wonder, showcasing that humanity hasn't lost its soul despite its technological progress. He says, while Time's Arrow Part 2 may not have matched the emotional punch and explosive finales and openers of previous seasons, it still delivers a satisfying and character-driven continuation with thoughtful sci-fi, a few standout moments, and a grounded humanist note. It's a respectable way to kick off Season 6. Agreed. And one other thing that I did want to mention is that we do get closure and like a circular nature to the relationship between Picard and Guinan, because remember, she suggests that if he doesn't go on that away mission, that they'll never meet. And sure enough, their first meeting was indeed then in that regard. And it's crazy to think of it in time travel perspectives where Guinan met Picard well after he had met her, right? So like hundreds of years had passed, right? And then just, Guinan being over 500 years old herself, she was relatively young in the 1800s and now is a very elder individual as an Elorian on the board the Enterprise D. And so that was always cool. And I like how they incorporated Whoopi Goldberg into this two-parter and made her character a very integral part of it in that regard. Because I've always loved Guinan. Guinan is one of my favorite characters in Star Trek, let alone in TNG, let alone Star Trek in that regard. So yeah, that was cool. Just wanted to add that as well. That was something that also got tied up as well in the second part of Time Zero. All right, on to episode 2 of season 6, Realm of Fear. Ooh, here we go. Yes, a Barclay episode. The other Barclay episode. This episode shifts the focus onto Lieutenant Barclay, and it's a welcome one, Amr says. Reg Barclay has always been one of TNG's more unique and relatable characters. Awkward, anxious, and often unsure of himself in a crew full of near-perfect officers. Giving him a transporter-centered episode that literalizes his fear in classic Trek fashion is a smart move. Agreed. Completely agree with that. The psychological horror angle is played well, he says. Strange phasing sensations, ghostly figures in the transporter beam, and Barclay slowly unraveling under pressure. Up until now, the transporter has always been treated like how we treat an elevator or plane, just another tool. But here, the episode forces both characters and viewers to stop and think about what it really does. Breaking someone down molecule by molecule and reassembling them elsewhere. That's existential nightmare fuel, and Barclay's fear, once played mostly for laughs, suddenly feels very valid and deeply human. This episode made me reconsider the transporter myself, he says. It's always just been a part of the fabric of Star Trek, something you accept without question. But hearing the characters describe its inner workings gave me a new appreciation for how unsettling it can be. It also helped me understand why someone in-universe might develop a legitimate phobia around it. What sets Realm of Fear apart is how it treats Barclay's anxiety with empathy rather than ridicule. Instead of leaning solely into his awkwardness, the story puts us inside his mind, letting us feel his dread and uncertainty. I'm sure we all felt something is wrong with us, and then we look at the symptoms we're feeling online and WebMD or some other similar website. It's some type of terminal illness, and out of anxiety and fear, we trick ourselves into thinking it's true, until we visit the doctor like we're supposed to in the first place, and it's just some common cold and nothing deadly. The ghost in the transporter stream mystery adds a clever sci-fi twist to his emotional journey, he says, turning what could have been a simple Barclay is scared again episode into a compelling psychological narrative. Despite being the most terrified person aboard the Enterprise, Barclay is the one who ultimately solves the mystery and saves the missing crew members trapped mid-transport. His arc isn't about having no fear, it's about pushing through it. That's classic Star Trek, using a futuristic concept to explore very real, very human themes. The inclusion of ghostly imagery, the eerie body horror undertone, and the final reveal that Barclay's visions were really lend an episode to a unique psychological edge. While it may not be one of TNG's flashiest or most iconic stories, Realm of Fear is a thoughtful, character-driven episode that offers a fresh look at something we've long taken for granted and gives Barclay one of his most memorable appearances. Yeah. And let's also give a shout out to O'Brien and his pet tarantula. Who kind of stole the show a little bit, like at the towards the tail end of the episode, with respect to that, because like phobias and psychological terrors were definitely a focus of this, and because it was centered around the transporters, O'Brien had to be involved, right, for sure. And this is just before he leaves the ship. Oh, I'm sorry, did I say that out loud? Yes, there's going to be a point, Amr, where Miles O'Brien is going to leave the Enterprise. It's not going to happen anytime soon necessarily, although I don't remember exactly when it occurs. But this is the season. Season 6 of Star Trek The Next Generation is the same time when Season 1 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine premieres, and O'Brien will leave the Enterprise and become the chief aboard that station. He will become a regular on that show. That's why I'm bringing it up. Not as a spoiler, but just to let you know, this is the bridge point. If you want to continue on, Deep Space Nine will start here at the point that you're at now in TNG. So just to give you that heads up with respect to that. All right, on to episode 3, Man of the People. Oh, yeah, this is a deep one. This is a creepy one indeed. He says Man of the People is one of those Star Trek The Next Generation episodes that leans into psychological and emotional manipulation in a very literal way. The focus is on Counselor Deanna Troi, who becomes a pawn in an alien diplomat's deeply unethical method of emotional regulation, using her as a telepathic dumping ground for his own negative emotions. There's a lot to unpack in the episode, he says. Unethical diplomacy, emotional trauma, exploitation, and metaphors for toxic relationships. It explores how emotional labor can be one-sided and weaponized, all under the guise of diplomacy. The narrative parallels earlier TNG stories, most notably Season 3, Episode 8, The Price, where Troy is again placed in a vulnerable position, emotionally manipulated by a man who hides behind charm and professional necessity. Because of that similarity, the plot may feel like a retread. Yeah, but I hear you on that. You're right. There definitely are some comparisons between Devanoni Rall in the Price and Alcar in this episode. Yes, there are definitely comparisons, but this is definitely darker and definitely more destructive to Deanna in this regard. And Amber says, what helps Man of the People stand out, however, is Marina Sirtis's performance. She takes Troy on a disturbing psychological descent, transforming from her usual calm, compassionate self into someone volatile, overtly seductive, and emotionally unmoored. This transformation is never cartoonish. It's uncomfortable, raw, and deeply human. Sirtis clearly relishes the chance to portray a side of Troy rarely seen, and she does so with commanding presence. While the episode's premise doesn't break new ground narratively, the execution, driven almost entirely by Sirtis's acting, makes it a memorable if flawed entry. It's an unsettling watch, not because of big sci-fi spectacle, but because of how effectively it puts emotional violation and toxic dependency under the microscope. Yeah, so I'm with you on the comparisons to The Price. I would also say Season 5 Violations is also, there's some comparisons there as well, and that was a very unsettling episode in terms of the telepathic manipulation and emotional manipulation of people in that regard. So yeah, I'm with you on that. It doesn't break new ground necessarily, but it definitely, her performance, yeah, it's a very vibrant piece of a very creepier episode of the show in that regard. All right. So then on to episode 4. This is a whiplash effect. Episode 4, Relics. Amr says Relics is one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation so far. It stands out not only for its emotional depth and sci-fi intrigue, but also for the way it connects different eras of Star Trek. At first, I didn't even realize James Doohan was playing the Montgomery Scotty, mainly because I'm not familiar with the original series cast beyond William Shatner as Kirk and Leonard Nimoy as Spock. My first real brush with Star Trek was actually through the 2009 reboot movies, so Simon Pegg's Scotty is the one that I knew best. When Doohan's character introduced himself as Scotty, I had that moment of surprise. Wait a minute. The Montgomery Scott? Even though I didn't recognize Doohan right away, once I made the connection, I could clearly see that this Scotty and the 2009 version are the same character. The reboot totally nailed his personality. This episode actually made me want to check out the original series, which I now plan to do. Yes! Yes! Fantastic. That is outstanding news, Amber. Thank you. I cannot wait for that. Let's continue on with TNG. From a story perspective, he says, I really appreciated how the episode explores themes like aging, purpose, and feeling obsolete in a changing world. Scotty waking up in a future where he no longer fits in is incredibly human. His struggle to find relevance and his frustration when people like Geordi initially dismiss him hit hard. The eventual mutual respect between Scotty and Geordi was well earned and satisfying to watch. Yes, especially since Geordi is absolutely the modern day interpretation of Scotty. Scotty literally walked on the original series so that Geordi could run, as far as being chief engineer, right? And you see a lot of that with the back and forth in terms of the way that Scotty used to do things and the way that Geordi does things. Like, they're both miracle workers in their own right, but they have very different ways of doing it. And it's just part of the evolution of how chief engineer has evolved, not just in terms of Starfleet, but certainly aboard the Enterprise in that regard. So that was a very nice juxtaposition to see, and I thought that James Doohan and LeVar Burton were phenomenal together in their scenes. The scene in the holodeck, he says, where Scotty recreates the bridge of the original Enterprise was beautiful. Even without the nostalgia of having watched the original series, I still felt something. It's a quiet, moving moment, not just fan service, but a reflection on memory, legacy, and letting go. I can only imagine how much more powerful that moment is for longtime fans. Yes, it's a very striking moment, and I love that the conversation that he has with Picard with respect to that, because it's ultimate reverence to the original series and ultimate tribute to the DNA, right, to the mothership show that started this whole incredible franchise on its journey way back in 1966. And he says, on top of all that emotional weight, there's also a cool mystery with the Dyson Sphere, which adds a sense of wonder and scale. I love when TNG pairs heartfelt character stories with classic space exploration elements, and Relics does that really well. All in all, this episode worked for me on multiple levels. It made me curious about Star Trek's past, gave me a deeper appreciation for a legacy character, and delivered a thoughtful, relatable story about change and belonging. Even as someone new to the older shows, Relics felt like something special. All right, so I will let you know, Amr, that I brought this up before. The 1994 Star Trek The Next Generation Viewer's Choice Marathon. 5 episodes were voted on by phone. I voted in that, called the 900 number. Episodes 1 and 2 in that Viewer's Choice Marathon that were shown second to last and last was The Best of Both Worlds Part 1 and 2. The third episode in that list was Yesterday's Enterprise. The fourth episode on that list was The Inner Light. And the fifth and final episode that was shown first in that marathon was Relics. Relics was the fifth episode in the Viewer's Choice Marathon that was chosen by the fans as the favorite all the way back in 1994 during the final season of Star Trek The Next Generation. So you have now watched all 5 of the episodes that were in that Viewer's Choice Marathon that we voted on way, way back when. So just wanted to point that out. This is absolutely a classic for all of the reasons that you mentioned. I couldn't have put it any better than you did, as always, good sir. So on to episode 5, Schisms. Now this was a creepy episode. You were not kidding, Amr. It was very creepy. The idea of being kidnapped in your sleep and surgically altered without your knowledge is genuinely disturbing, he says. It taps into a deep primal fear, being taken when you're at your most vulnerable, violated physically, and not even realizing it's happened. Schisms plays on that unease brilliantly, he says. It starts with small, almost innocuous details. Crew members feeling fatigued, noticing sore arms, losing track of time. That slow build-up is incredibly effective, and it mirrors classic alien abduction stories in a way that fits perfectly within the Star Trek universe. The holodeck scene where they reconstruct the alien operating table and hear those eerie clicking noises, that was a very chilling moment for me. It's not a horror episode in the traditional sense, but the psychological tension makes it hit even harder. I actually would argue that it is a horror episode, to be honest with you, in that regard. There's another one that happens later in this season. I don't know if you've gotten to it yet. Maybe you have, that I say is straight up horror, psychological horror. But no, this one I think does qualify that. This is extremely creepy. He says, I saw it as another solid TNG mystery, but this time with a really eerie twist. It stands out because it leans into sci-fi horror without abandoning the show's usual intellectual tone. It's unsettling in the best way and shows just how versatile the Next Generation can be. Agreed. It's not an episode that a lot of people talk about, but it is definitely a genuinely creepy one that serves its purpose without question. All right, now we got a Q episode coming up. Episode 6, True Q. This was a fascinating Q-centered episode, he says, that brought back some of the metaphysical weight the Continuum often carries, while also introducing a new and compelling character in Amanda Rogers. At first, she seems like a promising young Starfleet intern, but that cold open where she stops the fallen containers with a mere thought immediately hints that there's more going on. As the episode unfolds, we learn she's actually the child of 2 rogue Qs, something the Continuum isn't too happy about. It's been a while since we've seen Q, he says. He didn't show up at all last season. That's true. He was not in season 5. So having him return in a more nuanced role was a welcome surprise, he says. This time he's not just here to cause chaos, but to act as a recruiter and judge, which changes the dynamic entirely. He's still mischievous, of course, but there's more weight to his presence, and it gives the episode an edge of philosophical tension. Amanda's arc is genuinely compelling. Her powers grow stronger, but so does her emotional struggle as she grapples with what kind of being she wants to be. Her crush on Riker adds a layer of vulnerability that makes her feel more grounded and relatable. That said, I was surprised they didn't reference Riker's own experience with Q-like powers back in Season 1's Hide and Q. That could have added a lot of depth to his interactions with Amanda and allowed him to offer a more personal perspective on the dangers of wielding godlike abilities. It could have. I feel like the writers probably felt, well, that was 5 years ago. Riker has gone through so many evolutionary changes and is certainly not the same first officer now as he was then, so they probably just chalked that up to, well, he's not the same person. We're not going to pull on that thread necessarily. I hear where you're coming from with that, though, Amr. He says, still, the heart of the episode is Amanda's choice, not just whether to join the Continuum, but whether to define herself by power or by her values. Her decision to stay grounded in compassion and individuality rather than omnipotence ties directly into TNG's ongoing themes of humanity, moral agency, and self-determination. Overall, I really enjoyed this one, he says. It manages to be both a character-driven story and a thought-provoking episode that puts Q to good use, not just as a chaotic force, but as a philosophical foil. It's a strong entry that asks big questions in the way TNG does best. Yes, indeed. And you may or may not have another Q journey this season to make up for the fact that you didn't have one in season 5, potentially. But, and you may have already gotten to it. I forget where it lands here. I'm going to do a quick scroll ahead just to look and see where you're at. And all right, I'm not going to say yay or nay on that, but here we go. Next episode, episode 7, Rascals. Oh my goodness, here we go. He says this was a very fun episode. On paper, the concept sounds pretty silly. A transporter accident turns Captain Picard, Ensign Ro, Guinan, and Keiko O'Brien into 12-year-old versions of themselves. Physically kids, but still mentally adults. But Rascals leans into the absurdity in a way that's not only entertaining, but surprisingly thoughtful. It was great seeing the younger versions of these characters. The premise is full of funny and wholesome moments. One of my favorites was when Child Picard acts like nothing is wrong and casually gives an order to plot a course. If I were that ensign, I don't think I'd be able to keep a straight face. Picard might look like a kid, but he's still very much Picard. His presence and authority don't just vanish because of how he looks. The same goes for the others, which makes the contrast between their bodies and minds so fun to watch. The episode does a good job of giving each of the kids some meaningful moments. Rose's subplot was especially interesting, having a second chance at childhood, something she clearly didn't get to enjoy the first time around. Adds a surprisingly emotional layer. Guinan helping her come to terms with that gives their scenes a lot of heart. The Ferengi takeover adds just enough stakes to keep things moving, but the real charm of the episode is in how the characters adapt to their bizarre situation. It manages to be funny, sweet, and a little bit reflective all at once. Definitely one of the more light-hearted standouts of the series. Yeah, and thank you for highlighting the whole relationship between Guinan and Ro. And yeah, the thing is, and this goes into more of the Bajoran background that Ro has, and how, no, she did not get a childhood because of the occupation and because of everything that happened with respect to the Bajorans and the Cardassians, which you can find a lot more about if you watch Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Just throwing that out there. But either way, I also want to point out that this particular episode was directed by Adam Nimoy, son of Leonard Nimoy, and I also wanted to point out David Tristan Birkin, the actor who plays young Jean-Luc Picard. You've seen him before. He played Rene, who is Robert's son. That's Picard's brother in the episode Family at the beginning of season 4. You've seen this actor before. So he was the same actor, and his hair was longer, and obviously his voice was not as deep. His voice is deeper here because he's aged. It's been a couple of years. But same actor that played his nephew Rene is the one that plays the younger version of him in this episode. He did a fantastic job. I mean, I don't know like how he studied or you know where that went, like as far as his mannerisms and him being able to mimic Patrick Stewart as well as he did, but he did a fantastic job with respect to playing a younger version that still had the older mind of Picard. And yeah, I'm with you. The Ferengi stuff definitely is a plot device to move everything along, but it's all about the character interactions. It's really, really well done. And hats off to all the child actors that, you know, did a great job in an episode that, you know, otherwise could be considered extremely goofy, but manages to be very insightful and emotional at the same time. All right, episode 8, A Fistful of Datas. This was a wild, fun episode, Amr says. I agree. Another holodeck adventure, and a welcome one since we didn't get any last season. I know holodeck episodes get flack from some parts of the fandom for being repetitive or far-fetched, but I enjoy them. They're often creative and bring a different energy to the show. This one, A Fistful of Datas, had a great premise, blending a classic Western scenario with a data-centric twist. The title is awesome too, not just a clever nod to a fistful of dollars, but also accurate within the episode itself since we end up with a literal fistful of datas running around. This episode strikes a really nice balance between action, humor, and character moments. Yes, it's a holodeck malfunction story, but it doesn't feel stale. Seeing the crew navigate the chaos of Data's personas taking over the simulation was genuinely fun. Data and a mustache? Hilarious. His mannerisms and performances as the various Western characters were spot on and added just the right amount of absurdity without breaking the episode. It's also a surprisingly Worf-centric episode. The cold open with Picard playing the flute was a nice touch, a subtle callback to the Inner Light that reminded me how much depth Picard carries outside of his captain persona. But once we move to Worf, the episode becomes a great vehicle for his character. His no-nonsense attitude in the middle of a ridiculous Western scenario makes for some great comedic contrast. I honestly assumed that since he grew up on Earth with human parents, he'd be more familiar with Westerns. Maybe he just wasn't interested until now. I also love the idea, he says, of the crew referring to the Old West as the Ancient West. It's such a clever little detail because from their point of view, it really is ancient, like how we view ancient Rome or Egypt. It's a good reminder of just how far into the future we are in TNG. Oh yeah, 300 plus years. The final scene with Worf looking at himself in the mirror wearing the cowboy hat was surprisingly wholesome. It was a rare moment where he embraced something playful and childlike, and I loved that. The final shot of the Enterprise flying above a planet stood out too, a refreshing change from the usual Starfield backdrop and a nice bit of visual flair to close the episode. Yeah, it was riding off into the sunset. You caught that, right? That's what the Enterprise was literally riding off into the sunset, like the hero on horseback in a western riding off into the sunset. That was totally exactly what that was. He says, overall, A Fistful of Datas was a fun, lighthearted break from the more serious episodes. It brought creativity, humor, and some great character moments, especially for Worf and Data. I know holodeck episodes have their detractors, but this one really worked for me. The MVP, I gotta say, of this episode was Brent Spiner, because this really shows you the range of voices and characters that he's able to play. And he's done this in his career for years. Like, he's played, if you look at the breadth of his career in television and in film, he's played such a wide variety of different characters, mannerisms, accents, etc. He's really good at that. And this episode of TNG allowed him to play with all of it. And there's a few episodes like that where he's able to do it. There's one in season 7 that is maligned by a lot of fans, but I don't care. I love it. It's amazing. It's fantastic. It's my favorite that he does. You haven't got there yet. We'll get to that point, but whenever Brent Spiner is allowed to play with multiple characters like this in an episode, I really, really appreciate that, because he's been a really good character actor his whole career in being able to do that. So there you have it. And you know what? It's funny because that wasn't a data-centric episode. It was a Worf-centric episode, but it's a great bridge into this next episode, which is extremely data-centric, The Quality of Life. A really solid episode, Amers calls it. It dives into the nature of life, consciousness, and ethics in classic TNG fashion, especially through Data's perspective, he says. With the introduction of exocomps, these seemingly simple engineering tools present a complex moral dilemma when Data begins to suspect that they're actually sentient. It's another great entry in the list of data-centric episodes, he says, especially because it puts him in direct conflict with Starfleet protocol. The moment he defies Riker's orders and risks a court-martial was one of my favorite parts, not just because of the drama, but because it shows how seriously Data takes the idea of moral responsibility, sometimes even more so than the humans around him. What made it even more powerful was how closely the exocomp situation mirrored Data's own struggle for recognition in earlier episodes, like The Measure of a Man. So of course he would be the first to notice something different in them, to see potential life where others see only tools. I loved that Picard backed Data in the end, a classic Star Trek moment where conscience takes precedence over the chain of command. The episode also adds another thoughtful layer to how artificial intelligence fits into Federation values. It doesn't just explore what it means to be alive, it asks when our duty to protect life begins. That's a question that feels especially relevant not only in Star Trek's future, but in our own. Absolutely. And the drop or the comparisons to The Measure of a Man absolutely are there without question. You know, you talk about his life being at stake, whether or not Picard having to prove his sentience, and of course, ironically, Riker wasn't debating his sentience, but he was the one that was forced to be the prosecutor in that particular trial, if you will, to prove Data's sentience. And now it's a situation where he finds himself on the other end of it with respect to the exocomps, because he doesn't want Geordi or Picard to die, and neither does Data, but he also wants the exocomps to be respected just as much as he was hoping, as he was fighting for his own respect in The Measure of a Man. So yeah, it's another great morality tale done so expertly well by this franchise. And then that takes us into one of the most hotly discussed two-parters in TNG history that isn't an actual series finale or season finale, season premiere in that regard, right? It's not one of those types. In fact, if I remember correctly, Chain of Command, which is what we're about to talk about here, parts 1 and 2, I believe this is the first two, no, it's the second two-parter, pardon me, because Unification, that's right, Unification, parts 1 and 2, that was the first two-parter in TNG history that wasn't ending a season and beginning another, right? This is the second one, and my goodness, this is one that the fans still discuss at great length and refer to at great length in this particular franchise. So Amr, let's see how you felt about it. He says, a fantastic two-parter. It was really great. Not the first time TNG has done a mid-season two-parter. Season 5 kicked off that pattern. Yep, like I said. But Chain of Command might be the most intense and thematically rich execution of it yet. That I will absolutely agree with. The story begins with a shock. Captain Picard is suddenly relieved of command by Starfleet orders. The cold open sets the tone immediately, disruptive and suspenseful. As we learn, Picard isn't being punished or reassigned routinely. He's being sent on a covert Black Ops mission deep into Cardassian territory. Starfleet suspects the Cardassians are developing a metagenic biological weapon, and the mission requires absolute secrecy. Worf and Dr. Crusher join Picard on this high-risk infiltration, and through their journey, we see a version of Star Trek that's rarely explored, one involving espionage, covert tactics, and politically charged maneuvering. Yes, all three of those on display in this two-parter. Back on the Enterprise, a new captain steps in, he says. Edward Jellicoe, formerly of the USS Cairo. Great name, by the way. Ah, yes. You would definitely appreciate that, Amr. Yes, indeed. Jellicoe is a total contrast to Picard in every way. Where Picard is diplomatic, collaborative, and considerate, Jellicoe is rigid, authoritative, and unapologetically militaristic. He gives orders, expects instant compliance, and doesn't concern himself with crew morale or emotional nuance. Picard treats his crew like family. Jellicoe treats them like employees. He's efficient, yes, but cold and domineering, creating an uneasy atmosphere that highlights just how much the crew and audience values Picard's leadership. This contrast, he says, forms the emotional backbone of Part 1. The friction between Jellicoe and the crew, especially Riker and Troy, underscores an ongoing TNG theme. That leadership is about more than just results. It's about trust, communication, and human connection. One unexpected detail that caught me off guard, he says, was Deanna Troy's uniform. Up until this point in the series, I never realized that she hadn't been wearing a standard Starfleet uniform. Turns out that for 5 seasons, Troy's attire had been more casual. I thought what she was wearing was what ship counselors wear, but with Jellicoe now in command, one of his requests to Deanna is for her to start wearing official duty uniform. A ship's counselor's uniform is the same as Dr. Crusher and other officers, not what Deanna was wearing. Yes, it's part of the sciences, the medical sciences, because obviously psychological counseling would go under the sciences and go under medical sciences and whatnot. He says it's a small moment in this two-parter, but a significant one in hindsight. Not only does it underscore Jellicoe's rigid approach to protocol, but it also marks a subtle shift for Troy's character going forward. This seemingly minor change actually carries more weight in a later episode. It does, doesn't it? And also, I would say that you will see Troy in the duty uniform more often going forward from the rest of this show. And I don't know if there's an out of canon, like an out of like a behind the scenes reason as a result of that. But yes, the whole idea that the dresses and the jumpsuit that she wore like earlier on, like that's to be, that was to give a more like comfortable, type of representation as her character being a counselor to the rest of the ship, rather than the formality of being, a Starfleet officer, even though she absolutely is a Starfleet officer. But there are absolutely demonstrative reasons as to why she wears that uniform going forward, officially in that regard. So it'd be interesting to get into that as well. And you're right. That's a small detail that goes unnoticed, but it absolutely informs everything that is happening with the emotional backbone of how different Jellicoe is from Picard. And I will get into the significance of the actor that plays Edward Jellicoe here at the end of this. But he says, as part 2 begins, the stakes escalate. Picard's mission goes south, and he's captured by the Cardassians, leading to one of the most powerful segments in the entire series. His captor, Gul Madred, subjects him to psychological and physical torture in an attempt to break his spirit and extract information. The infamous "There Are Four Lights" sequence becomes the heart of the story, a searing exploration of psychological resilience, truth under pressure, and authoritarian cruelty. David Warner, yes, thank you, mention him by name, may he rest in peace. David Warner delivers a chilling performance as Gul Madred, Amr says, combining cold intelligence with sadistic curiosity. But it's Patrick Stewart who commands the screen. His performance, showing a man being slowly dismantled inch by inch, yet refusing to surrender his identity, is a masterclass in acting. Stewart's classical training shines, but more than that, he imbues Picard with a quiet, agonizing humanity. The final scene where he admits to Troy that he was this close to saying there were 5 lights, and even briefly believed it, is one of the most devastatingly honest moments in TNG history. The trauma isn't reset by the next episode, it lingers, and that honesty makes it unforgettable. Together, parts 1 and 2 offer a profound exploration of duty, leadership, trauma, and resistance, whether it's the subtle politics of command aboard the Enterprise or the brutal reality of interrogation and control on Cardassia. Every element hits with weight and precision. It's one of the darkest and most grown-up stories the Next Generation ever told, and it never loses sight of its core ideals. There are 4 lights! That single line, shouted in defiance and whispered in doubt, will remain an iconic moment for me. Yes, no, there are four lights. Anytime you hear that, anytime you see that, that's exactly what somebody is referencing. And I mean, yeah, a masterclass of acting across the board from Patrick Stewart, of course, leading the way, especially in that part too, and David Warner. I mean, and at this point, he was a Star Trek veteran because he played St. John Talbot in Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. He was Chancellor Gorkin in Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. And I mean, just did a phenomenal job. This Gul Madred is probably, without question, his most well-known Star Trek role, his most prominent Star Trek role, and the one that he did the most with, without question, the one that they wrote the most for in that regard. But I want to talk about Jellicoe for a second here because I have a connection to this actor. His name is Ronnie Cox, and I will tell you that my introduction to him already told me what he was going to be in this episode, because here's the deal. Go back to the 80s. 1980s, Ronnie Cox has been in a number of really big movies, okay? A lot of people know Ronnie Cox as Dick Jones, OCP, from the first RoboCop movie, and he is a son of a bitch, an absolutely cold-hearted, evil son of a bitch in that film that gets exactly what is coming to him in more ways than one by the time the movie is over. He plays a villain there. And then a couple years later, he plays a villain in Total Recall. He is Velos Cohagen, president of Mars, in the Arnold version of Total Recall. Yes, in 1990. He is a son of a bitch in that movie as well. He's not in Beverly Hills Cop because he's also Lieutenant Bogomil in both Beverly Hills Cop 1 and Beverly Hills Cop 2. And he's actually a good guy, but he's still kind of a hard ass in that regard, right? And he's that guy, like if you go look at his credits, like he plays characters very similar to the character that he plays as Jellicoe here. And it's so iconic. He only gets 2 episodes, but I mean, Star Trek fans know that name. They know that characterization. And there are details about this episode, in addition to there are 4 lights, that people remember because of how he ran the Enterprise. And because of such a stark contrast there was between how brash and brutal he was compared to Picard, right? It made you realize that as much of an authoritarian as Picard could be at times being in command, he was nothing compared to Jellicoe in that regard. Definitely warmer, definitely. You saw the growth of Picard's character from season 1 all the way to season 6 in the juxtaposition between him and Jellicoe. And Ronnie Cox added so much with respect to that. It's also, you also get to see Natalia Nagulevich as Vice Admiral Nechayev, and she is a quintessential Badmiral. Oh yes, she is most certainly a Badmiral. Is this her first episode? This might be the first episode that she shows up in. You'll see her again in true Badmiral form. She is annoying. I don't like her. I've never liked her, but that's the point. She's not an Admiral that you're going to like. So she's the one that assigned Jellicoe from the Cairo to the Enterprise for this episode. And there is a lot of political intrigue. There's a lot of covert stuff. And once again, Amr, I've said it already a few times now, but I mean, you're starting to see there's a bit more with the Bajorans and the Cardassians in this season. So yeah, I know you said you're going to get into TOS, and that's great. Fantastic. Can't wait for that. But like I said, DS9's right there. DS9 right there, starting at the same time, season 1, same time as this season. There you go. It's right there. Oh, there's so much. So much. I love this franchise so much. But all right, let's continue with your last couple of episodes here on your TNG watch. You got 3 more. Next one, Ship in a Bottle. Ooh, okay, yeah, this one. He says, this episode came as a real surprise to me. I genuinely didn't expect a follow-up to Elementary Dear Data, especially not this late in the series. It's been 4 seasons since that episode aired, so I assume the whole Professor Moriarty thread had just been quietly dropped. Seeing it pick back up here and in such a clever way caught me completely off guard, in the best way. The return of Moriarty, a sentient holodeck character, instantly pulled me back into TNG's recurring exploration of artificial intelligence, consciousness, and ethical responsibility. In Ship in a Bottle, he's still seeking a way to exist outside the holodeck, which brings all those earlier questions back to the surface. What defines life? What rights does the self-aware program have? And can technology ever truly transcend its limitations? What really stood out to me, though, he says, was how twisty and layered the episode's structure was. It had a total Inception vibe, years before Inception even existed. Just when the crew and I thought they had exited the holodeck, the story flips everything on its head by revealing they were still inside. That moment totally worked on me. It was such a well-executed twist that it gave the episode this extra layer of suspense and philosophical weight. The episode did give a subtle clue. Remember when I said that Troy's uniform would play some sort of role in a later episode? In here, it does. Troy wears her formal uniform even though Jellicoe is not around anymore. At first I dismissed it. I thought she grew a liking to it, but when the twist was revealed, I noticed that detail in hindsight. Overall, this was a brilliant return to an old thread I never expected to see again. It reminded me how good TNG can be when it leans into the cerebral side of sci-fi while staying grounded in character and moral questions. Definitely a hidden gem in later seasons. Compared to the other holodeck episode this season, the previous one felt to me like the better episode. Yeah, I hear you on that one. Also, Barkley, remember Reg is in this episode as well. He's not necessarily, it's not centered around him, obviously, but he definitely is an integral part of what happens in this plot line. And what I said earlier about Troy's uniform still stands. And there are reasons behind it. You will see once you get to that. But all right. Episode 13, Aquiel. This was a decent episode, he says. I really like Geordi, but man, he has the worst luck when it comes to the women he falls for. Yes, that's kind of by design. I feel like the writers intentionally screwed him over with that. Most of the story plays out like a slow burn murder mystery, he says, with Aquiel positioned as the prime suspect. The suspense builds well, and I appreciated how it kept me guessing all the way through. Aquiel managed to pull off a good standalone mystery, he says. The setup, a remote communications outpost, a missing officer, cryptic personal logs, gives the episode an eerie, almost noir vibe. Aquiel herself is enigmatic, and there's a lingering tension about whether she's trustworthy, which works in the story's favor. What really stood out to me, he says, was that this episode finally gives Geordi a rare emotional win. In earlier episodes like Booby Trap and Galaxy's Child, his romantic instincts didn't exactly pay off, usually landing him in awkward or misguided situations. But here, his gut feeling that Aquiel isn't a murderer is actually proven right. That's a refreshing change. His empathy and trust aren't treated as flaws for once. They help him get closer to the truth. The shape-shifting alien twist was interesting. It takes the mystery and gives it that extra sci-fi flavor, while also tying into the broader themes of deception, identity, and the risk of seeing only what you want to see. Even if this episode doesn't break into the upper tier of the season, I found it satisfying, he says. It's not about reinventing the wheel, it's more about giving Geordi some growth and letting his character have a win that feels earned. For that alone, I think it's worth appreciating. Yes, and I also personally think, and I don't know this for a fact, but I think that the whole thing with the dog is a callback to John Carpenter's The Thing. Because anybody that has seen John Carpenter's The Thing, that's what it first impersonated when it infiltrated the camp after the Norwegians died trying to destroy it. And that ends up being the foil, the twist here at the end in terms of what the shape-shifting creature turned into at the end of the episode. Yeah, and there's definitely a creepy vibe to this episode as well. But yeah, I hear you with respect to, what it does for Geordi's emotional arc and things going on with respect to that. So yeah, one of the, I guess, mid-range episodes, not mid in terms of being a mid episode, but just, not upper tier, but certainly not lower tier. That's for sure. And then finally, for this particular catch-up, episode 14, Face of the Enemy. Oh my goodness, this one. He says, now this was a very awesome episode. The later seasons of TNG have really made me appreciate Deanna Troi more and more, and this one is easily a standout, if not the standout, of all the Troi-centric stories. You know what? Yeah, I think you're right. I think you might be right. And I'm thinking of some other ones that you haven't seen yet, but yeah, Face of the Enemy might be the strongest for her. Indeed. He says the setup is excellent. We open with Troi waking up in darkness, confused and clearly expecting to be in her quarters on the Enterprise. She asks the computer to turn on the lights but gets no response. So she gets up to do it herself, and then comes the shock. When we finally see her face, she's not just tired or disoriented, she's surgically altered to look like a Romulan. That reveal instantly grabbed me. It's chilling, mysterious, and completely pulled me in, he says. What follows is one of the most high-stakes, suspenseful, and personal episodes for Troi in the entire series. She's thrust into a covert mission she didn't volunteer for, forced to impersonate a Tau Shiar operative, and dropped right into the heart of Romulan politics and espionage. It's such a compelling premise, and Marina Sirtis absolutely owns it. What really makes this episode shine, he says, is how it pushes Troi far outside her comfort zone. She's always been the ship's emotional compass, but here she has to lie, threaten, and take control under pressure. That moment where she turns on Nivek, furious, sharp, and completely done with being used, was incredible. It's easily one of her most powerful scenes. This wasn't just Troi playing a role, that was Troi taking command. We rarely get to see her tap into that kind of rage and authority, and it was electric, he says. I also love how this episode shows how capable and multidimensional she really is. Troi doesn't just survive the situation, she owns it. By the end, she's confidently handling a Romulan bridge and navigating complex political dynamics, all while keeping her cool under immense pressure. It makes me wish we'd gotten more stories like this for her earlier in the series. Sirtis gets to show so much more range than usual, and she nails it. Face of the Enemy is not just a great Troy episode, it's a fantastic TNG episode, period. It plays like a tight little spy thriller with high emotional and political stakes, great pacing, and a satisfying payoff. It reminded me just how strong the show can be when it leans into character-driven sci-fi stories. Also, I can't help but laugh imagining the look on Picard's face when the view screen comes on and he sees Deanna, full Romulan uniform and everything, casually hailing the Enterprise. That man must have felt a traumatic Sela flashback in a single second. Oh, I hadn't thought of that. That's a good point. Because that just happened at the beginning of season 5, and now he sees that like, what in the hell is going on here? Here we go again, deja vu. But no, you're right. It's a very strong Troy episode. It might even be the strongest. And I do feel like what happens to her in this episode and the command that she displays, we've seen glimpses of it in previous episodes, but I do believe that this starts to inform a particular position that she takes going forward for the rest of this show. And dare I say, you may be pleased with some of the other things that they do with Troy going forward compared to how they treated her character early on in this show. So yeah, that's a good pickup by you, Amr, as always. Also want to take a moment to definitely highlight Carolyn Seymour, who plays the Romulan commander in this particular episode. She is a Star Trek veteran at this point because not only was she a Romulan in, was it the Tin Man episode? No, I forget if it was the Tin Man episode, but it was an earlier episode where she played a Romulan commander. She also played Marasta Yale in the 4th season episode First Contact. She's also Dr. Chakwas in like the Mass Effect trilogy and like all 3 of those video games as well. She's awesome and definitely a veteran presence and definitely adds some great gravitas and dramatic license with respect to this particular episode, creating a great foil for Troy. She did unfortunately kill Navek at the end of the episode, which sad for him in terms of what he gave up. But yeah, definitely understandable with respect to the circumstances, with respect to the sacrifice that he was making to make certain that the mission was completed. I'm with you. Satisfying ending. I also want to point out Don Davis. Also, the show primarily was composed by Dennis McCarthy and Ron Jones as well over the years. But Don Davis, who was the composer of the Matrix trilogy, actually composed the score for this episode. So if it sounded a little different musically, that's why. The Matrix composer did the music for this particular episode, which I've always thought was awesome because I love the Matrix. But Amr says, well, that's it. Those are all my thoughts on the first 14 episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation Season 6. And with that, I've reached the end of this email. Without a doubt, this has turned into the longest message I've ever written in my life. It's a bit of a monster, and I apologize for its length, he says. But I also had a lot of fun putting it together. Hopefully reading it was just as enjoyable as writing it. Thanks, as always, for taking the time to read through my emails. It really means a lot. I hope you're doing well and in good health and spirits, and the same goes for anyone else tuning in. Whether you're catching up on Trek, counting down to Superman, or just going about your day, I'm sending good vibes your way. Until next time, live long and prosper. May the Force be with you, and may Superman be everything we hope for and more. Warm regards, Amr Osama. Amr, this was Dorsey Length, along with John's emails earlier in this episode. But thank you, as always, for the feedback. I love the Star Trek breakdowns. It's fantastic. The insight that you add into these episodes that I have seen many times, and even, you know, helping me to think of some certain angles with it that, you know, I hadn't thought of initially. It is greatly appreciated. I also love that you got into Rebels and, you know, like your thoughts, sharing your thoughts with respect to that piece of Star Wars that many of us have experienced that you now are a part of as a fan. So that was great. And also the horror movie question. I love that too. So thank you as always for the feedback, good sir. Indeed, greatly appreciated. And yes, as we move forward towards Superman, hopefully it is everything that we hope for. And hopefully we do try to stay in as best of spirits as possible with the world around us being what it is. All right, next up, let's check in with Larry Griffin Jr., who sent an email on Father's Day called Squadcast Media DC Podcast, Guilty Pleasures, and Anime Chatter. He says, how's it going, Ray? It sucks that Squadcast Media is coming to an end. I was also in search of positive DC podcasts after Batman v Superman came out. There was a brother-sister duo podcast that started out as Nerd Nostalgia Fest. It had on episodes on Power Rangers, video games, cartoons, etc. But when they started the Man of Steel and BVS episodes, it was all downhill for me. The constant whining about when Batman and Superman truly are or aren't, whining about Zack like he's a serial killer, and the female host even sounding like she was about to cry because Batman killed bad guys. What the actual F? Turned me off of it. I was done with the show, blocked the host's socials, and moved on to something else. I won't mention the title of the show because it's irrelevant, lol. Yes, they are very irrelevant. Screw them. He says, I eventually ran across Andy DiGenova and his Holy Batcast podcast and struck gold. Finally, a positive DC podcast that can accept and respect different iterations of our favorite DC heroes. Sometime after that, I discovered the then titled Suicide Squadcast show with Scott and Tim, and when Tim, I think, couldn't be on an episode, this dude named Ray subbed in for him. Truth be told, I never heard the word subjective before until I ran across your Twitter account and eventually found out you started a podcast, which I also started listening to. There it was. 3 positive DC podcasts to tune in for all after the bitching from losers online. I am also not a fan of the phrase guilty pleasure, he says, but one of my favorites is the film Xanadu from 1980. It stars Olivia Newton-John as Kira, a muse and one of the 9 daughters of Zeus, he says, sent to Earth to inspire people to pursue their dreams. It also stars Michael Beck from The Warriors and the legendary Gene Kelly singing in the rain. The soundtrack is just as fun and amazing as the film, featuring songs from Olivia and a duet with Gene and the band Electric Light Orchestra. Ooh, hello. All right. Good deal. Last but not least, he says anime. There's a lot of anime that I've gotten to check out, and all I've seen so far was Akira, Ghost in the Shell, Cyber City, Oedo 808, and of course, Sailor Moon. The 5th and final season of Sailor Moon, titled Sailor Stars, was never released in the US until a few years ago, and I happily own it, but I've yet to watch it, he says. I was so obsessed with the show back in the late 90s, early 2000s that there was a point in time where I was a Sailor Moon encyclopedia and could tell you anything about the Sailor Scouts, the villains, etc. LOL. I might get around to Sailor Stars after I check out The Acolyte, he says. It's been a long time coming, and I already know the villain is a corrupt Sailor Scout, and that there is a trio of male singers called the Starlights that transform into women who are allies of Sailor Moon, so I'm looking forward to see how it all plays out. Until next time, Larry Griffin Jr. Larry, thank you as always for the feedback. Thank you for the kind words about Squadcast Media. I feel like the episodes where I subbed in for Tim, I know that happened during Comic-Con. There was... Tim, I think, was busy with work or something, and Scott was the only one, and we like tag team like some Comic-Con news, like across television and movies and comics with respect to what was going on in San Diego. And yeah, we did do a couple of episodes and I did fill in a few times on Squadcast, more than a few times actually on Squadcast Media, and in the later years, not so much in like 2016, 2017, but definitely like 2018, 2019, those years for sure. And yeah, no, it was a whole lot of fun. And yeah, for those of us that were looking for a positive haven of DC podcasts in the wake of BVS and everything in the beginning of the Zack Snyder, the Snyderverse and all that, yeah, it was great for that to be a safe haven for us. And I thank you for being such a loyal listener back then and for continuing to listen to my show now. I greatly appreciate it. I greatly appreciate all of the feedback that you do send in. I have never seen Xanadu. I feel like I have heard of it. I didn't know Gene Kelly was in it. That's intriguing. That might be one that I have to put on my list just as one to watch, because there have been other types of those movies. Like one of those, like this is probably, I mentioned Krull on Patreon. I talked about how excited I am that Krull is finally getting a steelbook release. And, many people consider that movie a guilty pleasure. I do not consider it a guilty pleasure because I don't like that phrase, as Larry pointed out. But yeah, like there's been some other movies in that vein. Like there was one I saw about a year or so ago called Ice Pirates, which was free on YouTube. And it's not a great movie, but it's one of those where it's like, okay, Robert Urich and Ron Perlman and Angelica Houston, and they're on a spaceship doing crazy space shit. Let me look at this. And it was cheesy and it was silly and it had some really dumb jokes in it, but it was just one of those where it's like, all right, this is what they did. I don't hate the movie. I don't hate anything like that. And I really like the score at different parts of that movie, to be honest with you. So there was that aspect to it as well for me that kind of drew me into it. But yeah, no reason to feel guilty for any movies or TV shows that you like. So yeah, guilty pleasures do not exist. And Xanadu, I'll have to think about that one. I have to keep that one in mind as maybe a watch here and there, like maybe it's on Tubi or something, or on the free sites or whatnot. But have to remember that. And I never got into that anime. Like I've seen Akira, but I need to rewatch it because it's been many years since I've watched it. I never got into Sailor Moon. Like I said, I do own Ghost in the Shell. I just haven't sat down to watch it all the way through yet. I will at some point. And there's the Studio Ghibli stuff that I definitely want to dive headfirst into and plan to in the not too distant future for a project that I'm doing. So stay tuned for that, especially any of you that are subscribed to the Patreon. That is something that I have been talking about doing for the last month or so, and I'm getting close to a particular release date of something that I really want to start watching the Studio Ghibli stuff for, because I want to talk about this particular movie and I will get to that. Weirdly enough, it's going to be the same week the Superman comes out. In fact, the day that we will be going to see Superman, July 8th, will be the day that this particular Studio Ghibli thing releases that I haven't watched yet, and so I want to do some Studio Ghibli watching leading up to that. So stay tuned for that at patreon.com/theflightcast. That particular week of July is going to be some interesting scheduling for some things, including the review, since I'm going to see it early. But either way, yeah, definitely some anime stuff that I want to dive headfirst into, Larry. But thank you, as always, for the feedback, good sir. Greatly appreciate it. Looking forward to more, and you take care until next time. All right, with just under 3 weeks away from the release of Superman, we got to check in with our resident Superman superfan, Waliyu Mustafa, who sent an email just this past Friday. He says, "Hey Ray, I am back after a nice nearly 2-week break in Spain with the family." Oh, well, you wouldn't know because there hasn't been an episode of this feedback show in 2 weeks, so this is perfect timing for you, Walio. Awesome, fantastic. Hope you had a good time. He said, "We were in a town called Salou. I hope I pronounced that right. And the weather was lovely. Micah and Estelle both enjoyed themselves, even if Micah was a handful sometimes. It was nice to have a holiday and just relax as best as possible and recharge. I've attached a few pics." Oh, this definitely looks like some gorgeous weather. And yeah, Micah does seem a little cranky in one of these pictures, but he also seems like he's got some good energy with those goggles. Oh, this is cool. This is some good family, some good family photos, man. I like this. Good deal, good deal. Thank you. Oh, and is that a Superman shirt? Yep, that's a Superman shirt, man. Awesome. I love that Wally represents no matter where he's at. I mean, the Superman gear in full force. He's got 2 different Superman shirts that he's wearing. This is great. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Wally. You greatly appreciate that. He says, "Have I missed anything whilst I was away? Silly question. I did my best to continue to stay informed in all things geeky whilst on holiday, much to my partner's dismay at times." Yes, sometimes our significant others can feel a little irritated by our geeky consumption. That is true. Indeed. We all deal with it on some level, even those of us that have geeky partners in crime, if you will. But he says, "First of all, I want to pour one out for Squadcast Media. Tim and Scott were the pioneers of positive geek culture. It was in 2017 when I came across their podcast when they were Suicide Squadcast. I seem to remember looking for a podcast that didn't bash the DCU all the time. And when I started listening to them, I was like, thank goodness this exists. I myself was already in the throes of doing videos on YouTube back then, but it was just nice to hear other geeks talk about stuff they enjoyed and what they didn't enjoy without being too negative about it. I understand why Squadcast Media is coming to an end and it will be a big miss," he says. "I look forward to watching the archive footage when that gets uploaded on YouTube. One thing is for sure, if it were not for Squadcast Media, I would not be listening to you on your solo outing. Amazing how things turn out, eh? Once again, thanks to Tim, Scott, Brent, Jordan, Chris, and of course you for giving us an outlet to enjoy." Yes, thank you so much for the kind words, Wally. I'm very glad, very grateful that you became part of our network and that you listened to all of our shows and that you appreciated our content. We definitely appreciate you being part of our audience back at Squadcast Media, and I certainly appreciate you here at FLIGHTcast. There's no question about that, good sir. He says, "I want to pass on my congratulations to Alex De Silva for the birth of his and his partner's baby girl." It is a girl, right? The episode was 2 weeks ago, so my apologies. All I will say is this, Alex, anytime you have a moment for a nap, take it. Don't think about it, just take it. That goes for you and your lady, trust me. But enjoy the first 3 months, because once your baby is past that stage, you will wonder where the time has gone. It will be tough, yes, but when you cradle your child in your arms and you stare lovingly at them, nothing else matters but that moment, and you feel a sense of joy, happiness, and blessing all at once. Good luck for the foreseeable future, Alex. Yes, indeed. Thank you for those kind words towards Alex on his new journey being a father. Wally says, "I'm not going to go into much detail about the final trailer for Superman. I really enjoyed it, and I'm just about ready for the movie to be released. Speaking of release, how dare you get to see an early screening of the movie? I am not jealous. Not one bit, LOL. But seriously, I wish Amazon and DC Studios had done it worldwide and not just in the US, but it is what it is. And I'm going to have to mute all things Superman related from the 8th of July until I see the movie myself on opening day Friday." Well, of course, I will not be, doing any spoilers. I will certainly not be posting any spoilers, even with that new feature on Threads where you can blur out spoilers. No, I will not be doing that whatsoever, but I hear you. It's going to be dangerous territory as more people see that film. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to see it on July 8th, to try and navigate that a little bit better. But yeah, I'm with you. I understand why they would do it in the U.S. primarily because the U.S. is the biggest market as far as, movie box office is concerned. But no, I hear you. It would have been nice for them to go into other markets, and do the same type of cross promotion in that regard. Because there's an Amazon UK, there's an Amazon, in other parts of the world for sure. So yeah, unfortunate that you won't be able to get to see it as early. I feel like, Wally, you should get to see it before me. I really do. I really feel like you, as the super fan of Superman as you are, you should get to see it before I do. And I wish you could, seriously. I would get you a ticket if you were here in the States, to be honest with you. But either way, I know that you've got a plan for it. In fact, you said here that you pretty much planned out when and where and how many times you're going to see the movie. On that Friday, you said, I will see it twice. Same on Saturday. A friend will be joining me for their first viewing. I will have to take a break on Sunday because my partner says I need to spend time with the kids because responsibilities or something like that. Then I resume a viewing on Monday, maybe two, then again on Tuesday, he says, where we're hoping for a baby screening to take Estelle to. I will go again on Wednesday, and then on Thursday I will be seeing it with a friend and might go see it with a friend the following Friday, the 18th of July. I am saying all of this and have yet to decide when I will record a video review for my YouTube channel. We will see when I can do that. Man, so that's a week's worth of showings that you're going to see of Superman. But hey, listen, Superman fans, I totally get it. This is your time to shine. This is your moment in the sun. Enjoy it, cherish it, and hopefully that movie is as enjoyable as we're all hoping it is, as we all want it to be, especially for Superman fans like you that have been waiting far too long for another Superman solo film, and it is finally happening. So yes, I hear you on that, and I will look forward to you making that video when you get a chance to, for sure. Thanks for doing an episode on that article the Rolling Stone did with James Gunn, he says. So refreshing to hear him be honest and open about what he went through with Marvel, how he has matured as a person, and his journey to being a co-head of DC Studios. Still can't believe that so many people are blaming him for the death of the DCEU. Sorry guys, but the DCEU died when WB reshot Justice League. We could argue when BVS was released theatrically. Yes, we could argue that. I know Anthony and a few others argue that, and they have a valid point. That's who you should be blaming, not James Gunn, not Zack Snyder, he says. The names you're looking for are Jeff Johns, John Berg, Toby Emmerich, Ann Sarnoff, Walter Hamada, and Kevin Tsujihara. Correct? And that's subjective, guys. That's not even subjective fact, right? This isn't a matter of opinion in terms of who killed the DCEU. Zack Snyder didn't kill it, and neither did James Gunn. Anybody blaming them for that? Out to lunch. Absolutely out of their minds. They have no idea what the hell they're talking about. Those names he just listed are absolutely your culprits. Objectively so. Not subjectively. This is not a matter of opinion. Factually, it is the fault of Jeff Johns, John Berg, Toby Emmerich, Ann Sarnoff, Walter Hamada, and Kevin Tsujihara. They are the names to blame for the death of the DCEU. They killed it. All of them. No doubt about that. Without question. Objectively so. That is not an argument. That is not opinion. That is fact. So, moving on from that. He says, I loved how James said that Superman isn't the be-all of the DCU, it's the start of it. I know you have said that if Superman doesn't succeed, then the DCU doesn't move forward, but I was pleased to hear James didn't think like that. As he stated, he will be happy if he makes the movie budget back. None of this, it needs to hit $1 billion or it's unsuccessful crap I keep hearing from people. Just because the first Avengers movie made that, suddenly that's how we're basing a movie's success? No thank you. Sure, I would love it if Superman does make $1 billion, but what I want is to enjoy the movie and talk about it for years to come. And I just want to clarify on that, Wally, as far as me, for me saying that if Superman does succeed and the DCU doesn't move forward, I don't mean the $1 billion mark. I most certainly do not mean that. I've never met the $1 billion mark. I'm talking about in terms of its profitability and its success at the box office, right? And that doesn't have to be $1 billion. It can be exactly what is said, what he said, making his budget back in that regard. Because this is where, and really what it comes down to is how much pressure can he keep from David Zaslav, right? Like how much can he hold David Zaslav at bay in terms of even remotely sticking his nose into anything DC Studios related, and that's what this is really about in that regard, right? That's why Superman needs to have a strong start and does need to make its budget back. And I am glad that he has that realization as well, and Zaslav can change his mind, and it's more difficult for David Zaslav to change his mind on any of that if it's reviewed well, and more importantly, if it makes as much money as it does, because then it'll be like, okay, well, now you can do whatever you want, and it gives Gunn and Safran the freedom to pursue the rest of the DCU going forward. And they're gonna do Supergirl, like that's happening, and Lanterns is happening, Clayface is probably happening, right? Like there are parts of the DCU that are going to go forward, right? But it's all about getting off to a really good first start. And no, that does not have to be $1 billion. It just has to be successful in Warner Brothers and, more importantly, DC Studios' own right in that regard. So here's hoping, fingers crossed. But I'm with you. What I want is to enjoy the movie and talk about it for years to come. Absolutely. I want it to be part of the conversation, enter that conversation with the Christopher Reeve films and certainly with the Zack Snyder trilogy. Without question, that is what we want, beyond the shadow of a doubt. He says, now about this actor who has been reading up on negativity and watching grifters on YouTube that James mentioned. I think, he says, it's Skylar Gisondo. That would be the actor that plays Jimmy Olsen. I mean, it's a hunch, he says. But given that James said they were a top 5 actor in the movie, I would also guess Nicholas Hoult. Ah, Lex Luthor, perhaps. Of course, we may never know who it is, he says. Let's not forget that Henry Cavill likes to stalk Reddit. That being said, this actor needs to stop reading/watching such things. It is not healthy. Yes, regardless of who it is, that is the number one thing to take away from this. Stop it. Whoever that actor is that is like reading too much of the bad press clippings, it is not doing you any good. It will not help you. Stop that. Whether it is Nicholas Hoult, whether it is Skylar Gisondo, or whether it is Nathan Fillion, like John was speculating earlier, don't do it. Knock it off. It will not help you or anybody else. So, yeah, with you on that one. He says, I have yet to listen to your reviews of Hawkeye, Echo, and She-Hulk, but I'm looking forward to hearing what you made of them. Yeah, that was this most recent episode of Flightbox. That will do it for this week. Hope you and Shonda have a great weekend and happy Juneteenth. Oh, thank you. Indeed. Happy belated Juneteenth. Well, he sent this before Juneteenth, so it's still official. But he says, take care. Thank you, Wally Mustafa. Thank you, as always, for the feedback, Wally. Glad to see that the holiday went well for you. We get closer and closer to Superman, indeed. And yeah, the countdown continues, my good sir. All right, next up is Nick Nicholson, who hasn't sent an email for a good while, but he's chimed in this week with an email titled Cowboys and Kryptonite. Oh, sounds like a good movie title. How about that? He says, hey Ray, hope you're doing well. It's been a while since I last checked in, so I thought I'd pop my head above the trench and send you a new email. Well, welcome back, Nick. Appreciate that. He says, I've been on a bit of a Western movie streak, which was sparked by the recent sad passing of Gene Hackman. I started with the absolute classic Unforgiven, which then led me on to the 2 Young Guns films, Tombstone, Appaloosa, Bone Tomahawk, Open Range, featuring a young Diego Luna of Andor fame no less, the Magnificent Seven remake, and Hateful Eight. I have a lot more to go, but my question to you is, are you a fan of the Western genre, and if so, do you have a particular favorite? I do like Westerns. In fact, they just recently released Tombstone in 4K in glorious steelbook, and I do have that. I did get it from Amazon. It was a little bit delayed. It was supposed to be here a couple of weeks ago, but it did just come in earlier this past week, so I do enjoy that film. As far as a favorite Western, let's see. There's a decent amount of Westerns I haven't seen. I mean, Hateful Eight is a good one. That's a Tarantino one. Going through the list they've got here, Unforgiven is absolutely a classic. It most certainly is. But I haven't seen Young Guns or Appaloosa or Bone Tomahawk or Open Range. I haven't seen the Magnificent Seven, but I actually do have the original. Walmart has an exclusive version of the original Magnificent Seven. With the one with Yul Brynner that I haven't watched yet. I would like to watch that at some point. But yeah, as far as like a favorite Western, I tell you what, a Western movie that have actively watched multiple times, and it's one of those that just every time it came on cable, I would always watch it, was Maverick. And that's with Mel Gibson and Jodie Foster and James Garner. And it's a continuation, if you will, of the Maverick TV series that James Garner starred in way back when, in like the 60s and 70s, I think. And that's just an enjoyable film. It's a Richard Donner movie. Vilmos Zsigmond did the cinematography. Like it's just a fun Western type of poker, and like that type of film. Graham Greene is in it for a bit too, and that's cool. So is James Coburn. May he rest in peace. Like there's a number of like other really good actors. Alfred Molina's in it. Now that I remember, I'm thinking back on who's in that film, and so that's probably, if I had to pick a favorite right now, that'd probably be my favorite right now. But there's more Westerns that I would like to dive into and watch and delve into before I can give you like a definitive list or like all-time favorites or whatnot. But it is a genre that I do watch. I don't necessarily think it's like one of my more favorite genres, but I do like it. I'm definitely not anti-Western. I definitely will watch some good Westerns. Like I think the last Western I saw in theaters was probably the True Grit remake. Yeah, which I forget where that recently came up. I was talking about that. That's right. I was talking about it on Flightbox because, of course, that's the first thing I saw Haley Steinfeld in, because she's in that movie with Jeff Bridges and Matt Damon and a whole host of others. That was a good cast as well. James Brolin, I think, is also Josh Brolin, rather. Pardon me, is also in that cast, if I'm not mistaken. So Nick says, in other news, I have a new job, which takes me into a lot of film studios and productions, so I get to see all sorts of interesting things from the TV and movie realm. One thing that really caught my eye recently are the huge Superman banners they have hanging down the side of the car park at Warner Brothers in Leavesden. I hope I pronounced that right. It really is good to see Warner Brothers properly promoting this film, and these banners are one piece I thought you'd be interested in seeing. While the photo I sent you isn't the best, they really do look awesome in person. Yeah, actually, I'm looking at this. What is this? It looks like this is close to a roundabout, or maybe that's not a full roundabout, but no, that is cool because it's the two posters. It's the one poster where he's flying up, and then the other one with his with the crossed arms, and then the big Superman logo in the center. No, that is cool. That is really awesome. And if you're seeing this overseas, then yeah, I have praised DC Studios for their marketing for this film so far over the last couple of months. In my opinion, they've done a phenomenal job. And again, not that they've done anything otherworldly. It's just that it's refreshing to finally see DC and Warner Brothers, like you said, Nick, promoting DC films like this because they should have been doing this in the DC Films era under Warner Brothers Picture Group, and they weren't. But DC Studios is absolutely committed to doing this, and they've done a really good job with it. And we just all hope that it pays off effectively in a couple of weeks here. Nick says, I also just wanted to say that I really enjoyed your trip down memory lane with the Squadcast Media podcast you did recently. The superhero movie reviews were a particular highlight that I'd love to see come back in one form or another. They were always an excellent listen. The pre-review, Superman 4 Quest for Peace wind-up that you took on the chin like a pro, by the way, is still hilarious to this day, and it would be great to have the guys appear in your show if that was ever to be possible. Maybe some special guest episodes? Anyway, thanks as always, Ray. You continue to do outstanding work. Kind regards, Nick. Nick, thank you for the kind words as well. And yeah, I'd forgotten about that. But yeah, for people that don't know, when we did the Squadcast Media, the Patreon review of Superman 4 The Quest for Peace, Scott and Tim decided to play a practical joke on me. And when I signed in and we started doing the review, they were very praiseworthy of the film. And they talked about like how great the movie was and how what a great Superman film it was and how they did this right and how they did that right. And it threw me for a loop because I didn't feel that way at all. And I wasn't expecting them to like echo those sentiments whatsoever. And then I think what tripped it up was Tim talking about how great the physics were. And Tim is notoriously like very like critical of bad superhero physics and bad ragdoll physics in these movies. And so that was the tip off like, okay, no, they're messing with me. This absolutely is a prank. And sure enough, it was. And it went on for like 10 minutes. It like went on for a good bit where like before they revealed, no, they were absolutely just kidding. And then we got into a real review of the movie. And so, yeah, I did take that one on the chin. I did. But like a pro, like you said, yeah, for sure, Nick. But yeah, it was funny. It was a funny moment. Just the guys pulling one over on me because I just threw me for a loop for that particular film. Intriguingly enough, but yeah, that'll get posted on the archive site at some point. I think more than likely up on YouTube for sure. And yeah, I would like to see us continue. And whether or not the guys, I've never had the Flightcast has always has been a solo podcast from the beginning. But if I ever have guests on, it definitely would be those guys. If I have any guests on at all with respect to this particular show, have not done that yet, but never say never. I'll just say that as far as getting all the stars and the schedules to align going forward, that's always the tricky part, right? When the real world beckons, we have to answer that call. But as always, Nick, thank you for the kind words. Thank you for the feedback. Greatly appreciated. Looking forward to more, good sir. You are indeed continue to be welcome here in the Flight Chat Circle. All right, couple more emails here in this extended catch-up version of Flight Chat. We get to Mr. Alex De Silva. He's got a pair of emails. The first one he sent, Flight Chat number 6, he sent on June 12th. And it starts off like this. He says, "Hey, Ray, so a lot of people seem to have a problem with a lot of the Superman marketing portraying him getting beaten up and knocked around. They claim that he's supposed to be invincible and don't like seeing him get knocked around like this, but I actually like it. Showing him in danger actually lends stakes to the combat scenarios he's in and makes me want to root for him all the more." Alex, I completely agree with you. And I think that what we haven't seen a whole lot of, and I mean, we've seen it in bits and pieces, both with Christopher Reeve and with Henry Cavill, and even also with Brandon Routh, is Superman's vulnerability because he is not impervious. He is all powerful, but he's not impervious, right? And there are things other than kryptonite that can weaken him and can potentially destroy him. It's not like Doomsday killed him with kryptonite way back when. That is not how that occurred, right? So the idea of showing the vulnerability of Superman, I think personally that James Gunn is accentuating this in order to really give us a more relatable Superman for the general audience and to really try and alleviate that complaint that we've heard for years about how unrelatable Superman is and about how he's too perfect and there's nothing for the audience to really latch on to as far as relatability. So I think that this is an attempt to do that. We'll just see how well he affects that. And I feel like the fans that are complaining about it are the usual suspects that, complain about those things and complain about everything with respect to these characters and are just not happy if they're not being miserable in that regard, to be honest with you. So, I mean, we're seeing a different interpretation here. And, if you're not open to the idea of seeing Superman in his vulnerable moments, in his weakened moments, then, I mean, the character, again, is not impervious. He's not perfect. He's been damaged and injured in the comics and the animated shows and certainly in the films before. So it's nothing new in that regard. Maybe it's portraying it in a way that you're not used to seeing, but it's because you haven't seen a whole lot of Superman on the big screen in 47 years. So, you know what? I'm all for it. I'm very intrigued by it, and I think it may work with the general audience. It may give them a Superman that they find far more relatable than even the previous incarnations were. So Alex says, I've been rewatching the Jurassic Park movies and I've gotten through the first three so far. I am of the opinion that there are no bad Jurassic movies. The dinosaur reveal in the first movie, when Dr. Grant sees the Brachiosaurus for the first time, remains one of the most iconic and goosebump inducing scenes in movie history, especially accompanied by that Williams score. So good. Do you think that John Hammond can be considered the villain of Jurassic Park? Or is he a well intentioned but heavily misguided man? I would probably lean towards that latter, well-intentioned but heavily misguided. I would really lean toward that, especially when you get into that scene where he's talking with Ellie and he talks about how the next time, creation is an act of sheer will, and next time it will be flawless, right? He still believed, even after everything that was happening, that he could still control it. And it took Ellie, like, unloading on him before he realized, like, the error of his ways and the folly. And he was obviously a changed character after that for the rest of the time that he was in the series. But yeah, I would lean more towards well intentioned but heavily misguided. I don't consider him a villain because his intentions were never villainous. His intentions were noble. If there's a villain in the movie, it's Nedry, but he's more of an antagonist. And it's really just because he's operating for, the espionage, trying to steal the samples for the other companies in, competition with Hammond in that regard. He's like the closest we have to a villain because it's his antics that start all of the chaos that really, like unfolds. And that chaos took him out, right? Obviously, the Dilophosaurus took him out at that point in the Jeep. But yeah, I wouldn't call Hammond a villain. I would say, like you said, well-intentioned but heavily misguided. Yes, definitely. I think that's a great description for him personally. Alex says, I appreciate The Lost World, but it comes nowhere near the heights of the first movie for me. I think I'm on the island of people that still likes The Lost World better than the first movie, and I love the first movie. The first movie is fantastic, but there's some things in The Lost World that some of the action and some of the exposition and some of the things that the character interactions and just I don't know that like the scope and like the scale and certain things about that second film, The Lost World, that I just really like because it just feels like I mean the first one is like introducing the concept and everything happening. The second one you don't have to introduce anything. You just hit the ground running like, okay, here's what's going on. Here's what's happening. And you know what's going on here. And you've got clear protagonists. You've got clear antagonists. There is a villain in that movie, like Hammond's nephew. Like he is a villain. He is absolutely a villain, right? He does not have good intentions. He has greedy intentions. He is a villain, right? So to me, there are roles that are like a bit more clearly defined in that second film than there are in the first film. And again, nothing against the first film. I'm probably on that island of people that really likes The Lost World better than the first Jurassic Park. Just me personally in that regard. So those are my thoughts with respect to that. And then he says, then there's Jurassic Park 3, the one that everybody likes to dogpile on, saying things like, it doesn't have the same magic as the first, or the raptor saying Alan on the plane is ridiculous. But you know what? I don't care. I'll say it. I like this movie. I think it's funny and fun, and the 90-minute runtime makes it absolutely fly by. Yeah, I don't hate the third one. I don't. When I first saw it and I first watched that one on cable, I didn't hate it. Do I think it's the third place? Yes, I do. But I there's nothing in that movie that's like, oh, I kill it with fire. It's a terrible film. No, absolutely not. There's definitely some fun aspects to it. There's some hilarious parts of it for sure, with respect to the idiocy of certain characters on that island. But yeah, no, I don't dislike that movie at all. I do think it's funny and I do think it's definitely fun at times, no doubt about it. He says, I also watched Now You See Me for the first time. Since both of those movies recently dropped on Netflix, it was a fun thriller slash heist type of movie, and I'm looking forward to checking out the sequel within the next few days. Yeah, they made a third one that is coming out. I have not seen any of them. So that's a franchise at some point that I would like to visit as well because I like most of the actors in it, including Jesse Eisenberg and Woody Harrelson. So yeah, have to check that one out. I finally finished Assassin's Creed Unity, he says, after months of on and off gaming, and I was in the mood for a good story based game to tackle next, so I decided on Mass Effect Andromeda. I know you haven't played it, so I'll keep my thoughts very vague and generalized. That's half true, Alex. I've played half of it. I think I got to the halfway point. I'm not totally in the dark on it. I was playing that. Shonda got that years ago. I think back in 2017 when we were at our old place, she got an Xbox One. And that was, I want to say, the first game that she got for it. And she didn't necessarily care for it a whole lot. I liked it because, I'm easy to please when it comes to stuff like that. And for all the people that were complaining it was repetitive and there was nothing new really added in terms of mechanics and gameplay, I still liked the consistency of what was in there. So, yeah, I dug it. I liked it. I didn't finish the game, but I did get, I think I got about halfway through it, if I'm not mistaken. So it's all good with respect to that. But he said for his character's class, he said, I decided to choose Biotic this time around so that I have the balance of guns and special powers. It's a lot of fun to basically force push an enemy and then spray him with bullets. Yep, I hear you on that. The setup of the story is heavy with Star Trek vibes. Around the time of the original Mass Effect trilogy, an exploration group launched an expedition to the Andromeda Galaxy to explore and colonize habitable worlds. It took 600 years for the ship to reach the Andromeda Galaxy, and the story begins with your character, Ryder, waking up from cryostasis to begin exploring. One big addition to this game that sets it apart from the original trilogy is the ability to use a jetpack. Exploration and maps have a whole new feel now since you can virtually climb onto anything. In the original trilogy, Shepard was very much rooted to the ground when exploring, but in Mass Effect Andromeda, you have so much more mobility and can fly through the air to explore. This also makes you way more mobile in combat too. It's a lot of fun to blast enemies while rocketing through the air. I do need to replay it because I will say that when we first got it, Alex, it was extremely glitchy and it hadn't been patched very well. And I imagine in coming years, it's been patched a lot better and probably runs a hell of a lot better now than it did when we first got it. So I do want to revisit it for that reason alone, to be honest with you. He says, in my first play session, I decided to spend a little time reading codex entries to refamiliarize myself with the world of Mass Effect. Before I knew it, I had spent almost an hour just sitting there getting sucked into the reading, and then I had to stop playing because of fatherly duties. Whoops. If anything, that just goes to show the strength of the world and the creative team made with this series. The game's a lot of fun so far, and I can't wait to keep playing. Yeah, I don't know how long it's going to be before we get the next entry in Mass Effect. So yeah, I would like to revisit Andromeda at some point as well. I think they made an upconverted version for Xbox Series X, if not on disc, then available for download. So yeah, I'll have to check that out at some point when I eventually do get back into television or into video games. But here we go. He says, and now let's move on to a very serious topic: television. In your household, how does TV watching work? Do you and your fiance have your own separate shows that you watch on your own, or do you watch a lot of stuff together, or a mix of the two? There was stuff back in the day that we used to watch together before we got into this place this apartment that we're in now. Now, because of the setup of where the living room is and like the office and whatnot, I find that we watch a lot of stuff separately, and I do miss the stuff that we watch together. We used to watch the USA shows a lot together because I got into Burn Notice, and she watched that a little, but we really watched like Royal Pains and like White Collar and like some of the other USA shows together back in the day. She watched a good amount of it as well herself. But yeah, she usually watches most of her stuff on the TV in the living room, and I watch most of my stuff in my office on my lap or on my computer monitor because it's all streaming. Like we are a streaming household, and that will maintain itself even after we move. But hopefully, the next place that we move into will be better served for us to watch stuff together again. And also, our schedules changed a great deal with respect to that as well, as far as my job schedule and her job schedule. It doesn't really align nearly as much as it used to back in the day. So yeah, that's different as well. So everything changes, but I'd say right now we definitely have our separate stuff that we watch, but there is some stuff that we would like to watch together. At least I would like to watch together with her as well. He says, in my house, My wife and I each have our separate shows that we watch on our own time, but we also have a together show that we'll watch whenever we feel like it. Ever since we got married, the system has been she picks one, I pick one, she picks one, I pick one, etc. So far with this little system, we've watched shows like Lost, Shameless, The Crown, Schitt's Creek, Seinfeld, and now we're currently on New Girl, which is her pick. We're almost done with New Girl, which means it's about to be my turn to pick, and at the moment I'm leaning heavily toward Big Bang Theory, which I've never seen before, but I'm interested in checking it out. I recommend it. I don't know if you'll like it, but it depends on how much you like sitcoms, and it also depends on how much you can forgive certain predispositions and maybe geeky stereotypes that, are still rooted in a form of truth, but maybe you don't necessarily appreciate how they are portrayed in the series in that regard. I look past them, and I think, like I said, a number of them are rooted in a form of truth, so they don't really bug me a whole lot, but other geeks, I know it has bothered them in that regard. So I would be very curious to know how that goes, if that is indeed the show that you decide to choose in that regard. But it sounds like you got a good system with your wife, for sure. All right, on to his TNG watch update. This week he watched Captain's Holiday. He says it's funny that it took the threat of Deanna's mom to get Picard to agree to go on shore leave. Yeah, but that's a strong enough threat. Loxana coming aboard the ship to sexually harass him. Yes, that is a very strong enough threat, for sure. He says this episode had a different vibe than usual Star Trek episodes, as it was very adventure-y. I enjoyed the break from the norm, and now I'm looking forward to seeing how, if the show will expand on this framework for potential future episodes. Next up is Tin Man, Live Long and Prosper, Alex. So that was his first email that he had sent about a week or so ago. Now his second email that he sent just the other day, Friday, email number 2, this one is titled Flight Chat Number 7, Death of the Theater. Ooh, kind of ominous there. He says, I watched the new Nosferatu on Peacock recently, and I thought it was pretty good. It's the type of horror movie where there are no jump scares or cheap thrills. Instead, the movie is entirely focused on being scary through its atmosphere and vibe. There are some really great creepy shots in the movie, and you just get the sense that it was really artfully crafted. So far, I'm 3 for 3 on all of Robert Eggers' feature films that I've seen so far. The Witch, The Northman, and Nosferatu were all great. I still haven't seen The Lighthouse, and I'm afraid that'll be the first of his movies that doesn't work for me. The other 3 are all story-driven with lots of forward momentum, but The Lighthouse just looks like, if I'm being honest, pretentious art house nonsense. I'm sure I'll come around to watching it one day, and Eggers' previous track record will hopefully allow me to give the movie a fair shake. Yes, I hope so. I know a lot of people. I have not seen a single Robert Eggers movie, so I cannot offer any personal insight to any of them. But I know a lot of people that enjoy all of them, including The Lighthouse, for a variety of reasons. So, yeah, hopefully you do get to judge that one fairly when the time comes. He says the part in the new Superman trailer where he and Krypto are tag teaming that villain was not something that I thought I'd ever see in live action. I really think that Krypto will be a hit with general audiences. I tend to agree with that because dogs are definitely endearing characters to a general audience, and a super-powered dog that is at his master's side helping him in a fight, yeah, I can absolutely see Krypto stealing the show at times, and here's hoping, fingers crossed, that he does glom onto the general audience, and that does become a strong selling part for the film, because the film will do well if that is the case, for sure. He says, still having a blast with Mass Effect Andromeda. The voice actor for the main character, Ryder, sounds exactly like Nolan North, who is probably most well known in the video game world for voicing Nathan Drake in the Uncharted series. Yes, indeed. I was sure it was him, but when I looked it up, nope, it's another guy named Tom Taylorson. And the funny thing is that the Taylorson has apparently joked in interviews about how much he sounds like North. Yeah, he definitely is doing kind of a Nolan North impersonation in that particular role. I would agree with that. Another voice acting fun fact about this game, he says, is that Kumail Nanjiani voices a Solarian. Think about Nanjiani's voice and then think about the Solarians. It's kind of a perfect fit. A very well cast role, in my opinion. You know what? Yeah, I agree. His voice does fit Solarians, especially. I'm just thinking about Morden Solus, like obviously the quintessential Solarian to think about in terms of reference for that. That's a good point. He says, I saw that the new Clayface was cast. I'm intrigued by this movie, but what does this mean in regards to Gunn's previous statement that voice actors will play their live-action counterparts? I'm not one of those people who's trying to catch Gunn in some type of gotcha. I'm more curious about whether that statement is more fluid than we initially thought. Well, first of all, yes. I think people harped on that and took that way too strictly, which of course that's what fans do. I'm not saying you're doing that, but I think fans in general most certainly do that. And if I remember correctly, he addressed this on Threads. Let me see if I can find that real quick. So yeah, I found it here the day that that was announced, which was 5 days of me recording this, 5 days ago from the date of me recording this episode. An account by the name of Moon Mant, which has 9 followers, and I'm pretty sure this is a bot. But it asked him, given how it was stated that all DCU characters in animation will have the same actors in live action, does this mean Alan Tudyk is Clayface's voice for when he's in actual clay form, as we saw in Creature Commandos, or will it still be Tom? And Gunn's answer was, quote, I said we would plan on using primary actors whenever we can. I've also never said if the two characters are the same. I've also never said that they're not. So that's his answer with respect to that. And yeah, I mean, so primary actors, right? So I guess Rick Flag Sr., played by Frank Grillo, is definitely part of that. And I would say other primaries, like if Superman is ever in an animated DCU show, it will be David Corenswet, right? Or whoever is Batman, right? That'll be crossed over between like animated version, animated voice and whatnot. Like that's what I'm guessing he's saying. So yeah, it is not, it is definitely more fluid in that regard. And he's not considering Clayface a primary actor in that regard. So I hear him on that. And that's going to be difficult anyway. It's probably going to be difficult enough for primary actors because it all is about availability and scheduling. And you can plan stuff out all the live long day, but an opportunity comes up and things change, right? So you never know. It's always evolving in that regard. So yeah, I'd say we were taking it way more stricter and way less fluid than we should have been in that regard. He says, in that recent interview, Gunn stated movies are dying due to too many unfinished screenplays. I think that's certainly a factor, he says, but the death of the theater has more to do with the following 3 culprits. 1. The cost of going to the cinema coupled with concessions is absurd. 2. The sanctity of the theater has been corrupted due to phones, teenagers, and general bad manners. And 3. Simply waiting for a movie to come out on streaming is so much easier and cost efficient, which is what I'll have to do for a lot of this year's summer movies as well. I think all of it plays a factor, Alex. I most certainly do. And Gunn is speaking from a creative standpoint. He's not looking at it from a consumer standpoint. From a creative standpoint, I absolutely get his point that, doing movies without a finished screenplay is, the audience like can pick up on how disingenuous that filmmaking procedure is. And he's saying that is a negative in that regard. But everything that you listed, I think absolutely is most certainly a factor. I would I can't tell you that it's not a factor because I've cited it myself as to why a lot of these movies, the audience is picky. They're a lot pickier and more choosier in terms of what they're going to go see at the theater. And so prior expectations for them going to the theater just cannot be met the same way because, yeah. And now how about this new thing, AMC coming out, they're going to put more commercials before, like 30 minutes of commercials or something like that before you actually get to the actual theatrical presentation. I mean, come on now. I mean, yeah, it gives people more time to get to the theater if they're late, but what the hell? That's just, that's not going to work out well for audiences, right? And it's really going to take, strong marketing and really, some good luck in order to get people in the theater for certain movies. That's like, okay, I need to see this at the theater. I need to see this as soon as possible, that type of deal, instead of just doing what you're talking about for either for financial reasons or just for time reasons, right? We spend two forms of currency in life, money and time. And a lot of people want to save both when they can in that regard. And they can do that with movies nowadays because of all the options that we have. So I hear you on that. He said, this time around for the next generation, I watched Tin Man. Yep, he mentioned that. He said, since I have Mass Effect on the brain, Tin Man the Living Starship reminded me a lot of the Reapers. Oh, okay. Good pull. I like that connection. He says it must be exhausting for Tam to not be able to turn off his mind reading. That would be one of the worst superpowers to have since you'd be privy to so many dark and disturbing thoughts that you'd just be better off not knowing. Next up is Hollow Pursuits, Live Long and Prosper, Alex. Yeah, I hear you. And that actor, who was that actor again? Harry Grainer. Like he really did portray like the tortured, manic, and absolutely just like kind of destroyed nature of somebody who can't turn it off. Like that man just he did not look. He was very uncomfortable and did not see a moment's peace whatsoever the entire episode. He played that extremely well in that regard. Like you actually felt better for him at the end, where it's like, okay, finally he's in a peaceful situation with Tin Man. The way that that was resolved in that regard. So yeah, I'm with you on that one for sure. But that's it for Alex's emails this week. Thank you for sending in your feedback, Alex. Looking forward to more. And hopefully you heard all the good vibes and all the good messages from our other listeners as far as their congratulations on your fatherhood. And we understand if that does draw on your time with respect to watch updates and whatnot and so forth, for sure. And finally, we close out this extended flight chat session with Jared Cardos. He's got 3 emails. His first one that he sent back on June 10th is titled A Great Argument About the Similarities of Snyder and Gunn's Superman. He says, I'll probably have a regular email for your episodes later in the week. He did. But before that, I wanted to share with you a great thread I saw on the Superman subreddit that I think does some excellent writing about how the differences in these two versions of Superman come from the tone and vibe. I can't say it 100% works yet since we've yet to see Gunn's movie, but I think there's something to it. And this post from Reddit says, Snyder and Gunn agree on Superman's struggles, they just disagree on the vibe. And it says there's a weird narrative forming that James Gunn's Superman is a total rejection of Snyder's version, like the two visions are enemies. But honestly, that's not really true. Both are telling the same kind of story, a Superman who's trying to hold on to hope in a world that doesn't make it easy. What they differ in is tone, and in one key idea. Do you need to strip away the classic Superman corniness to tell a compelling modern story? Snyder's take. Hope is earned through struggle. Snyder's Superman is someone the world treats like a symbol, and often with suspicion or fear. But the movie never forgets he's a man. A son who loves his mom, a boyfriend who loves Lois, a guy who once saved a school bus and just wants to help people. His story is about isolation, responsibility, and pressure, but also about choosing to do good anyway, even when the world doesn't trust you. That's the tragedy of Clark in Man of Steel and BVS. Not that he's a god, but that he's a man seen as something more than he is, and crushed by it. Snyder doesn't hate the softer side of Superman, he just shows it in private moments, in farms, in quiet scenes, in looks exchanged with Lois or with Martha. The hope isn't loud, it's fragile and hard-earned. Gunn's take. You can keep the heart on your sleeve. Gunn's Superman is still in a complicated world, still trying to figure things out, still trying to be good. But Gunn believes you don't have to lose the classic charm to tell that story. He doesn't cut out the smiling, the dorkiness, the awkward kindness. His Superman can be buff and cool and still be the guy who loves corny jokes and believes in people. Where Snyder internalized the hope, Gunn externalizes it. Where Snyder's Clark hides behind silence, Gunn's Clark might stumble over his words and smile through it. It's not a correction, it's a different flavor of the same message. Same journey, different voice. At the end of the day, both are asking the same question: how do you be good in a world that's lost its way? Snyder answers by struggling through pain and still choosing to do the right thing. Gunn answers by embracing who you are and not being afraid to show kindness. There's no right answer. They're just telling the same story through two different hearts. And so that's the entirety of the subreddit post. Jared, thank you for sharing that, because I think that's very telling, and we will find out for certain in less than 3 weeks if that is the case. But I will tell you that based on the vibe that we're seeing in the trailers, I think this is closer to what is actually the case than not. I really do, because it just, to me, for all the people that just automatically think, oh, because the colors are brighter, oh, because, there's a dog and, it seems like a lighter tone, that, oh, this is a complete rejection of the darkness. And that's such surface level trolling bullshit. Because when you see all the times that he's vulnerable, and we've seen plenty of times already that he's vulnerable. We've seen him bruised, broken, and bloodied, where Krypto's got to drag him into the Fortress of Solitude. We've seen Ultraman smash his head into the concrete while he's being arrested. We've seen him tossed around by kaijus and like all the damage to his costume and his eyes and whatnot. Like we've seen him battle damaged and vulnerable more than enough in just the TV spots and the trailers. So to me, I think it is definitely some strife that he's going to go through, and some struggles, and the world is not as favorable to him. But like this piece says, same journey, different voice. It's just telling the same story in a different way, and it's not like Superman the movie. Like Superman the movie didn't show him like this. Superman the movie was very much more like, not saccharine, but just like more, I don't know, safer, not as vulnerable. He wasn't shown to be as vulnerable. And it's not that he showed no vulnerability, but Christopher Reeve's Superman was not shown to be as vulnerable in Superman the movie or even in Superman 2. He's more vulnerable in Superman 2 than he is in the first film, but still not to the level that we saw in Man of Steel, and certainly not to the level that we're seeing even so far in these trailers and TV spots for Gunn's film. So we still got to wait and see, but I would tend to lean towards this take is probably more correct than not. And we will find that out, for me, starting on July 8th, for many of us on July 8th, and for all the rest of us on July 10th and 11th for sure. So can't wait for that. We're getting closer and closer. But thank you for sending that out. That's a great Reddit post. Reddit is not completely a cesspool. Reddit is not completely horrible. Reddit is not completely stupid and disgusting. There are some gems at Reddit, and Jared just found one for sure. So now let's get to his official email that he sent on June 14th called Flightcast 209, Summer Games Fest, and more. He says, "Hey Ray, hope you're doing well. I appreciate your latest Flightcast episode in regards to the end of Squadcast Media. It's something that isn't very surprising, as it's been a long time since the last regular episodes, but it's still saddening all the same. I don't fully remember when and how I started watching, but it was for a long time a nice respite and source of news for the DCEU and the greater Snyder Cut movement. Without it, I don't think I would have been as glued in and seen all the facets of what went down, and probably wouldn't have found its spin-offs, including a certain little podcast called the Flightcast. Hope everyone else involved is doing well," he says, "and I hope they know that they made some incredible things and it ending doesn't take any of it away." Guys, I really do appreciate all the kind words, and I will endeavor to try and share this with the rest of the network, so that they know exactly how you guys feel if you haven't already sent them messages and emails, which I know many of you have commented on them as well, for sure. But thank you for the kind words. Definitely. Greatly appreciate that. So during the past weekend, he says, there was a smorgasbord of different streams and events to show off upcoming new games, kind of collectively referred to by one of its biggest events, Summer Game Fest. This was a week or so ago. We didn't get a lot of crazy big announcements on some popular franchises, but there was some cool stuff, and I wanted to shout a few of them out, he said. First, I wanted to bring your attention to something that can be played right now. It was announced that the most recent big Final Fantasy games, which had been PlayStation and then PC exclusive, will also be coming to Xbox, with the Final Fantasy VII Remake Rebirth games coming later this year, and Final Fantasy 16? Yeah, I think I read that right, 16, dropping this past weekend. Yeah, XVI is 16, is it not? I'm pretty sure if I remember Roman numerals. All right, Final Fantasy XVI, in case I got it wrong. He says, and while the Final Fantasy VII games are great, I would also especially recommend XVI 16 to you. It's an action RPG with combat that harkens to Devil May Cry, set in a world that I would almost describe as Game of Thrones meets Godzilla. It's set in a fantasy world called Valisthea, where magic comes from mysterious crystals that are used as natural resources, and people who are attuned to use magic themselves are used as slave labor. But select individuals, often those of royal blood, are chosen to bear the power of being dominants, which can transform into powerful icons to defend their realms. Intriguing. The story involves Clive Rosfield, he says, who is the older brother and bodyguard of one of these dominants, and after a massive betrayal, is committed to a mission of revenge that becomes much bigger than any could have thought possible. It's an incredible game with a compelling story and world to explore, incredible performances, and super fun action with some of the best set pieces and boss battles I've seen, especially when you take on the role of these icons and have massive monster versus monster battles that shake the very foundation of the world. The best part is, he says, you can try it rather risk-free, because there is a free demo where you can play through the prologue first few hours of the game. I remember playing it when it first dropped on PS5, and if I wasn't curious before, I was insanely invested by the time it ended. I recommend giving it a shot if you find time and interest for it. I'll have to remember that. All right, Final Fantasy 16. I'm pretty sure it's 16. I'm pretty sure I'm getting that number right. Cool. But one of the bigger announcements in terms of new games, he says, is 007's First Light, a new James Bond game from IO Interactive, most famous for their Hitman games. It looks like a modern reinterpretation of Bond fresh from getting his license to kill. This announcement trailer mostly showed off the cutscenes, which all look fantastic, but going by what little gameplay we do see in their past games, it seems like they're combining the stealth and gameplay feel of their Hitman games with the big set pieces and spectacle of the Bond movies, which feels like a great fit. Looking forward to this one, he says. There was also The Expanse: Osiris Reborn, a new action shooter RPG set in the Expanse universe. It's developed by a team called Owlcat Games, which while I haven't played any of their games, he says, I've heard good things about their work in games like Warhammer 40k, Rogue Trader, and are renowned for making deep CRPGs full of big branching story choices, and from the footage and what Owlcat has said, it feels like a spiritual successor to Mass Effect, and while the next game of that is still in development, this looks like it will scratch that itch very well in the meantime. The announcement also inspired me finally to start going through the Expanse books, he says. I'm about halfway through the first book, in audiobook form at least, and so far it's been really good. An excellent, fully formed universe with a lot of solid characters and lots of intrigue. I have not read the books or watched the show, although I bought the show in physical media form on sale about a year or so ago. I just have not sat down to watch it. It's on the list. We'll see when I get to it. He says, while there were a lot of promising new games, These were the ones that most grabbed my attention, and in the interest of not making this too big, I'll move from game trailers to film TV trailers, starting with Ironheart, which got a shorter but still interesting trailer that shows some of Riri's backstory and hints at a possible mix of science and magic. I doubt this is something that will stick, but it should be definitely interesting to see. I haven't watched that trailer yet. I've seen it, but there was other stuff going on, and I'm kind of in Superman DC mode. Although we will be talking Ironheart on the next Flight Box. There's no doubt. There's no question about that. But yeah, hadn't seen that one yet. But I've heard some of the same things that you just mentioned with respect to that. Jared also said, I would say that there was also a Superman trailer, but it's more accurate to say that there has been a glut of them. I'll focus on the one that came the same as the pre-order tickets, which was interesting because it had the most focus on Lex and really highlights how personal and spiteful he is towards Superman and makes me curious to find out just how far he'll go with his schemes. Yes, heard 50-50 on it because I know some people that don't really care for it, and I know some other people that really do care for it and really appreciate the rivalry that Lex displays in it. But yeah, we're getting close. And I feel you. It's not necessarily even a glut of trailers. It's like a glut of clips. It's a glut of spots. The marketing, seriously. This is the most marketing we've seen for a DC film in a very long time. I can't think of a DC film that has been marketed quite to this level. Maybe not since the Batman films. And we're talking maybe TDK trilogy, maybe even before that, with respect to marketing on this scale for a DC movie. Seriously, I can't think of another one. Certainly not in the DC films era, from like the last 9 to 10 years or so. Anyway. He says, finally, I wanted to shout out a new movie that I went through, and that's Predator Killer of Killers, the new animated anthology movie featuring the alien species coming into contact with different expert warriors during various periods. I don't think I'll spoil too much, but it looks spectacular with expert design and gorgeously rendered action and spectacle. There isn't a lot of dialogue in some of these stories, so we do a great job telling the story in mostly visuals and the music, and all the stories come together in a very satisfying way. I hope this is considered a success because I would love to see more of these. There are still plenty of interesting time periods they can draw from after all. And that'll do it for me this week. Looking forward to your future episodes. Well, that was his first email that he sent. I heard Trachtenberg is involved with Killer of Killers. I could be wrong on that, but I thought he was. And that just reminds me that I still need to sit down and watch Prey at some point. I really do. I've got Hulu. I don't know why. It's on the list. Oh, the list. Too much shit to watch. There just really is. All right, so that was Jared's first email that he sent on the 14th. So now let's get to, or rather his second email that he sent on the 14th. So now let's get to his third and final email for this particular week that he just sent on Friday. This one's called Guns Interview and Shows in the MCU. I'm a poet and didn't know it. Okay. Jared says, before I get into your last few episodes, I wanted to shout out a new movie, The Day the World Blew Up, a Looney Tunes movie. This is surprisingly the first fully animated feature film of this franchise about Daffy Duck and Porky Pig about to lose their childhood home and having to, horror upon horrors, get jobs to try to save it, and in the process uncover a massive alien conspiracy. It's very funny, with some amazing animation that can do both zany to borderline horror with some of its alien designs, and has an overall really solid story with some twists I wasn't expecting. It's just a shame that it didn't get a full-throated, confident release from Warner Brothers because I think it could have done much better in the box office than it did. All right, I have not heard about this, so clearly they didn't market it all as well as perhaps you felt it should have been marketed, but hey, not a surprise from these studios these days, right? He says, as for your latest Flight cast, I also really liked that interview with Gunn. I didn't expect how real and philosophical it got at times. Some thoughts from that interview. He says, I am curious as to what the movie project was that could have been canceled. Looking at what's been said before, there are some candidates. Gunn himself has said that the Authority has had problems, but I imagine that with the engineer being in Superman, that's probably a priority to get that to work. Also, I think the fact that we only know the Untitled Bane Deathstroke movie only being known as the Untitled Bane Deathstroke movie might be a sign. There's also Sergeant Rock, which I think Gunn talks about the script needing work in that in Entertainment Weekly article, so I think that might be the strongest candidate, but I suppose we'll find out eventually. Yeah, there's part of me that doesn't necessarily want to find out because I feel like now that we're in this position where it is DC Studios autonomously operating, these are the types of decisions that Gunn and Safran can make, and we don't have to worry about extra meddling. We don't have to worry about Zaslav and like anybody from Warner Brothers Picture Group stepping in and saying, hey, terrible idea, da 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 da. We don't have to worry about them being superseded. These are decisions that, they should be making themselves and probably are making themselves in that regard. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure we will find out at some point, but either way, it is what it is. He says, And yeah, with the trim down of Superman and Supergirl's titles, I'm guessing that the Brave and the Bold will also get a name change. Considering he's talked about how Damian Wayne as Robin will play a big role, I could see them deciding to rename the movie Batman and Robin. I think at this point the general audience no longer holds that 97 movie with much ire. Or, since Gunn has talked about being inspired by Grant Morrison's run on Batman, they could use the name of the first arc of their run, Batman and Son. I could see that. I could definitely see that. Batman and Robin might be a better choice marketing wise, although, it depends on, do we have enough distance? Is there enough distance to where, like, younger generations and whatnot don't remember or aren't thinking about the movie with Arnold and, Uma Thurman and whatnot? Are they not thinking about that? Can they separate enough from that? We'll see. Either way, I think either title could work, truthfully, for different reasons. Jared says, and as for the MCU shows, I also had a lot of fun with Hawkeye. I can see why it's considered hokey in some ways, but I think it's executed very well, and honestly, I think Christmas movies / shows can get away with that a little more. They really nailed the dynamic between Clint and Kate, and it has some of the best stuff with Yelena until Thunderbolts. Definitely a great show to put on during the holidays in general. Also, he said, since you talked about it a fair bit when talking about Hawkeye, I'll say that I think you underestimate just how much setup they've done with Young Avengers characters. It's way more than just Ms. Marvel and Ironheart, who were technically never Young Avengers, but a different teen team called Champions among Miles Morales and more, but I'm willing to let them in. Cassie Lang / Stature has been around since Ant-Man. Then they set up characters like Eli Bradley / Patriot in Falcon and the Winter Soldier and America Chavez and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. In a way, they also set up Iron Lad and Kid Loki and another who I won't spoil since he's on a show you've yet to watch. I'm guessing that's Agatha all along. But while I get and agree with you on wanting to see the X-Men be established in the MCU, to borrow a bit from the future Doctor Doom, is it too much to want both? Honestly, Jared, I think in this case it is, because I really don't think you're going to sell Disney on the idea of doing both. First of all, look at how they've sidelined the Young Avengers plan to this point just to go all in on Avengers Doomsday and bring back RDJ to be Doctor Doom and doing all of that. That's further delaying X-Men for me. And yeah, it is still pushing Young Avengers to the side, right? And then, I hate to say it, but their reluctance or basically how late they waited to promote Ironheart, and we haven't heard a whole lot, if anything at all, about the return of Ms. Marvel or the return of Kate Bishop or anything like that. Like, I'm just not hearing or seeing anything that leads me to believe that Young Avengers is anything close to a priority for them. And I hear what you're saying in terms of the other characters that they've set up in those other movies, but I'm not hearing a lot about that either, right? It's, Cassie Lang was in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, which bombed. Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness didn't bomb, but that's still like 3 years ago, and we haven't seen anything else with respect to that. Eli Bradley / Patriot and Falcon and Winter Soldier, great, but now I wonder if Disney, because again, all of that was also in the Chapek era, and I wonder if Disney, especially now with what Brave New World did, earlier this year, are they rethinking anything connected to the Falcon and the Winter Soldier? I don't know. I don't have the confidence. If they decide, if that's what they're doing, and if they set up those breadcrumbs for that purpose, and if they end up doing that, great, Jared. I'm certainly rooting for that, but I do not have the confidence that that is what they're doing at all. I really don't, to be honest with you. But we'll see. I mean, they might surprise me, but at this point, for the next couple of years, they're all in on bringing the band back together and bringing in some of the Fox X-Men people as well to really stoke up the nostalgia and get those Deadpool and Wolverine numbers, if you will, in that regard, right? Like, I feel like that's what their approach is at this point. And we'll see going forward. But no, I just do not have the confidence. I don't. And I could be wrong. And I hope I am wrong. I would love to see them do Young Avengers, because I'm with you. Is it too much to ask for both? It's not too much to ask for both, but I think it's too much to expect Disney to do both. I don't think they're going to. I think they're going to pick one, and I don't think Young Avengers is the one they're going to pick. And I'm not rooting for that. I want them to do that. Of course, I'm primarily rooting for X-Men, but I'm not anti-Young Avengers, especially since they've introduced so many of the characters as you pointed out. But I just don't think that's solid enough for me to be confident that they're going to do that personally. But that's just my thoughts on it, subjectively speaking. It's all subjective, of course. Jared says, also really enjoyed Echo. I was thinking of it more like a crime drama, but a Western works even better. Great action and drama. The only thing I didn't like, he says, was the climax with the power reveal. The character in the comics and really any other place she showed up has no superpowers like that, but rather a master martial artist with photographic memory and reflexes. Look, I get that every adaptation is an Elseworld and all of that, but this feels a little beyond the pale. It would be like if there was a Batman movie that plays like what you would expect from a Batman movie, but in the climax, he's suddenly able to become a swarm of bats. It just feels out of nowhere, but still, I like the rest of it. I'll tell you the biggest difference I would say, Jared, between that and Batman is that, as I pointed out in Flightbox, this is a representational situation, right? This is a case where her heritage, it was a heritage power. It came from her heritage being an indigenous person, plus being Latino, right? Like having the Mexican American heritage in addition to that, right? So it's founded upon her heritage, and that's why I think you could, number one, get away with it. Number two, absolutely present it in an Elseworlds scenario, right? Like this, in this MCU, Echo does have an ability to call upon the strength of her ancestors. I didn't see it as a huge deal, right? And certainly for me, a layperson that has never read Echo in the comics, it's not a big deal for me at all. And it won't be a big deal for the general audience at all if they were to continue with Echo having that power going forward, right? And again, from a representation standpoint, I think it's awesome. I think it's fantastic. So to me, it doesn't feel. I mean, the powers, the fact that she didn't display them in Hawkeye, that feels out of nowhere. But if it's something that she gradually built because she went back home, and she was having the visions because her ancestors saw that she was in trouble and wanted to help her, like I can buy that. I can, as somebody that hasn't read the comics. I'm sure that comics fans and experts on the source material have an issue with it. But again, from a general audience standpoint, it does not bother me because of the heritage that it does display in that regard. I think that's definitely a nice touch and a way to get around that, truthfully. Depending on whether they want to go forward with the Echo character for anything else going into the universe. But and then he says, finally, there's She-Hulk, which was pretty fun overall. Tatiana Maslany was excellent as Jennifer, did great with the drama and comedy involved with the character. The CGI was a bit hit or miss, he says, but I think it worked where it counted, making Jen feel expressive and present despite not really being there. There was some great plots by both episode and episode, the sort of overall. Hang on, I wasn't sure how that would. There was some great plots both episode by episode. Oh, okay, I get it. There were some great plots both episode by episode and the sort of overall season plot. Okay, there we go. I kind of wish there was more focus on the legal aspect, he says, because that is some of the more fun elements of the character and her world, but the personal arc with Jen accepting She-Hulk as part of her was done well. And that final sequence getting to Kevin was really fun and felt like a modern version of a gag from John Byrne's run on the book, which he sent a picture of this, and this looks like She-Hulk literally running through a television schedule, like a printed TV guide television schedule that has like Fantastic Four, Havoc, Wolverine, Iron Man, Marvel Fanfare, Nick Fury versus Shield. Yeah, she's running through it, like through the pages. And they're like, She-Hulk, what? How? Where is this place? Don't ask questions. We're heavily into the zen of comic books here. Oh, it's a comic book. Okay, I get it. Comic book listings. All right. It only works if you don't think about it. Now follow me, all of you. Okay, yeah, that's all right. Fair enough. Yes, definitely. Okay, see, there you go. If there is precedent for her doing stuff like this in the comics, then that totally works for her to do that the way that she did it in the season finale of the show. Absolutely. Again, screw all the complaints with respect to that, personally, subjectively speaking, in that regard. But Jared says, overall, it felt like a solid first season of a TV show, and I do hope we get a second season at some point, or at least more Tatiana as Jen. Maybe an Avengers Doomsday? I don't know. Depends on what their plans are for that. He says, and just before I hit send, we got some big casting news for Spider-Man Brand New Day. Zendaya and Jacob Batalon are coming back as MJ and Ned Leeds, which is good to see. Hopefully this will stop the whole Sadie Sink is going to play the real MJ hogwash I've been seeing. I've seen that sentiment, not the Sadie Sink sentiment, but I've seen a few people echo the same sentiment you had, Jared. And to me, it just, that really is disturbing, to be honest with you. The whole Sadie Sink is really going to play MJ deal. Because to me, not only is that rooted in, just fan expectations and trying to set things to, personal fantasy, I also wonder if there's a tinge of racism with that. I really do. And people are going to be like, well, why have you got to bring that up? Well, because Zendaya is not white. Because Zendaya is not the standard white girl with red hair like MJ or like Mary Jane Watson is portrayed in the comics, or how she was portrayed in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films with Kirsten Dunst, or even in the deleted scenes from the Amazing Spider-Man films where Shailene Woodley played MJ. I've seen those scenes, or like I've seen those images rather of her playing MJ in that regard. And like so this idea, there's always been kind of this resistance, not kind of. There's been this resistance to the idea of Zendaya's, of her her Michelle character being the actual MJ, right, for the MCU. And yeah, I'm sorry, but when I look at any indication, like any people that was looking at like Sadie Sink saying, "Oh, well, she's going to be the real MJ," so you're trying to reset what they've already done with the character. Listen, they already decided to make MJ not white, not with red hair. You trying to reset it back feels like racism. It does. It absolutely feels like racism. And I'll go ahead and say that out loud. If people want to disagree with that, that's your business. But I'm sorry. I'm looking at Sadie Sink, and I haven't seen anything that Sadie Sink has been in, and this is certainly not her fault with respect to that. But any fan that has been saying that, right, I'm glad that this lays waste to that, because I feel like a lot of them are just coming from a place of bigotry with respect to that. Oh, they screwed up MJ by changing her race and nationality or ethnicity, and now they're going to fix it with this wholesome, white, red-haired actress. That's not fair to either Sadie Sink, and it's certainly not fair to Zendaya. So frankly, those people can kiss the blackest part of my ass. I'm just being 100% on that. I really don't care. Like, that's one where it's like, you know what? It just, no, that's awful. That really is. Because it's, why? At this point, three movies. Three movies of MJ of Zendaya as MJ, and you want to pull this shit with respect to, oh, you're hoping for a reset. Oh, unbelievable. Ridiculous. Stupid. And I also don't think Marvel Studios would do that. I don't think that Kevin Feige would do that at all. So, yeah, hopefully that racist bullshit does get laid to waste, right? And I know people have, I don't know if anybody's necessarily suggested that, but I am. I'm saying that. That's what it sounds like to me, truthfully. If people want to disagree with me on that, it's your business. It's all subjective. But that's, I feel kind of strongly about that, especially, with recent stuff in the real world, to be honest with you. But Jared says, but the big news. Yes, I did hear about this. The big news is Jon Bernthal is going to be reprising his role as the Punisher, which was surprising but welcome. For a while, I kept seeing these rumors about this movie where the studios were struggling about whether it should be multiversal like No Way Home or more grounded and street level, and I feel like Frank being involved tips things in the grounded level, but it's still early days, so who knows. I'll send it here for this one. Looking forward to your upcoming episodes. Thank you, Jared, as always, for the insight. Thank you, Jared, as always, for the feedback. And yeah, I did hear about Jon Bernthal, and I know a lot of people. I know Brent sent us a message in the Squadcast media chat. He's excited for it. The idea of Spider-Man and Punisher being together. He wished that Daredevil would get into the mix because he really wants to see Spider-Man and Daredevil. He wants to see that come together. The one scene that he got in No Way Home with Matt Murdock talking as a lawyer to Peter Parker, Tom Holland's Peter Parker, right? Like Charlie Cox and Tom Holland in that scene together, like that was nirvana for him. It might still be his favorite scene of No Way Home, to be honest with you. But yeah, like still to have Jon Bernthal in there as the Punisher, that's just more of the connective tissue, and continues to signify that we are in a different era with respect to Marvel television. It's not the Netflix era where it was a one-way street where the shows would acknowledge the movies and the movies would never acknowledge the shows. Now we're seeing acknowledgement, and again, it's a Spider-Man film, right? Because Charlie Cox's Matt Murdock was in Spider-Man No Way Home, and now we got Jon Bernthal's Frank Castle, aka the Punisher, that's going to be in Brand New Day, another Spider-Man film. So hey, maybe the Spider-Man films are our definite ultimate connective tissue with respect to what's going on between the shows and the movies. Not that there hasn't been other connective tissue in these MCU TV shows rather. I mean, we did talk about the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and Isaiah Bradley was in that show, and he obviously was in Brave New World, right? So there's other connective tissue happening now, going back and forth between the shows and the movies that we did not have during the Marvel Netflix era, and we have that now. And yes, it is great to see that. So that is good news. That's fantastic news, and you know what? We look forward to that, and we'll see how it goes with respect to everything as far as news and development on that front. But thank you as always, Jared, for the feedback. It is indeed greatly appreciated. All right, and there you have it. That officially is going to do it for this week's episode of Flight Chat. It is gargantuanly past my bedtime. In fact, it's probably nap time at this point before I have to go to work early in the morning. But thank you so much for all of your feedback. Thank you so much for sending stuff in. Thankfully, we got to get caught up on everything from all the stuff before Father's Day and all the new stuff here for this particular week that you guys send in emails. Thank you to everybody that sent in emails this week. Thank you to John R., of course, for all of his emails. Thank you to Amari Daniels, Sam Otten joining us again for some Superman thoughts. Thank you to Alex De Silva, Jared Cardos, Larry Griffin Jr., and Nick Nicholson for making a return, Wally Mustafa, our resident Superman super fan, and Amar Osama, of course, for his great Star Trek breakdowns and all of his thoughts on Rebels and everything else and whatnot. Thank you to everybody that sent in emails. And of course, for those of you that wish to contribute to the feedback circle and send in some more stuff for the next Flight Chat episode, which should be on regular schedule, you know where to find me on Threads and on Instagram at the Flightcast, on Blue Sky at Flightcast. You can comment under the posting for this episode at the Flightcast YouTube page. There's the Flightcast Facebook page as well. And of course, I can be reached by email at ray@theflightcast.com. All right, take care. Stay safe out there. Have a great week if you can. And I will see you all next time. Take it easy.